The protagonist barely opened his eyes. His body was a little wounded, so he needed help. He thought he saw a real ghost in front of him. When the thought occurred to him that the ghost could actually take the body, the hero was even glad, since that way the ghost could help him get to the hospital. The ghost stood not far from the boy. He grabbed her by the tip of her old worn-out dress and began to repeatedly beg the mistress to be possessed by his body. The girl's gaze was bewildered. In her eyes, the guy was doing odd things she couldn't understand as from a living person. After a brief pause, the ghost coughed, preparing to speak to the guy and explain herself. The apparition approached him to ask if he had seen the rope where she ended her life, as she needed it for an important matter. The protagonist began to immediately claim that he didn't care at all about the rope. Right now, all he cared about was her possessing his body. After his words, the guy threw himself into the ghost's embrace, which was incredibly calming to the protagonist's state of mind, as her body wafted a pleasant coolness. The girl immediately tried to shove the guy away from her. His gesture really pissed off the heroine, as it seemed impudent and very strange behavior. Just then, she noticed that the man appeared to be without pants and was only in his underwear, which further perplexed the girl. She immediately rushed to run away from this strange acquaintance, but he began to run after her to convince her to be possessed by the body. No sooner had the ghost fled than she saw this young man above her head, from whom she heard the words that she would not run away. The protagonist was almost beside the ghost. He reached forward, trying to reach out and stop her. Suddenly, the ghost felt an unpleasant sensation that pierced her entire body. The young man managed to slip his hand through the ghost's body as if into a portal. But in the next instant, the guy found himself in an unknown space that was filled with water. His gaze was as if tired because of being in an unknown and strange place. He was very cold and wet here, and without trying to resist the strange sensations. Soon he opened his eyes, though it was hard to do so. He saw a long, unfamiliar corridor in front of him, and it was still night outside the windows. As he looked at his hands, he saw that for some reason, he was in a woman's body wearing the same old and shabby dress that the girl's ghost had been wearing. It was as if the young man felt out of place in his body, and apparently it was for good reason. Looking in the mirror, in the reflection he saw himself in the body of a ghost of a girl, which misled the protagonist. The young man opened his eyes wide to scream, but it was as if something inside him was preventing him from doing so. Just then, a loud scream echoed throughout the hallway as the guy suddenly realized that he had moved into the body of a ghost, and had become one himself. The protagonist could not believe that in the mirror he was seeing not his previous body, but the ghost he had become. Soon, having calmed down, the young man began to scrutinize his reflection in the mirror, as if trying to find there the answer to his many questions. As he approached the mirror, he reached out his hand toward it, trying to convince himself that it wasn't a dream, and he had really become like this. He realized that if the ghost had taken over his body, he would have stayed in his appearance, but for some reason he now looked like a ghost. The protagonist turned to the ghost he saw on the other side of the mirror with a smile and asked why she wasn't talking. Was she being modest? The young man suggested that it was because he had terrible karma and she was afraid to talk, after which he convinced her that he was a very kind man. Just like that, the guy's body literally fell out of the ghost just as it hit him. From the suddenness of such an event, he didn't have time to react and fell to the floor, hitting it lightly. He immediately felt dizzy. Suddenly he remembered that he had a cold, so his body was in a bad state, and so was his well-being. The protagonist began to pester the ghost girl again to take possession of his body and send him to the hospital. But the girl was even afraid of him. Knowing that the ghost would reject his request, the boy threw himself into her arms again to gain her consent. Already in the next instant, the guy's body was in the very same place where there was only cold water. A couple seconds later, the protagonist felt himself being in the girl's body again. Opening his eyes, his gaze seemed rather sad at the situation, as his life was now on the line and the main task at the moment was to survive. The young man thanked the ghost profusely for his help, albeit uncoordinated. He also promised that as soon as he recovered, he would find her rope so that she could cleanse her soul. After his promises, the protagonist rose a short distance above the floor to begin moving forward. When he stretched his arm forward, he managed to slip it through the glass door, which is quite characteristic of ghosts. The young man was pleasantly surprised that he too now had the ability to pass through walls, just like the ghost that possessed him. Seems like a pretty good thing when a ghost possesses a person. The young man felt great. Heading forward on the road to the hospital, it occurred to the protagonist that it might be a good idea if the ghost agreed to possess his body more often. Suddenly, his calm, easy flight was disturbed by a woman's voice coming from the direction of the bushes, a girl asking someone not to do anything to her. Coming closer, the protagonist remembered that teachers usually go to this park to catch students who are hooliganizing in the bushes. Do they even do this on vacation? But as soon as the young man reached the place from which the scream came, he was incredibly startled by what he saw. As it turned out, everything went to intimacy without the girl's agreement, which is already considered a crime. Seeing the girl, The protagonist immediately recognized that this is the same beauty who was the owner of a small cafe in their school. That man, who was clearly much older than the girl, did not react in any way to requests to get behind her. The stranger didn't even respond to the girl's pleas to not do what he was up to. Seeing the man's face, the boy recognized that it was the school principal. But how could such a decent-looking man do such things in the park? Suddenly, the guy had a brilliant idea to record everything on his phone, because such a chance falls every day. When he picked up the phone, the ghost of the girl made the same move. Suddenly, the protagonist felt someone's touch on his body from the back. The young man was incredibly frightened, as he didn't think there was anyone else here who could touch him. He heard a man's voice in his direction. From the place where the young man stood, only leaves scattered in different directions from so abruptly disappearing from the spot. Making a sharp turn, the ghost turned around and stood in a pose ready to strike. The young man immediately asked a lot of questions like who the stranger was. In front of him stood an unfamiliar man who was also a ghost. It was a stranger with a wide knife blade stabbed into the head of a ghost who looked rather calm. After calming down a bit, the protagonist noticed the stranger's calmness, which even surprised him. As he came closer, the young man tried to touch him to see who was standing in front of him. But a moment later, there was a loud scream from the protagonist, who was incredibly frightened by the presence of an unfamiliar ghost. Out of fear, he punched the ghost in the face with his fist, which he did quite well. Suddenly, the ghost even flew off into the bushes, unable to resist such a strong blow. The young man froze in place in an attempt to accept that his blow had actually made the ghost fly that far away. It seemed to have immense strength if that was the case. The principal suddenly heard strange rustling in the bushes not far from him. He immediately started shouting to the stranger to come out and not hide. But despite his boldness, there was still clearly anxiety and fear in his voice. Just then, the ghost of a girl looked out from behind the bushes. The young man with a smile warned the principal that it was already okay, because he just needed to get rid of the ghost. Seeing the ghost, the girl suddenly screamed and pointed her hand at it. A wild fear was visible in her gaze. From such unexpected adrenaline and fear in the body, the girl instantly lost consciousness. The director literally froze at this time. He couldn't even move aside, because the man recognized the ghost's appearance at once. It was a girl named Chao Xiaoming whom he knew when she was still alive. The man felt the cold gaze of the ghost of the girl, who silently did not take her eyes off him. From what he saw, the man lost control of his body and collapsed to his knees due to the insane fear that overcame his body. He started begging Xiaoming Ghost to let him go, and also claimed that he had realized his mistake long ago, and now this feeling was eating him up from the inside. The girl with the crazed look accused the principal of leaving her life because of him. The protagonist suddenly realized that these are not his words, but the words of a ghost. It seems that she is now controlling the guy's body. The principal reminded her that he was not the one who had hurt her, so she had to come after the guilty parties. That day, he hid the crime of 2 children from rich families so that it would not damage the school's reputation. The protagonist could not believe that such a seemingly decent man could be so mean. Instead of helping to punish the criminals, he threatened the victim of the crime. Although the girl left the world of the living, but her name is tainted. Everyone believed that she put her hands on herself because she had many men, all because of the principal. The man began to lament that he had parents and children, and was too young to pass away. The protagonist realized that the director deserved the worst punishment, but the girl from the cafe would get in trouble because of it. The young man told Xiaoming that there was no point in taking the principal's life right now. It would be better if she sent him to the police to confess everything and clear her name. Xiaoming put the principal in front of a choice, and he must go to the police, confess everything, and clear her name, but the man began to wave his head in fear in rejection of this task. After he said that, Xiaoming's gaze became insanely aggressive, as if she would finish with him right now. This principal is only worried about his reputation. It seems like the only option is to teach him a lesson to make him understand something. As soon as he thought of options to punish him, and then it occurred to him to tie a rope around him, suddenly Xiaoming's body began to act according to his thoughts. Controlling her strength, Xiaoming sent the rope towards the principal, wrapping it around his throat as tightly as possible. The man began to gradually suffocate from the increasingly less air in his lungs. The rope hung over him, lifting the principal's body higher, thus making him gasp. The man tried to jerk his body and get out, but it was no use. The protagonist tried to stop the girl, picking the right words not to hurt even more. After listening to the guy, Xiaoming let go of her control of the force and let the principal go, as they had no option in their plans to finish with him now. The principal tried to push the shirt further and further away from his throat, greedily inhaling air. The girl warned him that this was his last chance to reveal the truth, or else he would simply pass away. The girl would have done it even now, but the master told her to stop. At this time, the main character was slightly surprised that Xiaoming called him a master and listened to his words. The principal jumped up and ran toward town, screaming for her not to do anything to him, and he would tell her the whole truth right now. The young man told the girl to follow him, as they would be in big trouble if he ran to find an exorcist instead of the police. When the girl answered him, the guy was very surprised that she could hear him. But why was she silent all this time? Xiaoming said that he had completely taken control of her, so without his permission, she couldn't speak. But after all, the girl was a ghost and he was a man, and it should be exactly the opposite, and she, not the young man, should control the body. To this, Xiaoming said that if she had possessed his body, they would have taken on his appearance instead of a girl. This is where the guy really accepted the fact that he actually penetrated and possessed the ghost's body, instead of her doing it. While the boys were talking amongst themselves, the principal was in the meantime running off into town through the high fence that was around the park. Xiaoming said with an aggressive look that they urgently needed to go after him, or else he might disappear from sight. But just as the girl was ready to dash to follow, she was immediately stopped by the sudden realization of another important matter. The guys didn't want to leave this girl alone in a dark park unconscious. And then there's that ghost with the big head. Xiaomi offered to carry her if the master was worried about this girl. But when she woke up, her neck would be a little sore. But that seemed like a small thing compared to what could happen. The ghost lifted the girl thanks to her strength so that it was more comfortable to take her. When the ghost took the girl, the protagonist was shocked by her beauty and her body was just incredible. At this time, the director had reached the town and decided to stop where he was to catch his breath. Suddenly, he felt someone's presence behind him. He was immediately covered in cold sweat at the suggestion of who might be there. When Xiaomi lightly blew on the man's neck to make him feel a chill, he immediately started screaming with fear that ran through his entire body. In the next second, he was already quite a distance away from the ghost while the guys taunted him. The young man made this gesture since he remembered many short stories. It made him believe that this was the most effective way to scare someone. It was still deep night outside, the red moon gradually moving to the other side. After running for a bit, the headmaster stopped again to rest from his arduous escape as the ghost headed after him with a sly smile. Suddenly, there was a loud male shout that ordered the girl to stand still and move no further. The young man looked forward with a surprised look to see whose shout it was. In front of him was the same ghost with the big head, and next to him was another huge ghost. They had a beef with her about the fact that she had already managed to cross the line and beat up the huge ghost's subordinate. He immediately started waving his hands, aiming at Xiaoming. The ghost was sure that if he didn't teach him a lesson today, she would never realize who the boss was. But the young man wasn't going to just let himself get beaten up. He was intent on a fair fight on both sides. Once the ghost that was several times larger than Xiaoming herself was quite close, she let go of the girl's body and stood in front of the monster with her head proudly raised. He had already gathered all his strength in his fist and swung at her, thus ready to strike her. The protagonist continued to stand still despite a large fist moving straight into his face. The girl's hair spread out in different directions, as if so activating some part of the ghost's abilities. After taking a blow from the huge ghost, the monster smelled burning, and at the same moment, black smoke rushed towards it. But as soon as he clearly saw the picture of Xiaoming standing there, it scared him madly. Xiaoming simply stood at the very same spot and looked at the place of the blow with a slightly surprised look. The young man was prepared to feel pain, but considering the huge ghost and its strength, these blows wouldn't be felt at all. While the ghost was trying to figure out how this was even possible, the protagonist sprang into action and struck him back in the face. She managed to flip such a strong monster a very long distance away while his subordinate was asking to get out of here. At his shouts, the girl turned to look at him, flashing him a warning smile. Because of which the man immediately smiled back, making himself look cultured and kind. The girl hit the large ghost once more, throwing it far into the sky, while the protagonist resented the ghost's ugly smile. Xiaomi called her master very even talented, to which the protagonist embarrassingly replied that those guys were just very weak. Suddenly the young man heard the girl's thoughts that that bandit was a ghoul with the power of a ghostly monarch. He could destroy the soul of a wandering ghost with a single blow. The ghost of the girl still hasn't left the human world, and apparently after a certain period someone appears who selects several ghosts for assignments. The young man realized with horror that there were many ghosts wandering in the human world, but he could not see them before. And when a ghost has a lot of resentment, it can contact people. But most ghosts don't. Perhaps it could mean that all her resentments will pass after the principal reveals the whole truth at the police station. This is what Xiaomi has always dreamed of. Without any grudges holding her back, the girl will be able to leave the dormitory and gain the freedom her ghost craves most. The protagonist, with great enthusiasm, rushes to catch up with the director to do what they ask, so that the girl can leave the human world and find freedom. At this time of the dark, deep night, the police officers at the station were thinking of spending the night peacefully, but this event disrupted their quiet shift. Suddenly a man crawls into the ward and won't stop asking them for help. The boys immediately recognized Principal Liu in front of them, and were greatly perplexed by his behavior. The man grabbed the officer's leg and began to explain that he was being followed by a ghost and needed help immediately. The officer inquired of the principal where he had seen the ghost, the latter at this time hugging the policeman's legs with wild fear and glancing back anxiously. Suddenly he saw Xiaoming in the window, looking behind the building behind him, causing the man to feel a sense of hopelessness. The girl at this time was watching the station, with lights burning in the windows, a girl still unconscious sitting beside her. The main character didn't know what they should do next, as it was a man who asked the police for help, so they need somewhere to hide. Here, Xiaoming reminded the master that he didn't need to hide, as other people could only see the ghost if she herself allowed them to. Director Liu at this time was practically in tears begging the officers to help him remove the ghost, which he said was right outside the door. The officers peered out the window as best they could, but other than the deep night and the brightly lit city, they saw no ghost. The guys checked with the director to see if he had taken any medication or anything else today, as they couldn't locate the person the man was talking about. The officer asked the director to get off his knees and tried to reassure him that the police station was fighting for justice, and there was plenty of yang energy. Xiaoming, in turn, also sensed that there was an energy in the precinct that prevented her from going inside. Usually they couldn't even get close to entering. But it seems that from the moment the master entered her body, she's no longer afraid of this place. After her words, the young man sincerely asked her not to say that he had penetrated her body, as that expression sounded somehow wrong, and he was still an innocent man. When asked by the young man that based on everything the girl knows, are they human or ghost, Xiaoming replied that they are neither. The young man asked to forget all the things he had said to her so that he wouldn't feel the feelings of shame and embarrassment. And if the girl is no longer afraid of this place, it's time to get down to business. Xiaoming immediately prepared to enter the station. Within a couple seconds, she was already inside the building, right in front of a man who assured the police that the ghost was right in front of him. But the officer asked Principal Liu to let him go and calm down as he does not see any ghost. Suddenly, the man felt the cold grip of a thick rope around his neck, which, once again, gradually cut off his breathing. As the man gasped for air, the officers accused him of lying. Xiaoming, on the other hand, warned one last time that if he didn't want to do the right thing, she would strangle him and take revenge. When the girl finally loosened her grip, the principal coughed and kneeled down to tell her that he had behaved inhumanely earlier, and Xiaoming had actually been framed that day. The officer took his words seriously and decided that such a serious matter should be reported to the captain. The girl was walking away from the station with the happy realization that soon everyone would know about it, and her name would be cleared. Even the policeman said that if the law could not punish the director, but his life would still be over. The protagonist felt a great sense of rush of positive emotions and energy as good deeds fill him up incredibly. Soon they carried the beauty from the cafe to her house so that when she woke up she would be fine, and therefore all business was done for the day. The young man had an incredible time today, because not only did he manage to catch a ghost, but he also fought ghosts, slapped the principal, and uncovered his dirty deeds. Looking at the beautiful body of the girl from the cafe, the guy had one sneaky idea. When he leaves this ghost girl's body, he's going to paw a little bit of the hottie in the cafe, since she's still unconscious, which will be the perfect ending to his night. The very next instant, the young man left the ghost's body to carry out his devious plan. But as soon as his body was free again, the guy grabbed the wall to keep from falling. He was so engrossed in the new events that he completely forgot about his illness, which made him feel insanely ill. Suddenly, he heard Xiaoming's voice. She thanked him heartily for his help and promised to never forget what he had done for her. The girl also swore that she would fulfill his every wish. The protagonist waved his hand slightly with words that it was a good oath, causing him to conclude that the girl must be good at languages, which was not the case with his grades. But suddenly his attention has shifted elsewhere, and the study advice doesn't seem to matter as much anymore. When he saw Xiaoming, her appearance was drastically changed, which simply amazed the guy. The girl no longer looked like a negative ghost that seemed to be drowned in negative emotions. Now it was a pure soul with only kindness and positivity left in it. Such changes in the girl's appearance occurred because all her resentments had disappeared, and now she was herself again. Xiaoming grabbed the guy's hand and brought it to her chest. She thanked the master once again, because if it wasn't for him, she had to stay in that ugly form. The young man looked away embarrassed and asked her to forget about this dormitory. Even though she looked cute now, it looked like that rogue ghost wasn't going to leave her alone. So the young man volunteered to keep her safe always. He put his arm around the girl, aroused by his action. Despite the fact that the girl was a ghost, she was very sweet, and according to most novels, it was at times like this that things took a more romantic turn. The young man had already imagined how they would spend sweet time together in the future, savoring the moments. And already later there would be something more romantic and close. The guy believed that they, like all romances, would reach a relationship. But when he had already had time to think of their life together, Xiaoming said a phrase that instantly shattered all the guy's dreams. She warned him that she couldn't be around for long. The girl was already feeling the call, and soon she would have to leave the human world and go on her journey. The protagonist remembered the girl's words, that she had to be taken from the human world by someone to leave it. And if that wasn't true, then she was lying to him. The girl, however, explained that she was saying what she had heard from others, but now she was feeling the call. When asked by Xiaoming if it could be because of the guy's help, he replied that he didn't care since he was just an ordinary high school student and didn't know anything about it. Suddenly, the girl felt a body all over her body that sharply enveloped her. As they looked back, they saw a bright light coming from the sky, and Xiaoming realized immediately that this was exactly what she was waiting for. Her body began to slowly rise above the ground and fly upwards towards the heavens where she belonged. The light was so bright and blinding that the young man had to cover his face with his hands. This sight was almost like the stage of ascension to a deity in the novels the young man read. It was immediately clear to him that Xiaoming was going to heaven. At the end, the girl shouted to the master that they would definitely meet again, and promised to never forget what he had done for her. The girl waved him goodbye and thanked him again for his act, smoothly heading for the heavens. The young man even cried a little. He realized that it was better for her to leave this human world, which had brought her so much suffering. Wiping away his tears, the guy waved goodbye to the girl in return, wishing her nothing but the best. He sincerely wished her a better life in the new world, not like her previous life. The girl closed her eyes to prepare to pass through the heavens and finally find peace. The words about heaven, the world of men, and accomplishing some kind of mission never ceased to echo in her head. The young man sadly continued to wave his hand in the girl's wake, escorting her to the other world. But suddenly, Xiaoming stopped in place and stopped moving forward. The surroundings became silent. The main character was disturbed that for some reason she was no longer moving. He turned to the girl asking if she had any problems, as it was very strange that she was floating in the air for so long. But the girl didn't answer anything. She heard everything, but she didn't seem to care. Suddenly, a current of air began to fan her hair, and a new force continued to work on her. But when she wanted to get into the pose she wanted, and straighten her arms and legs, she had one foot practically in the guy's face. Accidentally, but with a good kick, she still kicked the guy in the face. The protagonist wasn't prepared until such a hard blow knocked him off his feet. When he cried out in pain, the girl realized she had injured him by accident, but it was bad enough. Suddenly, Xiaomi realized that not only had she hit him, but she had fallen with her whole body on top of the poor guy, from whom only painful moans could be heard. Xiaomi quickly got up off the guy since he was clearly in a lot of pain and distress. She immediately reached out asking if he was okay. The young man took her hand, trying to come to his senses. But he also wondered why she hadn't gone to heaven and why she had fallen down so sharply. The girl apologized and explained that someone wanted her to pay the fare, and she didn't have any money since she was just a ghost, so she was sent back. The boy was furious at what he heard. He couldn't believe that she needed money to go to heaven because it seemed completely crazy. The protagonist asked who they were paying, if there was a transportation ministry in heaven too. According to Xiaomi, there is nothing like that there, but all the tolls go to a clever company. A cunning company was called a huge organization that spanned the human world, the underworld, and the heavens. They also have a monopoly on the way to heaven, and if they don't pay their fare, they will leave them to continue to wander the human world. This company will not let anyone into heaven, even if that soul is already destroyed. The boy asked to stop as there was too much information. Also, the young man's illness never went anywhere. Suddenly, Xiaomi remembered the guy's words about volunteering to take care of her from now on, and with a look full of hope, she asked if he would keep his promise. The girl waited impatiently for a positive answer, as if she hadn't even considered the other option. The young man saw her sweet and hopeful look, so he simply could not answer her otherwise. So he had to lie and say what she wanted him to say. He was embarrassed to say the wrong thing, but he didn't understand why she was asking now. The heroine thanked the guy with all sincerity for taking her under his responsibility, which meant he would take care of finding the money to pay for her trip to heaven. The young man was shocked by this information. He was most interested in the amount of this trip. Xiaomi said with a smile that the cost wasn't very much. In the human world, it would cost around $50,000. The guy was speechless at the amount he heard. He had no idea where to get so much money. The guy spread his arms out to show the volume of such a pile of money. The young man couldn't understand what Xiaomi was even thinking when he asked him to find such a sum of money. After all, he was just a high school student and had never seen such money in his life. The girl asked him to calm down as this was the amount in the human world, and if you took the currency of the underworld, it would be a completely different figure. The girl handed the young man her weapon. It was her rope. The boy looked at the weapon with incomprehension and asked why he needed it. Xiaomi explained that for ordinary people, ghost weapons are like magic weapons. A person wouldn't be able to see them, and the chance of hitting them is 100%. But the protagonist for some reason felt that the girl was no longer the same as before. Chai Xiaomi was a sweet and simple girl right after the transformation, but now she is acting strange. The girl sighed heavily at the realization that she had regained some of her physical form in the beam of light, but it only lasted a few minutes. Returning back into the guise of a ghost, the girl was once again able to fly through the air. She brought this to the guy's attention, proving that she hadn't changed and was still the same ghost, but it still seemed to the guy that she had changed after that beam of light. After the conversation, Xiaomi dissolved into smoke and penetrated the rope to rest in it and gain energy, and she wished the young man good luck in finding money. The young man started to shout for the girl as he was not ready to go through all these trials, but it was too late. The girl was completely immersed in rest, and wished him luck once again. The protagonist was furious at her behavior. He had no idea where to get so much money. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in the chest area as he forgot about his illness again. This Xiaomi was a sneaky girl. She could have at least sent him to the hospital. Out of desperation, the guy started to crawl to the beauty from the cafe who was still lying unconscious. He needed help, and she was the only option for help. When the young man got close to her and called out to the girl a few more times, she began to open her eyes and come to her senses. When Miss Yue could already perceive the situation, she looked in the direction from where the male voice that woke her up came from. But as soon as she saw the guy in front of her, she immediately jumped up screaming that she was being haunted, as that was the last thing she saw while she was still conscious. The young man tried to calm her down, and immediately explained that he was not a ghost, but a high school student numero uno named Yelan. Miss Yue calmed down and asked what she was doing in this place, and asked the guy if he had seen the principal here. The young man knew she was looking for Principal Liu, but he was at the police station right now, so he decided to lie so as not to give away the information. He said he came here and saw the girl lying on the floor. The girl pretended that nothing happened, and she just went out to catch the night breeze and sleep. Yelan was very much surprised by her deception, but she could have come up with something more plausible. The girl threw a suspicious look at him. She remembered what had happened, but she couldn't tell it. But when she saw the guy without pants, the girl started calling for help as she thought he wanted to do something very unpleasant to her. Yelan slightly lifted up his tank top to show that he was in his underwear and not naked. He explained his appearance by saying that he had a fever and was trying to get to the hospital. The girl pondered his words suspiciously and was in no hurry to believe him, the young man meanwhile laughing awkwardly in the hope that no one had heard her scream. But suddenly his look changed, and there was a look of shock on his face. I think he saw something not very comforting. His hopes that there were no intruders here crumbled as he could clearly see the silhouette of a man behind the house watching them. As it turned out, it was the big-headed ghost he beat up, and then his boss. That head with the cleaver is still roaming beside the guy, but right now he has no way to defeat him because Chao Xiaomi isn't around. The young man began begging Miss Yu to walk him to the nearest hospital because he was making such a weakened man of himself that he couldn't even move his leg. The girl looked at his pitying look, and though she didn't really want to lead him on, she couldn't leave the weak guy behind either. Soon the girl brought him to the hospital, where the guy was put in a room and put on an IV. Miss Yu was next to him all the time, watching the boy. Looking at the girl, it was noticeable that she was still worried about the principal. But even aside from how he disgusted Qiao Xiaoming, he's only a balding 50-year-old man. How could she possibly like him? The girl said she needed to go home and check on her son while the young man would be here waiting for the IV to run out. Yelan shouted after her that the girl should never go through the park, as it was rumored to be haunted. The girl shouted angrily that there were no ghosts. After that, Miss Yue closed the door behind her with a clatter, never heeding the guy's warning. The young man collapsed back onto the pillow. He knew there was a head with a cleaver waiting for him outside. Was he really hunting him? But the guy was too exhausted and in a bad state to do anything, so the best solution for the moment was to go to sleep and forget about everything for a while. When the protagonist finally fell into a deep sleep, he was suddenly called by a voice that tried to wake the guy up. And yet the voice managed to do so. The young man opened his eyes slightly and wondered if someone had called him. He saw Xiaomi's appearance in front of him and jumped up from the bed in surprise. The girl said with a worried look that the girl from the coffee shop was in trouble. The young man calmly began to wipe his eyes and asked what happened to Miss Yu. The girl said that a ghost with a cleaver in her head went looking for her, and ghosts don't usually haunt people, and apparently that girl was in trouble. When asked how the girl knew all this, she said that she was just worried about him following the young man. So even before dawn, she sneaked out to look around, eventually finding out all this. Before this, Yelan didn't even realize that she could be so useful anyway. He asked the girl to let him take possession of her body again. But the girl said with an awkward smile that she couldn't go out in the daytime, so the young man must be on his own now. After this unpleasant information, the girl's soul sank back into the rope and left the guy to deal with everything on his own. The protagonist screamed in rage. He didn't understand how he, a simple schoolboy, would be able to deal with a powerful ghost alone. Soon the young man came to a building that had its own garages, and one of them was half open. He, keeping calm, peeked from below inside to examine if Miss Yue was there. Inside, he saw Miss Yue sitting at the table, who was pulling out napkins. Her body was illuminated with purple light, and her gaze was quite aggressive. Looking closer, her face seemed confused, as if someone was controlling her. Yelan took out his phone and took a picture of her as evidence. Xiaomi prompted him to let some sunlight into the room to see what was wrong with it. After taking a couple photos, the young man stuffed his phone into his underwear, much to Xiaomi's embarrassment. Just then, he abruptly heard the voice of a guy who opened the other half of the door and entered the room to her, while addressing Miss Yue with a snide smile, adding that they were finally back to her. The girl's gaze became devastated, as if her attention was on something else and nothing else bothered her. Miss Yue asked in a monotone and quiet voice if he would be buying anything. The young man noticed the girl's strange reaction to his appearance and assumed that the head with the cleaver had possessed her. Yelan said that her place was a bit gloomy, so it was worth opening the window. And with those words, he went to open the blinds, letting the light in. The girl immediately sprinted towards the guy to stop him, as the ghost inside her felt that this could hurt him badly. To this, the protagonist said that he was only doing good deeds, as a decent citizen is supposed to do. The girl was not behaving at all like a human being. She started screaming violently and tried to cover herself from the sunlight as quickly as possible. To stop him, Miss Yue quickly got up from behind the table to attack him. She started growling and acting exactly like a possessed person. The girl clenched her teeth from the rage that coursed through her entire body. She wanted to destroy the guy who had disturbed her peace. She instantly ran at the protagonist and started waving her arms around in an attempt to hit him. The young man did not know how to act in this situation and only tried to somehow evade the blows. Suddenly, he managed to grab the girl's hands and lift them up to prevent the blows. Miss Yue wouldn't stop screaming and trying to break free, but the young man held on as best he could. It was always said that a possessed person had abnormal strength, but for some reason, Miss Yue's punches were too weak for a possessed person. Xiaomi praised the guy for his perseverance and courage. She asked him to take a chance while he held the girl's hands and push her into the sun. Yelan embraced her body and tried to lift her up to carry her outside, but it wasn't given to him easily because the girl was lashing out. Suddenly, her gaze became even crazier because of the surge of some kind of energy she felt throughout her body. She literally became even more distraught because of it. She grabbed her head and started screaming loudly, but there was nothing she could do about it. Suddenly, a ghost with a large head slipped out of the girl's body. He decided to retreat as his condition was already at its limit. He gritted his teeth in anger and promised to come back, and then he would definitely take revenge on them. After which, he turned into energy and flew away. The young man only mauled as he watched him leave. But as soon as he lowered his gaze to the girl, he was immediately overcome with a feeling of admiration. It was dark last night, and he couldn't get a good look. But he had no idea that Miss Yue had such a hot body. The girl woke up. I could tell from her condition that she was not feeling well. But Yelan, in turn, enjoyed touching her body, and didn't even see that the girl had already woken up. She immediately pushed the guy away so he would finally get off her back and not paw at her. The main character, with a shocked look, asked her to calm down as she had just been possessed by a ghost, and she suddenly started running at him and scratched his arm. The girl looked at her hands in horror and couldn't believe she could do this, for she had no reason to do it. The main character started screaming that he didn't know why she did it. According to him, he just came for shopping and she attacked him. He even showed her a photo of her appearance. The girl was dumbfounded. She didn't understand what was happening or why it was like this at all. This situation frightened her very much. The guy started talking her way down the road, and she didn't actually go straight home, but went for a walk and ran into a ghoul. Miss Yue tried to convince the guy that she wasn't walking anywhere. She noticed that the guy, while still so young and practically a child, had already become so sovereign. But the guy had a picture of her with a strange appearance that the girl could no longer explain in any way. So she snatched his phone and deleted it with aggression so he wouldn't have any more stupid questions for her. She turned around with words to him saying that she was just sleepy and thinking about something, and besides, it was none of his business. She accused him of taking a picture without Millet, but the guy wasn't going to put up with the tantrum she threw and didn't even thank him for saving her life. The guy snatched his phone from her and warned her that the ghoul clearly wouldn't leave her alone and would be back, so she needed to be more careful. But the girl was ready to hit him if he said one more word about it and chased the guy away. The protagonist was angry at this behavior, because he was trying to help her, and she apparently doesn't even understand when they want to help her and when they want to hurt her. Stepping away from the girl a bit, the young man exhaled heavily, calming himself down. He took the rope that Xiaomi was in and blamed her for everything, because it was because of her that he got into all these problems, and now he was also told off. To which the girl replied that she was just trying to help. But her words made the guy even angrier, since she wasn't helping, only looking for more problems. But Xiaomi was worried about that girl from the cafe since she was being chased by a ghoul. To which the protagonist asked why he needed good karma if he wasn't a monk anyway. The girl explained that if he had good karma, he would get a reward. The guy didn't like the fact that the girl was talking about these things as if he was going to put them in his pocket, when in fact they were talking about her moving, for which a huge amount of money was needed. The girl pityingly replied that if he didn't want to, she could handle everything herself. When Xiaomi started crying, the young man asked her to calm down, because he was just angry about being yelled at for no reason. Yelan saw an improvement in the girl's mood immediately after his words, which looked as if her tears were an attempt to push pity. Walking down the street, the guy was finding out how the girl was going to exchange that good karma for money. But Xiaomi didn't know exactly how yet, but helping the cafe hottie definitely needed to be done. The main character was also ready to help her, but it's about a ghoul, and he's just a schoolboy, so also Xiaomi doesn't show up in daylight, so he didn't even have an idea how to help her. The young man decided it was time to stop Xiaomi calling him master, and just call him by his first name. Suddenly the young man realized that it was not that the beauty from the cafe was too weak, but that he had become much stronger than before. He couldn't understand how this could even happen, after all. He used to do barely 10 push-ups. The girl suggested that it might be because of his illness. Looking around, the young man saw the right place for his next plan. He had a great idea about how it could be improved. He put on his gym uniform and came to the stadium to work out. The girl was dumbfounded by his decision to play sports. At this time, there is no one at school, and there are no cameras around the track, so he has the perfect place to test his abilities. And he decided to start out in the 100-meter dash, even though he was in the top 10 in the high school competition. Even though there were only 10 members on this team, the guy still considered himself in the top 10. When he started the timer, the young man got to the start line and got ready to run. As soon as he uttered the word march, the guy immediately tore off, devoting maximum strength. At the end, he glanced at the stopwatch and saw a number that simply amazed him. He had run the distance in a little over 5 seconds, while Usain Bolt set a world record of 9 seconds or more. Now Yelan had become a simply amazing person, but he decided to check again. After a while, he ran another lap and was eager to look at the phone screen and see the result. This time he ran in just 2 and 1 seconds, and that's taking into account the time when he presses the button. In other words, he may well run 100 meters in 1 second. In addition, he didn't feel the slightest bit tired from running. It even seemed to him that he could run for an hour without stopping, and there would be no problems. Xiaomi admired the guy's strength, so she suggested that he also practice on the power bag, which she said was in the basketball gym. The girl has flown the corridors of the school almost every day and knows a lot about it. An ordinary person's punching force could reach 150 kilograms, but Mr. Zhao, who was a gym teacher in this school, could punch with a force of 300 kilograms. Yelan couldn't wait to see his results in this fight, for he wanted to try hitting with a force of 500 kilograms. The young man made a deep exit, brought his senses to rest, and geared up for the hardest blow of his life, after which he swung as hard as he could at the punching bag. With all his might, his hard fist collided with the hard surface, and while he was measuring his strength in the hall, the weather outside was quiet and warm, the sun enveloping everything around him in warm rays. Suddenly, the silence and tranquility was interrupted by an unexpectedly arriving object that crashed into the school building at a tremendous speed. Because of this, a huge hole in the wall was formed in the hall where the protagonist was. The young man along with Xiaomi looked at the place where the large object had arrived and couldn't say anything out of shock. Just like that, the guy started to panic a lot about what had happened. He couldn't even guess what it was, and thought it was some kind of devilish thing. This unexpected incident really scared the guy, which caused him stress. The young man kept wondering how it happened and who did it in the first place. The young man realized that there was a stranger nearby, and started to run away as fast as he could with his abilities. A few minutes later, the young man was in a safe place. He and Xiaomi exhaled a sigh of relief as they had managed to escape, or else he might have been suspected. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a loud squabble in the middle of the street. Someone was calling for the girl and asking her to talk and let the child go. The young man peeked out from around the corner and looked questioningly to see what was going on, maybe someone in need of help. At the front of the street, he saw a young girl holding a crying infant in her arms. As she was running away with the baby, a crowd of different people ran after her and asked her to stop and let the baby go. Seeing in front of him such a crowd of people who were chasing one girl with a baby, the guy was simply shocked by this picture. But when he looked more closely, he saw something that really surprised him, and even made him a little angry. He saw the ghost of a large head hovering around Miss Yue and the child. Seeing the familiar face of the girl there, the young man was simply shocked that Miss Yue was possessed by that ghoul again. The girl didn't stop running away from the people. Her body was illuminated with a violet light that signified the presence of a ghost in her body. The girl's gaze was utterly devastated and uncharacteristically real. It was as if she were in a dream, doing whatever he wanted her to do. The girl's hair was flying back from the speed of her escape, who just wanted to get their baby. The ghost's gaze was aggressive, controlling the girl's body as it wished. Yelan immediately rushed to Miss Yu's aid. Not only was this ghoul stalking adults, but now this rascal was targeting a child as well. Xiaomi supported his words. The young man rushed towards the girl with all his speed to once again free her from the hands of that ghoul. He swept past the people who were also running after the girl with great speed. But they didn't even have time to see who it was, because the speed was too great. When he was finally near the girl, he took her by the shoulder to stop her and draw attention to himself. But the girl stopped very abruptly, cradling the child against her so that no one would take him away. This Yelan didn't expect this and ran further past Miss Ye, glancing back with a worried look. But he didn't have time to stop, because by accident he hit a fence that was in his way. At this time, as his movement was paused, the girl jumped the fence, flying over the guy's head. The girl easily slipped away from such a huge crowd of people. Landing on the other side, she ran onward. The young man looked at the fleeing girl with aggression, wondering who this ghoul was in his past life. If he was some kind of athlete. Miss Yue didn't even stop for a second and rushed to run further away. Following her, Yelan jumped the fence and ran the same way so as not to lose sight of her in any way. The guy realized that he absolutely had to free her from the hands of the evil ghoul, so also free the child. But before he could even think about it, the girl was already running toward the apartment building in an attempt to hide behind it. She ran quickly near the entrance to it. It seemed the young man could easily lose sight of her due to the tangled paths. He didn't have time to see where she was going. Miss Yue, with a dejected expression, continued to run away, clutching the baby closer to her chest. Yelan chased after her with all his legs, in an attempt to catch up with the possessed girl despite his fatigue. Soon he found himself on the roof of the tall house where Miss Yue had run to. Opening the door to the roof, he immediately started looking around for the girl. Noticing her almost at the door, the guy yelled for her to stop, but his words had no effect. The guy reached out with his hand to grab her and stop her somehow, which was hard to do. Grabbing her by the shirt still didn't stop, causing the guy to rip off a large piece of fabric. He was furious as he still hadn't caught her and this attempt was futile. It seems the girl was still a little confused about the road ending ahead. Without thinking about the decision, she lifted herself off the ground, taking a leap as high as she could. Yelan shouted for her not to jump, but it was too late. The girl jumped off the building, trying to leap to a neighboring one, while an excited guy shouted after her. The young man stood still in bewilderment, holding only the torn-off part of her t-shirt. This is when he realized he had to take action and pulled a rope out of his pocket to harness its power. Unraveling it, he began to swing it around him to get a good aim on the girl. After a brief attempt at a good swing of the rope, he threw it toward the girl, and apparently the attempt was successful. He managed to straddle her leg while she could have fallen down with the baby. When the rope went around her leg, the guy pulled it toward him to tighten it on Miss Yu's body so he wouldn't let go. The girl was already halfway to the other house when she was pulled down. Seeing her practically falling down, the guy froze in place and didn't know what to do next. In front of him was the frightened expression of a girl who was flying straight at him and he could no longer stop her. A couple seconds later, she fell right on top of the guy, dropping him to the floor and crushing him with all her weight. But luckily, the guy had time to stretch his arms up and catch the toddler, who was falling right behind the girl. When the baby fell right into his hands, the protagonist exhaled a big sigh of relief. At this time, Miss Yue was lying right on the guy's stomach and was unable to realize what was happening. But the guy even liked it. The girl's body was very smooth and she smelled nice, which made the young man literally go crazy. Suddenly, the ghost started to leave Miss Yu's body since she was unconscious and could no longer continue to run away. The ghoul with the big head asked the guy with aggression who he even was and why he always ruins his plans, after which he started threatening to take his life. Yelan gently took the baby from the girl's hands. The baby was no longer crying. Seeing the kind face of a nice man in front of him, he smiled and reached out to him. But these words of the ghoul pissed the guy off completely. Turning to him, he threw a furious glance in the direction of the ghost, after which he struck the ghoul, causing its ghostly body to lose its former appearance at the point of impact. At that, the young man shouted that a whole day would not be enough for him to teach the ghoul a lesson for hurting women and children. The ghost with a pitiful face took his hand at the point of impact. He clearly hadn't expected this. As Yelan's gaze fell down to where the huge knife in the ghoul's head was, he suddenly had a plan to quickly hurt him back. He quickly took hold of the knife and pulled it sharply out of the ghost's head, causing it to scream in horrible pain. Once the knife was in his hand, it was as if it began to heal and the gaps in it began to take on their former appearance. Already after a couple seconds, it was no longer a ghost knife, but a whole and sharp weapon, which was quite good to use. The young man told the ghost to shut his mouth, as he might frighten the child with his voice. When the protagonist wanted to threaten him, he immediately realized that this guy was already a ghost, and theoretically, he couldn't take his life a second time. After that thought, he threatened to destroy his soul if he kept yelling. And as far as he knew, all ghosts were afraid of that. After these words, the ghost stopped yelling so loudly and pitiful moans of pain could be heard. Yelan stepped on the ghost and asked what was wrong with it and the reason why it wanted to take the lives of Miss Yue and the child. Though the young man had seen several evil ghouls before, this was the first time he had met one as cruel as him. Suddenly the ghost said that he just wants to take revenge on someone since he can't get rid of his grudges, and Yelan is standing in his way and obstructing justice. But the protagonist didn't consider his boss a strong opponent. He was sure that if he were here, he would fall on his knees and kiss his feet. Based on the ghost's words, it was her fault that he passed away because she cheated on him. He blamed her for leaving this world in a horrible way, and all because of her. The main character heard somewhere that her husband died because of a heart attack, but you can't tell that from the look of this ghost, and apparently she and her lover literally stuck a knife in him. The young man remembered that Miss Ye was having an affair with the principal right now, so he assumed that he was the one that this all happened to. But the ghost screamed that he would take her life himself if she even thought of ending it with her own hands. Here the guy wondered how that cleaver had ended up in his head, if he had then fallen into depression and decided to commit suicide. But as it turned out, when the guy found out about the lover, took this cleaver to pounce on them right during the affair, but by accident he tripped on the steps and fell headfirst into the cleaver. The guy was flabbergasted by such a story, and in some ways it was a ridiculous situation that he left his life. The young man stood silent after hearing the story, while the ghost grieved over it. Yelan tried with all his might to hold back his laughter, as the cause of his demise was indeed due to his sloppiness. But suddenly there was a loud laugh from the guy, which only infuriated the ghost even more. At the guy's words that the ghost was just the king of losers, the guy with the disgruntled face just silently watched the young man pouring with laughter. But he wasn't going to hold back his anger. He wasn't at all comfortable with this reaction to the story of how he'd died. With his eyes blazing with anger, the ghoul began to yell at the guy for laughing at him because he didn't see anything funny about it. His anger caused him to spray his ghostly mist, which caused the young man to start coughing violently. The protagonist tried to convince him that even though he and Miss Yu had relationship problems, it wasn't his kid's fault and jumping off the roof with him was a terrible idea. But as it turned out, this kid wasn't this guy's kid. He claimed it was someone else's son and he was raising someone else's kid. The ghost claimed that his grievances are that his wife cheated on him and it is not his son. So last night he peeped at the principal and Miss Yu in the park, because he is also involved in the grievances. But the ghost was doing it because he believed that if it weren't for that pair of lovers, he wouldn't have tripped and fallen down the stairs. And because she and her lover had brought him to this point. Suddenly, there was a shout from Miss Yu, who addressed this ghost named Deng Ji Chang, calling him a useless person. The girl stood in front of Yelan and lightly pushed him back with her hand to keep him out of the conversation. Suddenly she tore at the ghost, trying to reach her hand out and grab it. But the girl was too weak and didn't have the strength to deal with a ghost with a baby in her arms. The protagonist grabbed her hand and stopped her, as there was a ghoul in front of them, and dealing with him is not easy. But then the young man realized that she started to see him when she woke up. To this, the girl said with a furious voice that she had come to her senses even before that and had heard the whole conversation. She also revealed that Deng Ji Chang was a spineless coward during his lifetime, and even now that he's in the world of the dead, he torments his wife and child, and lies that she cheated on him. He dares to reject his son while he was doing a paternity test behind her back. She was in the woods with Mr. Liu because he had borrowed from him when he was alive and never paid him back. The ghoul knew that his wife was telling the whole truth, and it really pissed him off, as he himself realized that he behaved horribly, and now his wife and child are in a heap of trouble. But he continues to make a victim out of himself. He then shouted at the top of his voice that he would destroy his wife, shouting abusive words in her direction. Miss Yue pressed the child as close to her as possible, for she knew that she could not defend herself with her own strength against such a strong ghoul. But then Yelan rushed to her aid. He took out his rope and guided her to the right place. First he punched the ghoul in the face with all his might, causing it to stagger a bit on the spot. But this gesture infuriated the ghost many times more. He was overwhelmed with the emotion of resentment. All he wanted to do now was end these two. The young man was very surprised at his behavior, for he had struck him with an ordinary rope, and had not at all expected to see such an effect from it. And while he was dealing with the ghoul, his attention was drawn to a sound coming from the other side. Looking over there, he saw Miss Yue running away with the baby from that place. But she can't walk in the street like that, because all she was wearing was a torn t-shirt and underwear. He shouted after the girl that he could handle this ghoul, and she didn't have to worry about him running after her. After saying that, the young man started to take off his shirt to give it to the girl, holding out a t-shirt to her. He said her reaction to that was appropriate, and she should run away, but she should cover herself first. The girl threw an exasperated look at him, as if she didn't want to accept help from him or his words had hurt her a little. But despite her displeasure, she still accepted his help and took the t-shirt. While she put on her t-shirt, the young man held her baby so nothing would happen to him. As the girl dressed, she threw a stern and cold glance at the ghost. Glancing at him, she snorted unhappily. Even after he'd become a ghoul, she still saw him as the same weakling he'd been when he was alive. She was screaming that she was standing right in front of him so he had the opportunity to stand up and deal with her, if he had the courage. But the ghoul couldn't dare to do so. Here Yelan asked to stop it because he noticed that the child's forehead was hot, and maybe he had a cold. Touching the baby, the girl really noticed signs of fever, so she went to take the baby to the nearest clinic. As she left, she asked the guy not to let the ghoul go, because it was better to stop him now so he wouldn't bother them again. The young man shouted that she absolutely had to take care of the baby's health now, and he would take care of the rest. Guy thought Miss Yue was a very evil woman, after all. This ghoul was still her husband, no matter how hard you looked at it. When Miss Yu left, he questioned the ghost if it was true that this child was really his son, and despite that, he still wanted to jump off the roof. The ghoul began to stammer and explained in an anxious voice that Bandit Hua made him do it. He wanted to find a replacement for the mother and son ghosts that stand at the entrance of this street. Suddenly the ghost felt a strange and unpleasant pressure in his head. For some reason his body grew much larger and he began to scream at the top of his voice from the negative emotions that mixed within him. It was as if the ghoul was turning into a much stronger monster and apparently couldn't control it, as if someone was doing it for him. For such a spectacle, even Xiaomi left her hiding place and watched admiringly. The protagonist could not understand what was happening to him, whether he was self-destructing. Xiaomi replied that she couldn't say exactly what was wrong with him, but guessed that not all ghosts go to heaven. The young man watched carefully and tried to figure out what had caused this to happen. Suddenly, a large gate with a strange pattern appeared at this spot, out of nowhere. The guys looked at this with shocked looks and waited for the next action. The ghoul's gaze was very frightened, as if he himself didn't realize what was happening to him. Suddenly, the gate began to open. There was a red light coming from inside, which did not give a good impression of the area. And when the gate opened fully, the monster's huge foot appeared from there. 2 huge monsters appeared behind the ghoul, reaching out to take him with them. The ghost started screaming for help. Apparently, these monsters were taking his soul, which was the scariest thing for ghosts. But the ghosts looked too scary, so no one had the courage to help him. Yelan even covered his mouth so as not to make an unnecessary sound and attract their attention. Here, the young man remembered Xiaomi's words about heaven and hell not existing. But it seems that this normal fire is more like the flames from hell. But the girl said it wasn't a bull's head and a horse's face. These 2 were from the fires of the underworld. Before the Cunning Company appeared, they were responsible for cleansing the human world of evil ghouls. But from the words about the Cunning Company, the young man was slightly annoyed, for they are the ones he needs to collect money from. At this time, the ghoul was being taken into the gate as he screamed for help, but no one was going to intervene. Though the young man was surprised by it, he felt like those monsters were doing what was fair, and this guy deserved what was happening to him. But it seems Xiaomi had decided to be kind. She couldn't let them leave, which Yelan didn't understand at all. He felt like saving this ghoul was just wasting his energy and time. But Xiaomi wasn't talking about saving a head with a cleaver. She was referring to those 2 monsters. The girl didn't want to just give it to them after all. They had spent too much persistence. The guy listened to her, though, and suddenly yelled to the guys to keep the door open and listen to them. One of the guards looked around and asked what he wanted. The look in his eyes was creepy, but the guy acted confident enough. Here, the young man started making claims as to why they were taking this ghoul away, but didn't even ask his permission. The second guard wondered if the celestial world also wanted to meddle in the affairs of the funeral pyres of the underworld. Xiaomi, though, offered the idea of asking for something in return, but she herself was afraid of them, so she pretended not to concern herself with the whole situation. After which, she returned to her rope. The guards of hell clarified exactly what he wanted from them. Yelan began to ponder over the answer, because he really had no idea what he wanted. Xiaomi had suggested it, but chickened out. The young man put his hands at his sides and struck a confident pose so he wouldn't look like a coward in their eyes. Here, he said with an aggressive look that they themselves probably knew what he wanted, just playing dumb. The guards looked around and wondered what they should do about this guy who was demanding something from them. The monster realized that the guy knew the market well, and it was obvious that he was far from new to the business, so he handed him a bag of money and confidently said that it should be enough. He threw the pouch into the hands of a shocked Yelan and asked him to call if he found any more good stuff. Opening the pouch, the young man found a pile of gold coins inside. The 2 men looked evil, but they were so generous and obscenely rich. Just then he remembered that he still had that huge knife behind his back that he had ripped off the ghoul's head. He got the good idea to finally use it as a weapon. He yelled for them to wait for him, causing the guards to become even more aggressive. When they heard his voice, they thought he wanted to raise the price some more, causing them to no longer be calm and generous. If this went on much longer, they might get caught. The young man began to quietly pull out a knife from behind his back. He was not afraid that they might be spotted by the cunning company, for he had nothing to do with them. Taking out his dagger, he asked with a sly smile not to yell at him, as he wasn't going to raise the price. He swung his arm sharply to the side, aiming his weapon there as well, his gaze a bit worried from the fact that he couldn't know the reactions of these monsters. But while the guards did not react in any way, the boy tore off toward the gate. This ghoul's cleaver looks like the same magic weapon as Chao Xiaoming's rope. If a young man uses this flame to incandesce it, he should be pumped. The huge cleaver was infused with magical properties from the ghoul who was its master. The guard warned the guy to be careful because low-level magical weapons aren't very strong, so if he kept poking him, he would just destroy it. Listening to him, the guy drew out his cleaver, which was already sufficiently energized. Some sort of waves formed at the end of the blade, which meant there was energy. The protagonist clutched the cleaver tightly in his hand and swung it to test its strength. From the cleaver strike, there was a pretty big explosion and devastation, as far as what kind of weapon it was. The young man was very happy about this kind of power, and it was all due to the fact that he had combined the power of fire with the cleaver. At this time, the sky over the house they were on was mixed with a dark blue and red hue, which portended bad weather. When the guards saw this, they were very frightened, for it was clearly the one who had come for them. His shouts were also noticed by the second guard, who was in agreement that they urgently needed to escape. As they headed to enter the gate, they were shouted after by Yelan, who asked them to leave their contacts in case he needed to call them. But the boys, without answering anything, entered the gate and slammed the door behind them. After which, a vortex formed in the floor, into which the gate gradually plunged. The protagonist stood as if devastated in one place. He was maximally disappointed that he hadn't gotten their contacts. Suddenly some light beam appeared in the sky, which caught the guy's attention. He lifted his surprised gaze upward to examine the strange object more closely. Some sort of dome had formed in the sky, which seemed to spread out more and more. And as it turned out, the dome was indeed getting wider and wider and taking over the site more and more. The rays of the strange dome reached the nearest buildings, but there was no effect from them. Suddenly, unfamiliar people appeared in the sky. It was a man and a woman, who were dressed in business attire. The man was looking at his phone and following the navigator, which showed him the way to the location. But the trail of the ghoul they had come for had disappeared. The stranger said in a frustrated voice that they were too late. The girl grudgingly said that no one could hide from the soul-catching network, so there was a possibility that that ghoul had been taken by the soul merchants. But her colleague didn't seem to be listening to the girl. Following the navigator, the guy started to descend to the ground without saying anything to the girl. The girl reacted to his ignore with displeasure. She looked at him with an annoyed look. The guy continued to fly towards the stadium, disregarding his coworker's words. Soon he touched the ground where he had originally followed. The man opened his work bag and started pulling out the things that were important to him. Beginning to rummage through it, various items flew over his head, ranging from documents to the presence of furniture. It seems that this was not the first time the girl had seen this, because other than irritation towards this young man, she felt nothing. After a couple minutes, the guy set up a table, a chair, and important documents. After that, he ordered the girl to arrest all the ghosts from the soul-catching network, since he was going to interrogate them all. A stream of energy that was bright blue in color swirled in the girl's hand. Raising her hand upwards, she formed a sort of circle that consisted of her activated energy. With a sudden sharp jolt, she literally stabbed a large golden-colored energy pillar into the sky. Her colleague sat silently at his desk and waited with a serious look for the girl to complete her task. Suddenly, one of the ghoul ghosts that had been summoned by the girl's power collapsed to the ground from the sky, after which many more of the same ring formed in the sky, from which other souls must come to Earth. Some of them looked exhausted, and some of them looked aggressive. When they had gathered a sufficient number of souls, the guy scrutinized those present, then called out to one of the crowd. It was a frightened soul who had his hands tied for caution. When the guy picked it out, they immediately pulled the rope to get him closer quickly, causing the guy to scream loudly. He found himself in front of a table where a guy was sitting. The young man calmly asked his name. At this time, Xiaomi was watching the scene along with Yelan. This soul-catching network was very impressive to the girl. But fortunately, they had united their bodies, otherwise they would have been caught. As it turned out, the arrival of these two guys was caused by Xiaomi and Yelan's carelessness. That woman's name is Wenru, and she is the manager of a special company. And what to speak of the dome in the sky, it was a tool from a special company. Humans would not be able to see it, but ghosts caught in it must obey their commands. But suddenly her phone rang at full volume in Xiaomi's pocket. The guys were incredibly scared as they were too close to those people. Xiaomi instantly pulled out her phone and started pressing all the buttons in a panic just to turn it off as soon as possible. But that sound was heard by Wenru, and the girl was clearly suspicious. While her colleague was busy checking the souls, she looked around carefully, for there could be no humans. But the ghosts all had to show up as well. Finally, Xiaomi muted the sound on the phone of the guy who made such a fuss. She exhaled with relief, while Yelan was rubbing his hands together at the fact that his mom had called him and most likely wanted to offer to come home for the vacations. But when the girl looked out from around the corner, she saw Wen-ro heading in their direction. The protagonist asked in a panic what they should do now. But Xiaomi only pretended to have nothing to do with it, since there was nowhere to run, and Wen-ru was already at the door to the building where she was standing. Suddenly the girl's gaze fell on the stand that hung above her head. It was some kind of advertisement for the students. Here the girl had an ingenious idea of what she should do now and how to avert suspicion from herself. When Wen-ru finally entered the building, Xiaomi had already managed to run away from where she was standing. The very poster that attracted her with its colorful appearance immediately caught her eye. Glancing at the wall, the girl examined the poster carefully, as if something seemed strange to her about it. The girl didn't want to move away from that poster, as if she sensed something, some clue. At this time, Xiaomi was hiding right at the booth, pretending to be a participant in this advertisement. Yelan was as alarmed as possible from such a tense situation. But the girl still didn't see anything strange on the poster, so soon she just turned around and headed along the corridor. Xiaomi exhaled with relief at the thought that they had managed to escape the inspection, while Yelan thought about Wen-ru and her beautiful appearance. But her face seemed too intimidating to him. Xiaomi finally felt free and immediately flew out of the poster with the happy thought that she had managed to hide. But there was an unpleasant surprise waiting for her outside, namely an unexpected head-on meeting with Wen-ro. The girl stood near the poster and waited to see what Xiaomi, who was clearly shocked to see her there, would say in response. Suddenly their attention was drawn to the voices coming from the street where the shower inspection was taking place. That was what helped distract Wen-ro. Xiaomi looked over there with a dumbfounded look, while the young man was equally surprised, for neither of them understood what was going on there. At this time, there was a guy sitting outside at a table with a serious look on his face, while the rest of the souls kneeled in front of him. When the girl returned to her coworker, and when asked if she had discovered anything, Wen-ro replied that she had only seen a stray cat. After talking to the souls, the guy stated that they didn't know anything at all, so they could only confirm the fact that there were 2 cases of ghost trafficking. And unless they had no more evidence, in which case the girl suggested just closing the case and not wasting time on it. But then the guy claimed that head office sent him here to do more than just investigate these petty ghost trafficking cases. No one can know about what happened, so they need to thoroughly cleanse the place of the presence of all ghosts. Looking at the tormented souls who were in a terrible state, Wen-ro tensed at the fact that they had to be gotten rid of. His words made the girl very angry because these souls belong to the company, and according to the rules they can't do that. But the guy was insistent and wasn't about to change his mind. He threatened that he could easily hire another worker who could do it for her. There was nothing Wen-ro could do about it, and not completing the assignment could be bad for her job. Looking at what was going on, Xiaomi noticed that apparently everyone had already calmed down. Yelan suggested to still take a look at what was going on there now and make sure they weren't in any danger. After listening to him, the girl carefully peeked out from around the corner and scrutinized the whole situation. But from what she saw there, the girl could not find words. Her gaze was fixed on one picture that simply amazed her. In front of her, she saw a large energy pillar that emanated from the ground into the sky. A bright beam of light flashed around. The guys couldn't understand what exactly these guys were doing here, and what they had come for. The young man was not particularly frightened by such a sight, but he realized that these people were up to something very serious. But Xiaomi was anxious unlike him, for it only told her one thing. Namely, that something has been done to 7 of these ghosts, and apparently they can no longer be reborn. With pity, she looked down at the floor and pronounced that their souls had been destroyed. They were completely gone. This particular company is too cruel. Although those bandits were bad guys, but fellow Yelan didn't understand why it was necessary to destroy them. But as it turns out, for a special company, all these ghosts are just assets, so their fate lies in the hands of the company. This fact made the guy very angry, but he felt like the girl was not telling him something. Looking at her, the guy looked at her with an aggressive look and asked if she was hiding something from him. When he started helping Miss Yue, Xiaomi said that he needed to accumulate good karma to exchange it for money later. But they ended up selling the head with the cleaver to those guards. To which Xiaomi replied that selling a head with a cleaver is the way to accumulate good karma. After all, ghosts are an essential resource for different worlds. But because if they don't sell them these ghosts, their worlds could end. And speaking of ghosts that just died, if they hadn't gotten the attention of a special company with that very sale, it wouldn't have happened. According to the girl, if they could not enter the Wheel of Rebirth, it was only a matter of time before their souls were destroyed. Since then, there have been many destroyed souls. The young man shouted that it didn't matter now. What mattered was that Xiaomi had been lying to him all along. But the girl justified that she was telling him the truth gradually for his own good. But the protagonist was an ordinary high school student, so the whole truth is unlikely to affect him dramatically. In addition, he does not want to interfere in matters that in any way relate to the special company. But then the girl said that it was too late to think about it, because if an employee of the office had come here, they would not rest until they got to the truth. This fact only alarmed the guy even more because he realized that he had to hide or solve this problem. Because of Xiaoming, the guy is in a lot of trouble now, and he had no idea what to do about it. And now she wants him to fight against those guys from the special company. Making a sad look, the girl said that right now they could only hurry up and collect enough money to pay the fare. Soon the young man would be able to find a place to hide. The guy crouched down on his knees and clutched his head in despair with the realization that they needed to raise a total of 50 million yuan. Remembering about the gold coins he received for selling the cleaver head, he wondered how much they would be worth, so he asked Zhao Xiaoming if she knew where to sell them. But then the girl said that under this network of catching souls, she spent too much energy, so she needed to rest for a couple of days. But this information did not please the guy in any way. Xiaoming began to fade from view, and her last words were that she wouldn't be able to talk to him for a while she rested. Then the rest lay with him. The young man tried to stop her and persuade her not to leave, because he needed information about where to exchange the gold coins. But the girl was already inside the rope and answered nothing, no matter how much he shafted her. Taking the rope in his hands, the boy looked at it with a lonely look, not sure what he should do next. He took one gold coin out of the pouch and examined it carefully. It had the image of a tiger on it. These gold coins were of unknown origin, so he can't sell them at a bank or jewelry store, but they clearly look very expensive. That's when he got the good idea to try his luck at an antique store, and if someone was interested in them, he'd get good money. After changing his clothes, the hero soon arrived at the largest antique store in the area. Once inside, he saw two girls behind the counter talking and giggling amongst themselves. Yelan approached one of the saleswomen with the statement that he had an interesting item for sale. The clerk, with an aggressive look, reminded him that they were an antique store and asked if he would have any antiques. The young man started pulling out a single gold coin from his pouch to show it off first. The words about the gold coin interested the girl very much, and she asked to let her look at it. The guy held out a single gold coin for her to assess its value. Flipping the coin, it fell onto the glass table with a loud sound, making several rotations. The girls leaned closer in great surprise to get a better look at the unfamiliar thing. The saleswoman took a magnifying glass and looked at the coin through it to assess its condition and see if it was really as valuable as the guy says. But after examining it, she told the guy with a slight smirk that if he could call anything that looked old and antique, it didn't mean the thing was valuable at all. But she did appreciate the engraving on this coin, which looked exquisite, and the engraving of the tiger looks even more realistic. It even looked like the eyes were actually moving. But putting it back on the table, she said that it is clearly not an antique, but she liked it very much, so the girl offered to buy it from the young man at the market price of gold. This coin weighs about 11 grams, so the total comes out to 3,058 yuan. But the girl decided to round up the amount, so she will pay him 3,100 yuan. But Yelan doesn't agree with this lady, and if he wanted to sell the coin at the price of gold, he would go to a jewelry store. He wasn't going to sell anything, so he demanded the coin back. But suddenly the saleswoman covered the coin with her hands because she didn't want to give him anything. She could tell with certainty that the coin had a dubious history, and the jewelry store would pay him no more than 700. The girl started pulling money out of her wallet just to put the guy on the spot. She kept saying that she was a good person, and understood that it was not easy for every young guy like him to live, so she added another 100 yuan. But the young man only got more angry with her because this woman is literally forcing him to sell the coin, which he didn't want to do for so little money. Her partner said with an arrogant smile that if she called the police now, he would not even get a penny. He would go to jail, so it was best to take the money and leave. There was no way Yelan would be able to explain to the police where he got this coin, so if they did come here, he would obviously be in serious trouble. He grabbed the money off the table with a sudden movement, leaving the coin with them, and decided to leave so as not to make things worse until the police arrived. His last phrase before he left was that he promised they would meet again. As he left the store, he tried to convince himself that he was a man. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with giving in to someone. He just needed to wait until nightfall, possess the ghost's body, and scare her. After a couple of hours, the young man protagonist has already lost hope that at least someone will buy a coin from him, because he has already bypassed several jewelry stores, and all of them offer too little. It seems that the offer of that girl of their antique store was the highest, maybe the young man was wrong about her. Suddenly, he noticed a snake on the sign of a store that was clearly a ghost. The young man was very surprised to see a snake here, for there was not even a suggestion as to where it could have come from. There was a small horn in the center of the snake's head, which made it even stranger. The young man noticed that it was transparent. Was it a ghost of a snake? But when the snake climbed out into the sun, the guy remembered that after all, ghosts are afraid of sunlight, and this snake is at ease as it wriggles around the sign in the sunshine. The snake looked incredibly cute. The young man reached out a hand to pet the beastie. But as soon as he approached it and was about to touch it, the snake immediately started hissing aggressively at him and displayed its sharp teeth. Yelan instantly grabbed her neck so that she wouldn't bite him and couldn't reach him with her teeth. Just as the young man pulled the snake toward him to pull it out completely, there was a sudden loud rumbling sound. The sign that had a snake coiled on it the whole time began to fall downward with a creak. The hero, with the snake in his hand and with a frightened look, began to back away quickly. Luckily, the guy jumped back very quickly. Otherwise, that sign would have fallen on his head. After examining the snake, he noticed that the reaping sign had something to do with this ghost, as it wouldn't detach from the snake. Suddenly, an unfamiliar old man came out of the store and in a worried voice begged the guy to spare the snake. The young man, holding the snake by the side of his head, claimed that it wanted to bite him. That's why he grabbed it like that. The old man got as close to the snake's face as he could and asked with a shout how it could have bitten this young man. The stranger asked the guy to let the snake go since it couldn't say anything anyway. Yelan was surprised and asked if it could speak. He decided that a snake that could talk was clearly a demon. But now that he knew that ghosts existed, demons wouldn't scare him anymore. Suddenly, the snake flew aggressively over his head, nearly hitting the guy with the sign, causing him to have to crouch down slightly. She turned back to the sign and glared fiercely at the guy who had disturbed her and snorted to show her anger. The old man immediately ordered her to stop showing her temper. After all, this fellow was definitely no ordinary master since he managed to grab her with one hand. He started asking the snake a lot of questions. A lot of questions came from the old man's mouth, which really annoyed the young man, so he decided to explain everything. With a smile, the boy turned to the man and said he could talk to him instead of the snake. The young man explained that he didn't know anything of what he had just said. The old man said that no man has ever seen this ghost helper, but it seems that fate itself has brought them together, so he can't miss the chance not to go in and talk to him. At first glance, Yelan sincerely thanked the old man for the offer, but he actually understood that the old man was not just a mere human, and he now needed to learn as much as he could about the strangeness of this world. After opening the door, Liu Daozi gestured for the boy to come inside. He entered at his invitation and looked around the building. After walking around the room for a bit, Liu Daozi sat down at the table together with the young man. The boys sat down at a table to socialize in a comfortable setting. The old man swept up his modest apartments and apologized for his humble abode for propriety's sake. But Yelan found it hard to understand some of the man's words, so he asked for an explanation. Liu Daozi told him to be a little patient. After all, he has a small house. After he explained everything, the young man was very surprised that he had managed to understand him after all. Without modesty, Yelan said that the man has a very small house, and it is also very dusty. His mother often said that a house is the face of a person. The old man awkwardly coughed and asked if the guy was from Qinxian, for his face seemed unfamiliar to him, and he had clearly never seen him before. From this question, the young man realized that this old man wanted to understand where he came from. Based on the novels, all these meetings are like negotiations. Yelan confirmed the old man's words that he was from Qinxian, but was very rarely here. The guy also commented that he is a very lazy person and rarely leaves the house. Liu Daozi appreciated his joke. He really can't know all the residents by sight, but he knows more than 100 mages of Qinxian City. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the head of the Mages Union. The name sounded really cool. The hero had never heard of such a union before. His teachers told him that all unions and societies had to be registered. Otherwise, they were illegal. The old man explained to the guy that they had skills that were not beyond the crime of ordinary people, which was why they couldn't register their organization. He offered him his help, whereupon the protagonist abruptly placed a gold coin on the table and stated that he wanted to sell it. When Liu Daozi saw the item in question, he was incredibly shocked. Such a reaction even made the old man get up from the table. The man examined the coin carefully to make sure his eyesight was not deceiving him, and it was indeed the same coin. It was as if he was afraid to touch such a valuable item. This coin was made of rare gold from the underworld, and he wondered where the young man had gotten it. When the old man started putting on the disposable gloves, the young man started saying that he was worried that he wouldn't hurt his back, since he wasn't young anymore and hadn't done anything like that. But he didn't seem to hear the boy. All his attention was directed to the coin. He took it in his hands, making sure that it was indeed the real gold of the underworld. The man with the strained voice said that since the guy had revealed all his cards to him, he should pay him back. Taking his small teapot, the man set it on the gold coin with a loud clatter, after which he extended his hand and told Yelan that he could now continue. But the hero could not understand why the old man had covered his coin with this old teapot. And while they were talking and settling the matter of the coin among themselves, the ghost of a snake flew in through the open window. She leisurely flew over to the table where the boys were sitting and looked at each other with a frown. Yelan examined the strange teapot with an interested look and wondered what he should do next. Looking at the old man sitting in front of him, who was slowly stroking his beard, the young man mentally asked what this gesture of his meant. Did he really want the guy to pick up this teapot? Still, he decided to listen to his thoughts and do as he saw fit, for he could think of no other solution. As his hand touched the kettle, a strange blue mist began to appear in the jam. The man immediately covered his face with his hands. He was very frightened by such an action, as if he had expected something else. When the snake peered through the ajar doors and saw the unknown mist there, it was as shocked and frightened as its master. But that was not the case with Yelan. He said to himself with admiration that he had never imagined that the kettle would be so heavy. He put his palm around the kettle. A bright blue light shone through his fingers. The guy used all his strength to lift the kettle, but it was still incredibly hard for him. And then finally he managed to tear that teapot off the table, which felt like it was glued on. When it happened, a bright light with strange energy waves filled the entire house. From shock, mixed with a wild sense of fear, the old man accidentally pressed on the back of the chair, causing him to start to lurch backward. A second later, he collapsed to the floor along with the chair, his fall with a loud clatter that was unexpected by the young man. The protagonist finally ripped the bottom of the kettle off the table just as the old man fell. But he tried so hard to grab it, so he put a lot of effort into it. And when the teapot unhooked from the table, because of Yelan's great exertion, he accidentally threw it upwards. But fortunately, he quickly caught on and started catching the kettle, which he did very well. He waved his hand in relief and wondered why the kettle was so light all of a sudden, since before it was literally impossible to lift. At this time, Liu Daozi, still sitting on the floor, assessed the guy's strength and admitted defeat. The protagonist took his coin and grudgingly asked the man if he wanted to cheat him, he would return the kettle, because he managed to catch it, but what to say about the gold coin. But the old man only told the boy that he was very capable, as if it were some kind of test. He asked what he could do to help him, but the young man was surprised at his sudden kindness to him. To this, Yelan replied that he didn't understand all these formalities at all, so he asked him to tell him all the information about this gold coin that he knew. The man immediately realized that the young man was testing him and told him that it was the gold of the underworld. Thanks to it, one could interact with ghosts and gods, as well as by yang energy. Hearing the words about the priceless treasure in this world, the young man was sure that this old man would make an excellent politician, for one could simply say that it was very expensive. Ordinary people will not be able to match the power of the underworld gold. If this treasure was obtained in an unconventional way, it will bring its owner bad luck. After listening to him, the young man asked if that was all. His voice sounded as if he hadn't heard some really valuable information. The old man continued that was all he could say. This treasure is very rare in the human world, so the old man assumed that if he was carrying it around, it was most likely a family heirloom. But Liu Daozi doesn't know yet that the guy has a bag of such coins in his pocket. He asks the man if he's implying that this coin is worth a lot of money. Some time ago, a millionaire from the city of seas, Zhou Shendong, wanted to buy a piece of underworld gold for $10 million. But this offer only made the Magicians' Alliance of that city laugh. When the guy heard the amount, out of shock, he again questioned the man if he had heard it correctly, to which the old man with calmness simply repeated the very same amount. $1 million equals about 60-70 yuan. Now the young man can just one coin to pay Cao Xiaoming's fare. And after all, he has many more of those coins in his pocket, and if he sells them, he could become a billionaire. The old man offered his help to find Mr. Zhou if there was any desire to sell the coin in question. After these words, the guy shouted out with confidence that he would sell it, but the old man must have expected a different answer, for he was shocked at the guy's answer. The man advised him to contact Zhou Shendong directly and sell the coin to him. It was rumored that he now needed the underworld gold to prolong his daughter's life. The guy was also surprised by the fact that life could be prolonged with this gold. He asked the old man to contact Mr. Zhou if possible. The man took his phone to call his acquaintance to help the guy in this case. He also asked to leave his number and add it to the chat room for communication, to get in touch when everything was ready. But if he left his number or added it to a chat room, he could be easily traced. The thought crossed his mind that they might want to steal from him, so the young man decided to give the old man his mail, for it would be safer that way. He asked him to send a letter to it when everything was ready. With a smile, the guy headed for the exit, and lastly said he'd look forward to hearing good news from him. Liu Daozi led the guest to the door and wished him a good day with a kind smile on his face. But when the hero had already left the house and passed the signboard, a snake looked at him with a hard stare. The old man extended his hand to the spirit, and the spirit circled him, feeling comfortable nearby. Suddenly the old man spoke to the boy about how his spirit liked him, to offer to take him with him. He said the spirit was smarter than most animals. But the young man waved his hand grudgingly with the words that he didn't want a pet that would bite him. Turning away and quickening his step, he added that he had other plans that were clearly more important than keeping a pet. Yalan started running with all his legs with the thought that that store girl had cheated him of as much as 10 million while the underworld gold was so valuable. But when the protagonist ran to the very store with the sale of antiques, it turned out that the building is now rented out, and no store there is no longer. The young man felt an eerie desolation within himself and resentment. Suddenly, his cry for his $10 million was heard throughout the neighborhood. Walking down the street with a disgruntled face, the young man felt angry about the situation that had happened. This girl has clearly crossed the line. She ran off with his coin, and if he catches her, she'll show him he's not to be trifled with. And when the guy arrived at the old man's store to check in with him on a couple things, the building appeared to be closed as well. Out of desperation, Yelan leaned against the door with a terrible state of bad luck. But he tried to reassure himself that Liu had most likely left to help him sell the underworld gold. But besides, the young man no longer knew where to look for information. But then a strange sound coming from above caught his attention. When he looked up, he found the spirit of a snake hiding from the boy. He tapped on the sign a few times and ordered the snake to come out as he had a couple questions for her. But there was only silence at his words, the spirit not daring to show itself before him. So he started to knock and threatened that, if it didn't come out, he would tear down the sign. But the snake snorted aggressively at him, showing its sharp teeth. The young man reached out to her with the thought that if she wasn't talking, then she was of no use to him, so he decided that her place was now at his dinner table. Snake threw a furious glare back at him, as if trying to tell him that it wasn't cultured to do that. But suddenly, the spirit of the snake turned into the spirit of the girl who called the guy a scoundrel because of his words. When the young man saw such a transformation into a beautiful girl, he was pleasantly surprised to see such a lovely face. He lightly poked his finger at her, and asked if she wanted to be like Bai Su-jen from the White Snake legend when she grew up. But the girl sitting in his palm asked him what he wanted from her. She was very angry with this guy. That's why she didn't want any contact with him. He asked when Liu would return home, to which the girl replied that he had gone to work in the city of Seas and would not return for at least 2 days. And this long drive proved to be a problem for the guy, because if not Liu, then who could tell him about this street? As here, the girl said that he could approach her with this question, as she knew a lot about this street. But the guy didn't believe she could know much about this street, considering what she does every day is what she hangs on this board. But that was the whole flow of information. But this did not in any way arouse confidence in the guy. After all, if she's so smart, why Liu left her to guard only the store? To which the girl said that this old man does not understand anything. But according to Liu, she's his pet, and it's very strange that he doesn't know that. Liu is a poor and crazy old man who tried to get into the upper circles of the magical community, and if he found out she could talk, he would show her off to every person he met. But that could lead to spirit theft, and the old man is too weak to protect her from others. It was only a matter of time before evil mages would steal her and do whatever they wanted to her. From what he heard, the boy wondered why she spoke to him. Isn't she afraid that he might eat her to increase his power? But the girl has seen a lot of people in her life and can confidently say that people like him do whatever they want, but they don't fall as low as evil mages. This girl's name is Wang Xuan, 32 years old, no children and divorced last year. She was a hot girl and known to many. The girl also said that Wang likes to wear thongs. A courier who works in the area saw this twice. But when she wanted to say something else, the young man immediately interrupted and asked her to stop. Yelan called her too noisy for a snake. And as it turns out, Van lives in new mansions on the west side of town. Her godbrother bought her a mansion. Much to the girl's surprise, she was in possession of too much information. The guy asked if listening to it every day was bad for her health. But he asked for the information himself and got it, but now he's annoyed by the amount of it. After her words, the girl once again turned into a silent and cute snake. And just as she was about to turn back to her sign, the guy immediately pulled her tail, bringing her back to him. He forcibly twisted it to a minimum to fit in his pocket and take it with him. Her help would come in handy for the guy looking for that hot girl. He also asked her not to say anything until he asked for it himself. But the girl called him names again, hesitating in his pocket. Soon the boys reached the very huge mansion in which Wang Xuan resided. Looking into the yard through the high fence, the guy saw the presence of guards. He went back to the bushes and began to think about how he could get into her house without being seen, because it would be quite difficult to do so, given such a rich mansion. But then the guy realized that he didn't necessarily need Qiao Xiaoming. After all, he could master the body of other ghosts as well. Taking a bug out of his pocket, he asked where he could find ghosts here to use his body. The girl at that time complained about the horrible smell that came from his worn pants. But Yelan claimed that guys shouldn't be clean, so he ordered them to stop this chatter and tell them where to find the ghost here. But the doozy told them about destroying the priest packs. The young man was very surprised that this snake knew about the special company. He told her that he had nothing to do with the special company, but had no one been able to escape? Since the special company uses strong magic weapons, no ghost can resist it, so there is no chance to find ghosts in the city. Here, Yelan wondered if he really had to wait for Qiao Xiaoming to wake up. But while she woke up, Wang Shuwen could leave the city. As here the spirit has an interesting idea that will help him find the ghost. But there is one condition for that. The protagonist asked with an annoyed look why it was that she was the one who started getting cocky and making her terms. And if it continued, the guy threatened to tell Liu that she was a talker. Duh tried to reassure the young man that it wouldn't cause him any inconvenience. Guy ordered her to tell him how to find the ghost first, and then he would listen to her condition and consider whether to fulfill it. When the young man once again asked not to procrastinate, the spirit asked with a sly smile if he had ever heard of a Bloody Mary. At her question about the Bloody Mary, the guy immediately remembered the alcoholic cocktail and looked at her in bewilderment. The girl immediately realized what he meant because she said it was too early for him to drink alcohol, as he could get alcohol poisoning. The protagonist remembered that he had heard about it somewhere, and to summon a ghost, you have to do the ritual at midnight. It was strange for the guy, because it was possible to summon a foreign ghost. What matters most to a person is what ghostly world they are from, where all spiritual beings live. Ever since a special company came along, ghosts can't leave the human world. The girl exhaled with some heaviness, saying that she had told him quite a bit already, but he still hadn't agreed to her condition. The guy inquired about her condition and promised to think about agreeing to it. She asked admiringly and hopefully for his agreement if he would take her away from Liu when it was over. But the young man truly understood her. He would have wanted to run away himself, as hanging all day long on the same board was a terrible feeling. He also offered to give the old man a good lesson. But the girl asked him to stop, for the old man was quite good to her. He was just too ambitious for a not very capable man. He continues to hope for an increase in status among mages. Normally, only the largest city in a province could form an alliance of mages. But Liu had created an alliance of magicians in a small town. And not only was Liu the only member, but he also appointed himself the leader, which was considered a disgrace. The protagonist asked to stop telling rumors about Liu. Pinching the spirit's chubby cheeks, he asked what she specifically wanted. The girl explained that she could continue to live with Liu, but because of Yelan's help, he might become famous, so she might be noticed by the mages. It wasn't clear to the guy why he could become famous by selling underworld gold, but all because there are a huge number of people around who want to get this gold. Yelan was surprised that the underworld gold appeared to be so difficult to obtain. After all, he had no problems with it. The girl said it was up to him, but if she wasn't taken and someone stole her, this suffering she would feel would be worse than annihilation. But the hero did not realize what N could do, since he is an ordinary schoolboy who needs to study, and the spirit cannot constantly hang on him and do nothing. She tried to talk the young man down, pressing her pity with tears, and the fact that she was just a lonely little snake with no arms and legs, so all she could do now was guard the doors. Yelan didn't fall for her insincere tears, telling her to stop pretending, and if she didn't have any more abilities, then she wouldn't be of any use. The spirit began to say that she was useful in that she could draw, play musical instruments, and sing, but these were all useless qualities to the young man. And then she realized that he just so not to persuade, because she told him that she can detect treasures, feel ghosts, and when she grows up, will be able to control the rain, which is very interested in the guy. She started waving her arms aggressively to the sides with words that she could also fly, though only when she grew up. This information impressed the guy very much. He liked the fact that she would be able to ride him on her own most of all, and the girl herself confirmed it. After that, he put the spirit on his head and dragged it behind him. The girl showed that she clearly had some use for her, so he would not leave her, but he set the condition that she would feed herself, not to interfere and do whatever he said. The girl embraced a couple locks of hair with a cute smile, thus showing that she was very grateful to him for such a decision. And so Yelan started looking for the mirror he needed for the ritual in the Bloody Mary game. A couple hours later, it was already dark night outside, the stars lighting up the sky, and the young man was still looking for a mirror. As here he decided to enter the common restroom, which was outside. Walking over to the mirror, he looked at his reflection in it while the girl's spirit sat nearby. He asked in puzzlement if she was sure it was right to look for the bathroom in the middle of the night, as it felt kind of weird and uncomfortable. But since it's not easy to find a mirror near the mansion, the girl suggested they think about what they could do now to do the ritual. When she asked if the guy had a lighter, he suddenly pulled a large cleaver out of his pocket, which made her very scared. But the girl's fear was in vain as the young man pulled out the cleaver as a lighter, when a small light came on at the end of the blade. The guy warned the spirit that he didn't have a lighter, so he could use this light. And, as it turned out, using the flames of the fires of the underworld to summon a ghost was a very foolish decision for a spirit. The guy grudgingly asked the girl what she was saying so aggressively to herself. He needed to know if it would work or not, after all. She let out a heavy exhale since there was no point in contradicting the guy. So she asked him to close his eyes and repeat 3 times the words that should summon the ghost. The young man closed his eyes and tuned into the ritual, his face serious and focused on what was happening. And when he was finally ready to speak, the young man said loudly for the first time the phrase that he believed in the existence of the Bloody Mary, just as the girl had instructed him to do. His next words were to repeat this phrase 2 more times. And as the protagonist spoke the last words, a light bulb above him began to flash and spark. And right after that, a light wind blew out of nowhere. Yelan watched with an astonished look as he watched the strange things happening. Apparently the spirit of the snake had never been present at this stage on the ghost summoning, as anxiety came over her, causing the girl to lean on the guy's arm. She climbed out on the young man's back and peered forward from behind his back, so she could hide quickly in case of emergency. Suddenly a blue light appeared at the bottom of the mirror, the kind the guy used for the ritual. And behind that light, the dark silhouette of a woman appeared. Her eyes glowed bright red, and her disheveled hair and angry look made the boys uneasy. Suddenly blood began to appear around the mirror on the walls, while the ghost kept approaching the guys from the other side of the mirror. Although the sight didn't look pleasant and inspired some fear, but Yelan was glad that this method was working. The ghost of a girl looked out of the mirror with a sly look and a suspicious laugh, as if she wanted to show that she was not a kind ghost. Na, with a stern look, reached forward to grab the boy and give him a feeling of wild fear. But Yelan was not someone who could be frightened so easily. On the contrary, the young man felt power over the ghost as he had summoned it himself. And when the ghost wanted to take hold of him, he immediately grabbed her bony and cold hand, thus stopping the girl. The protagonist sharply pulled the ghost on himself to quickly pull her out of the mirror. But this the ghost clearly did not expect, and to the last was sure that everyone would be afraid of her. But then the young man suddenly let go of the ghost's hand, which slipped out on its own. He collapsed on top of the little spirit with a clatter, while the ghost, with a shocked look, tried to grasp onto something. Yelan slightly stood up, took hold of his head, which he had hit, and asked why this foreign creature was so slippery while behind his back. The girl was trying to recover. The snake spirit finally opened its eyes and looked at what was going on. But then she caught on and yelled at the guy to pay attention to where she was pointing. While they're trying to figure out what's wrong, the ghost starts running back to their world through that very portal, so the young man needs to grab her as quickly as possible. He quickly ran over to the mirror and slipped his hand inside to grab the ghost and pull it back out. When the guy yelled and ordered them to go back, you could hear the aggression in his voice. Just then, a large beam of light struck the mirror out of nowhere, accompanied by a small amount of fire. Luckily, the guy managed to catch the ghost. He pulled her hair from inside the mirror. But then the ghost literally dissolved in his hand and turned into a bright mist that dissolved throughout the room. Yelan was in a panic. He didn't know how he could deal with this ghost when she turned into mist, as here the girl suggested using the fire cleaver. Suddenly all the fog turned into a huge hand that was heading towards the guy and wanted to grab him. The protagonist immediately scattered fire from his fire cleaver in front of the ghost's face. The ghost felt a sharp pain that pierced her entire body, causing her to scream at the top of her voice. Suddenly the ghost's scream stopped and up went the black smoke, which was accompanied by silence and a slight tingling of the remaining heat. Her body was burned, leaving behind only remnants. Yelan silently looked at this picture. Suddenly the awkward silence was interrupted by the screaming of a spirit that was sitting on the guy's shoulder, berating him for burning her when he should have just caught her. The spirit glanced at the mirror and suggested she try the ritual again. She was sure there would be many more of these ghosts to be found. This fire cleaver was too powerful for use with ghosts, so the hero decided to use a calmer weapon, namely Xiao Xiaoming's rope. Taking the rope firmly in his hands and closing his eyes, the young man attuned himself to the words for summoning the ghost, and spoke 3 Bloody Marys. Here the girl reminded the master that he had forgotten a few words, and to speak incomplete phrases is a huge mistake. The young man relit the small light on the end of the cleaver, an essential part of the ritual. And just a couple seconds later, a new ghost of a girl began to appear from the other side of the mirror, which meant that their ritual had worked again. And when the ghost began to reach forward like the former to grab, the boy closed his eyes tightly and tuned into the right feelings. Suddenly the young man opened his eyes, a look of confidence in his gaze, and with that he pierced the ghost with a burning gaze that made her startled. When she was frightened, she immediately turned around and started running back to her world. But Yelan didn't want to just let her go. He instantly threw Xiao Xiaoming's rope at her and wrapped it around the ghost's throat. And when the rope was securely around the ghost's throat, the guy pulled it toward him, thus pulling the ghost out. But the girl tried with all her might to get out of the rope. which still wouldn't let her go and kept blocking the air. The hero finally succeeds in strapping the ghost's entire body so she can't get away. He shouted happily to the spirit about how he had managed to capture her and now the ghost would be near and unable to escape. But the girl didn't want to give up. She kept twitching and hoping for release. But as soon as she pulled back, the guy immediately pulled the rope on himself. Suddenly, the ghost's body seemed to scatter to the floor. Instead, the girl's soul showed up, her gaze haggard. And after a couple seconds, there was a trace of a second destroyed ghost on the floor next to the burned ghost. The girl exhaled heavily, telling the guy that he had already destroyed the second ghost. The young man began to summon the third ghost with aggression. He had already tried 2 variants of how to keep the ghost near him, but they were all wrong. After he said the desired phrase 3 times, the new ghost's head appeared from the mirror. The hero instantly tied a rope around her entire body without the start that comes when a ghost tries to grab a person. A girl stood behind and supported the guy, wishing him luck. When the ghost calmed down a bit, the young man asked her to just be quiet and promised to let her go when he had done his business. After he explained that he needed to master her body, Yelan, without wasting any time, began to enter her body. And so he found himself in that very gap between the human world and the ghost world, where there was cold water and nothing to see but darkness. When it was done, the young man opened his eyes, hoping that his plan had worked and he was in the body of a ghost after all. Looking at his hands, he saw pale skin and cold female hands, which meant he had finally succeeded in being in the body of a ghost. But when his new incarnation was seen by the girl, she uttered the word goddess with terror in her eyes. As it turned out, the young man took on the guise of a goddess ghost, which spoke of the ghost's powerful abilities. The protagonist looked at himself in the mirror with incomprehension, and did not understand what it was about and why his appearance caused such fear and excitement. But the girl didn't want to explain anything. She said in a rush that she had unfinished business, so she had to run away urgently. And while he scrutinized his new appearance, the girl quickly headed for the exit, to leave the place as quickly as possible, and not be near the ghost of the goddess. But when the girl was about to quickly leave, Yelan grabbed her with his hand that looked out from behind the ghost's back. Suddenly, the snake was in the ghoul's body. It began nervously trying to find a way out, but there was only darkness around it. The guy took her in his arms and began to bind her body in a way that restrained her movement and prevented her from getting away at any chance. He put it in his pocket with the words that she was a snake and didn't need to cook her dinner, which she made up as a reason to run away. And so finally, Yelan can finally, in the body of a ghost, go and retrieve his precious underworld gold. When he left the restroom at this time, it was just over 12 at night on the clock. But to his great surprise, the boy advanced a couple of steps after 10 minutes. The young man obviously did not expect the ghost to move so slowly. Even a snail could outrun this ghost at this speed. And what to speak of the rogue, it would take him a very long time to get to her house. The young man suggested tying up the ghoul and possessing her body near the mansion. But that wasn't the best option either, as the ghost might get its hands on her while he was gone. He decided to ask the ghost how he was able to bind her so quickly if she appeared so slow, but she didn't understand his language, so slurred this reply. And then the boy realized that this ghost was foreign, and they could not understand each other. But their countries were too far away from each other. Had she moved so quickly because of the mirror? Therefore, to understand how this could happen, the guy passed through the mirror to the other side, but in the moment of transition, he did not feel anything special and suspicious. It looked like he had been transported to the same restroom he had entered. He decided to look around and see how things worked here. Walking a little way across the room, all he could see was the green mist that was dispersing around him. And so, as he stepped through the door that led outside, he saw something that struck the lad. In front of him, there were many different lights in the sky that attracted with their light and beautiful appearance. It even seemed to him that those lights were so close and yet so far away at the same time. They literally beckoned to touch and see what the reaction would be. But as soon as his hand touched one of the lights, a bright, blinding light immediately shone on him. This unknown energy spiraled into a kind of spiral that grew larger with each turn. It soon grew to such a size that it illuminated the entire city above it. As here he saw a still unfamiliar door that he hadn't looked through, so it was interesting to investigate what was behind it. Looking in, he saw a bathroom. Hearing the sound of water, the guy assumed that some beautiful girl was showering in one of the stalls. Moving closer to the mirror, he decided to peek in and see who was now in the shower. But on the other side, the guy saw some man taking a shower humming songs. This was not the sight Yelan expected to see. He instantly grabbed his eyes with a desire to forget what he saw. He realized that there was nothing interesting to do here and started running away, slamming the door behind him. All the bright lights he saw in front of him were the connection between the mirrors. As soon as he found the right one, he could teleport to the mansion, but he had to find the light. There was almost no difference between these lights, but luckily he had downloaded himself a map of the area and didn't need that connection. After a little searching on his phone for the mansion, he found his way to it very quickly. The mirror that led to the mansion was not far away, and the young man headed for it. At this time, the blonde in her mansion stood in front of the bathroom mirror and painted her lips. The girl's figure really pleased the guy. He decided that all his hard work would not be in vain. But makeup at midnight. This is a common scene for horror movies. Suddenly, some man entered the girl's room and interrupted the makeup process with a menacing voice. It was a fat man with a rough look. He asked the girl why she should paint her lips at midnight, for which she was only wasting her time since the customer was already worried. The girl tried to reassure her interlocutor that all girls put on makeup before leaving the house. Besides, the goods were in her hands now, and the buyer could wait. Just then, the heavy footsteps of a man were heard, heading towards the girl. His gaze was sharp, and would put anxiety on any interlocutor. He was sure that it was better not to make a mistake in front of such a customer, for it was Biao's boss, and making him wait could make him very angry. Continuing to apply her makeup, the girl wondered if that silly boy would be able to go out on them since that coin was so expensive. And while they were talking, a ghost began to appear in their room, conjuring up his devious plans and forcing the man to make bad decisions. The girl continued to go about her business, unaware that there was a traitor behind her. The man asked the girl if she was worried because the treasure was worth millions, and she sold it to him for 3,000, which meant literally robbery in broad daylight. But then Yelan's gaze changed. He saw something that really scared the guy. The man took a chain in 2 hands and was going to put it around the girl's neck. He convinced her that he had prepared and booked a ticket for her, and when they got the money, he would get her out of the country. He asked where the gold coin Wang Shuwen had hidden was. He was going to take it to the car because the girl was taking too long to pack. According to Wang Shuwen, the coin is next to the bed. She wrapped it in a yellow cloth, put a bronze coin on top, and stuck it in a wooden box. And when she told him where the gold coin was, the man immediately hit her with a spiked knuckle. Seeing the bloody stains on the other side of the mirror, Yelan even flinched in surprise. This guy had destroyed it and didn't even blink an eye. While Wang Shuan's body was lying on the floor in a bloody puddle, the guy started looking for the gold coin where the girl had left it. Looking into the wooden box, the lad made sure the gold coin was there, and while he was looking at the presence of his goods, a spirit flew over his head and fed the energy from his dirty deeds. After making sure the item was in place, the guy slammed the box shut and took it with him. He lifted the girl's lifeless body so no one would find her and put her away in a safer place. Taking the gold coin box with him and putting the girl's body on him, the guy headed down the hallway. And as soon as the door slammed shut, Yelan immediately flew into the room through the mirror and looked on with a devastated look as he found it increasingly difficult to pick up his coin. At that time, the man took the girl's body outside and put it in the trunk of his car to dispose of it. The protagonist watched as he slammed the trunk shut, then headed for the driver's seat. Closing the door behind him, he threw the coin box on the seat next to him. The protagonist got into his car in the back seat and made the decision to get his coin first and then call the police from the guy's phone. The guy's black car was speeding away, avoiding every car in its path. Yelan tried to reach the wooden box on the front seat and he almost succeeded. But suddenly his hand was grabbed by someone, thus stopping the guy and preventing him from taking the valuable coin. Yelan's unexpected appearance in the car interior was seen by the man's personal ghost. He asked the foreign ghost with a sly smile if he wanted to steal Boss Biao's item. But the young man did not want to part with his valuable coin. He claimed that the coin belonged to him. The ghost grew to a large size compared to the young man. He growled aggressively, attempting to invoke a sense of fear and drive the ghost away. Yelan immediately thrust his hand into the ghost's face, causing his appearance to slightly sputter. Suddenly the man heard a strange sound that was accompanied by a growl, which frightened him very much. He looked at the back seats with a panicked look and asked with a worried voice who it was that was talking. But there was only silence in response. He thought it was just his imagination and followed the road. At this time, there was a battle between 2 ghosts in his car that he couldn't see with human eyes. Yelan bravely fought the ghost without moving away from the battle. When he finally got a firm grip on the ghost, he immediately threw it out the car door. But as soon as the ghoul left the car, the horrible odor that came from the ghost was immediately heard. The protagonist pokes his head out through the roof to breathe clean air. But while he was breathing the air, the odor reached the front seats where the man was sitting and smelled a foul odor. This guy destroying Yelan wasn't difficult at all. But the other question was, who was Boss Biao who sent the ghoul to the bald guy to influence him to end the man? The young man approached the man and lightly blew on his face, saying in a quiet voice that he should hurry over to Boss Biao. This is when the guy realized that there was a ghost in his car, which made him very scared and drove the car crooked. Soon he had already reached the mansion where Boss Biao was waiting for him, hoping for a successful purchase of goods. He stopped at the entrance to the mansion and hurriedly got out of the car to call for help sooner. The man got out of the car with a dazed look, looked at the closed door of the mansion and headed towards it. Louis Z started knocking on the door as loudly as possible and asking to be opened as soon as possible. He also introduced himself as the person who came to give the goods to Boss Biao. And yet his voice was answered by the people who opened the doors. Two strange creatures that didn't look like humans looked out. Their gazes were as if they were frightened. The protagonist looked at them and couldn't tell if they were humans or ghosts, as their appearance was very strange. One of these guys asked where the gold coin was now. Louis Z instantly held out a wooden box and said in a worried voice that it was in it. The guard also asked if the guy had brought the girl's body with him, to which he replied that it was in the trunk. The man walked to the car and opened the trunk where Wang Shuwen's body should be. He took the girl's body and headed towards the mansion with it. But as he passed the car, he didn't notice Yelan looking out, which meant it was people after all. Gathering all together, they entered the mansion, unsuspecting the presence of a ghost. Without a word, they only slammed the door behind them and went to a particular room. The protagonist guessed right away that they were going to Biao's boss, which means we need to track where they're going. As soon as the young man reached the door, the voice of a spirit was immediately heard, asking him to listen first before going inside. Yelan pulled her out from the chest area and grudgingly asked why she was shouting. After all, she might cause him to lose sight of those guys. The spirit began to get angry with the guy, for they had come to Fang Kai Biao's villa while he was looking for the evil rogue, and with her, the gold coin. When the guy heard the girl talking about Biao's boss, he looked at her in surprise and wondered how she knew him. The girl started waving her hands in an attempt to get through to the guy that this boss Biao is the ruler of the City of Seas, and at the same time, one of the strongest evil mages among the magic community. But the young man didn't care at all how powerful this man was. Boss Biao had taken his coin, and the young man was going to take it anyway, but the girl was afraid of him, so she decided to go back to Liu. The protagonist opened his palm, and the spirit immediately fell to the ground. He wondered how she would get there since Liu's house was too far away. But the girl immediately ran away into the bushes, saying that this should be his last problem. The boy looked after the girl, calling her a coward. At the end of the conversation, the girl peeked out from behind the bushes and warned him that there were 6 rows of maze in this villa, and one had to be extremely careful when getting there. After her words, she immediately disappeared from sight. The protagonist only silently glanced after her. He turned toward the villa and wondered to himself if this place was really so dangerous that even his spirit didn't want to enter it. But despite the fear and danger, the young man still wanted to take his gold coin, so rising above the ground, he confidently flew to the entrance. Suddenly, he was stopped by a ghost policeman. He stood in front of the boy and asked who he was, and how he dared to enter this house with a threatening look. The stern policeman asked who was before him and why the stranger had entered the house. Seeing this ghost, the young man was very surprised to see him in a police uniform, and in this world, it turns out that he loved his job so much that even in another world, he is doing it. But after all, this ghost was exactly the same as Yelan, but for some suspicious reason, it is guarding the house of the living. The policeman introduced himself as the fair god of doors. He recognized the Bloody Mary at once, and he regarded her with contempt. Yelan began to immediately ask him many questions, for example, who appointed him and whether he had a license, which he demanded to see. Here the policeman thought about having his papers, and apparently he didn't know that having them was also very important. As the young man approached the policeman and shouted that in their time every job has a license. According to the black-faced god, if he had a license, then he could go wherever he wanted, but without one it was illegal. The policeman asked with a dumbfounded look who this black-faced god was, for he had never heard anything about him. But Yelan asked him not to pick on his words and just provide the license after all. Telling him that the black-faced god was his teacher was not something the young man was going to do. But the policeman has no ID. He's standing here at the behest of the company, and they didn't tell him anything about a license. When he heard that, the guy just pushed him out of the way. The young man convinced the policeman that his company had cheated him, so he urgently needs to call and find out everything. And if that's the case, he should let the young man through. Not hearing a reply, Yelan brazenly walked through the portal that worked as a door and headed to quickly hide somewhere while the policeman tried to catch up with him. The hero quickly hid behind a building to avoid being seen by the policeman. When the guy realized that this man couldn't find him even after his transformation, he realized that he had gone out of his life by his own stupidity. The fair god of doors was at this time looking around wistfully, trying to figure out where the Bloody Mary might have run to. Yelan managed to leave unnoticed. He also noticed that once he got used to his new body, his speed increased significantly. But this villa really was worse than a maze. Just then he came upon a very interesting place. It was part of a villa where there were rooms where people lived. This immediately caught the guy's attention, as there clearly had to be someone there. Suddenly, he saw Louis Z being led into one of these houses by those very strange guards. When they got inside, the guy ran to the door, but he couldn't go in next, as he didn't have time to slip through the open doors. He began to think about how to get inside unnoticed, but it didn't take him long to come up with a good idea. The young man flew up to the topmost balcony, hoping he could see something important through it. And yet he made the right decision. When he looked out the window, he saw something strange and surprising. Inside in a golden chair apparently sat Boss Biao, to whom Louis and Xuan's lifeless body were led. The protagonist immediately realized that on the throne sits the very Boss Biao, about whom everyone speaks so badly. But at first glance, he does not look like a bad guy. Louis approached him and held out a wooden box with the words that the goods were in it. Boss Biao took off his glasses and got up from his throne to walk over to the guy and examine the precious goods more closely. Boss Biao's gaze was stern. He walked with a confident gait towards the guy who provided him with the goods. Getting as close to him as he could, he asked with crazed eyes if he had met him on his way here. The guy was very agitated as he had an important person standing in front of him. He panically started to explain that he had not met anyone, but he had heard strange noises. Without answering anything, he snatched the box from the boy's hands with a sharp movement. He then grabbed his face with one hand and lifted him high in front of him. Opening his mouth, he began to absorb all of Louis's energy into himself. In this way, he was appropriating the life energy for himself. At the same time, he was taking Showen's energy even though she was no longer alive, but her power still remained in her body. The energy from the guy's bodies filled the entire room. It was like he was magnetically drawing it to him. This sight was quite vile and intimidating, making the guy uneasy to be around this person. After a couple minutes, Boss Biao finally absorbed the last of the human energy into himself, then threw Louis's devastated body on the floor. The guy was literally taken out of his life by sucking out all his energy. Having finished their dinner, his guards immediately dragged the boys, of whom only desiccated bodies remained, towards the exit. Just then, Boss Biao looked at the window where Yelan was looking out and said that since Bloody Mary was already here, there was no need to hide anymore. After Biao's words, the young man immediately tried to hide. He couldn't understand how the boss knew that there was someone else here. Perhaps it was because the ghoul he sent out didn't return. He was instantly seized with anxiety, so he pressed himself against the railing. But he had another question: how to get inside? Through the window or the main entrance? Just then he felt a strange change in his body, and a surge of incredible energy, as if his ghost was being rebuilt into something else. Suddenly, a girl he didn't know with good looks and an athletic body burst through the window. She addressed Mr. Fan, calling him the man who controls the underworld of the City of Seas. The moment she landed, she mentioned his impressive reputation, which means that holding back will no longer hold himself back and will show his true strength. As she landed in the room, she cast a confident and stern look over those present. Upon seeing the stranger, Yelan immediately noticed her beautiful appearance in such a bold act. The girl was immediately surrounded by a crowd of guards, protecting her master from danger. But the stranger wasn't scared at all. She just looked around her and adjusted herself to be ready for anything at any moment. Seeing a crowd of guards with guns around the girl, the protagonist was very surprised that she was not afraid to take such risks when she didn't have a single weapon in her hands. In the moment, the guy felt like a superhero who must surely save the beauty and win her over. The young man was sure that if he saved her, she would immediately throw herself on his neck to thank her savior, and then he could take a photo with her and show it to his classmates. The girl slammed her fist on her palm, hinting that she was ready to use force if Mr. Fan didn't agree to give her the valuable item she was asked to take from him. Boss Biao, with a calm yet frantic look, appreciated her courage since she was able to take out his men, and asked her to introduce herself. But the girl was sure he would pass away soon, which meant her name didn't matter to him. She also said with certainty that his henchmen would not avenge him after he was gone. She threw a confident look at him. The girl was confident in her actions considering Boss Biao's strength, but even so, she felt stronger. Suddenly, a blue ray shot out from the girl's solar plexus spot directly into Biao's chest. This beam with a strong pressure pierced through the guy's body, and even passed through his golden chair. And as it turned out, that beam was a sharp shield that stuck into the floor behind Boss Biao's back. Watching everything that was happening, the protagonist was shocked that they are all so brave here, can destroy a person and without even blinking an eye. A red stain began to emerge from Boss Biao's chest, clearly visible on his white shirt. Seeing that the boss was injured, his guards immediately became incredibly scared, as they thought their boss was the strongest and most powerful to the end, who would not allow such an end for himself. They immediately started running away from the villa as their boss was no longer with them. The lifeless Biao sat in his chair with his head bowed. Behind him stood his two subordinates who did not react in any way to what had happened. Left alone without the stupid guards, the girl decided it was time to take something valuable from this boss to get rid of him for sure. She swung her hand and her sword was immediately at her side, attracted as if by a magnet. The girl leisurely approached the body of the man whose face displayed her shadow. Instantly grabbing his hair, she lifted his head so that the man's face was clearly directed toward her. Swinging her sword at him, she pronounced that his head would be payback for all those innocent people he had harmed, and didn't even feel guilt. Suddenly, Biao opened his mouth wide with a loud scream. As it turned out, it wasn't easy to get rid of him since he didn't have human strength in him. Even though the girl knew his power, but this sudden gesture still scared her slightly. But she didn't back down. Yelan watched with great interest, and the fact that Biao appeared to still be alive amazed the young man and made him worry for the girl's life. Just then a stream of strange green smoke flew out of the boss's mouth and onto the girl, and when all the mist was out of his body, he began to scream in an exhausted voice, as if this unknown substance had come out along with all his vital energy. Black smoke began to billow from his wound, which dissipated around his raised body. Suddenly, smoke began to possess the body of one of the subordinates who had been standing idly at the back of Boss Biao's chair all this time. And when at last the black thick fog dissipated, out of it appeared the transformed guard in the body of a man. The girl immediately began to guess that he would now control the subordinate. He turned to the girl and said with a mocking smile that she probably hadn't expected such a transformation. But the heroine didn't even think of stopping. She was very brave and fair to back down then when she had gotten this far. The girl tore toward him and swung at the man with all her might, but the man only watched her attempts to hurt him. Suddenly, the girl felt a sharp sensation of weakness in her whole body and realized that she obviously wouldn't be able to run to him. She couldn't endure her bad condition and couldn't stay on her feet, causing her to fall right in front of Boss Biao's face. The girl was very angry at the guy for his despicable act, but there was nothing she could do about it. As it turned out, the girl was poisoned, but she shouldn't have cut off his head when she had already taken his life. It only made it worse. Suddenly, Boss Biao's loud and sinister laughter sounded. He felt power over the girl and powerful. The guy took the girl by the head and pressed down on her with great force. The heroine couldn't affect it, because she realized that her strength would not be enough. Grabbing her head, he lifted the girl up by her head. Because of her flying dagger, the guy concluded that she was from the Kong Kong sect. The girl put Fang Kai on notice that all his evil deeds have been exposed. In all his time, he had taken the lives of many innocent people to get the transparent pill. Suddenly, Fang Day threw the girl to the floor. He confidently said that his life would soon become much cooler than all of their takings. So the guy decided to show her something that would prove his words. He took out an underworld gold coin from his pocket. Seeing it, the girl was amazed that he had such a valuable treasure. Fang Kai once again started laughing loudly with the words that even the gods were on his side. From now on, he no longer needed the ghost pill as he could go to any world. After saying that he was leaving this world, the guy made a sharp cut on the wrist of his hand, after which he tilted his hand so that the blood dripped onto the gold coin for the ritual. Yelan didn't like his idea at all, since the guy wants to use his gold coin, for which the protagonist can get $10 million. He was not going to give up his coin, so he immediately jumped down from the balcony to retrieve his jewel. Seeing the ghost flying at himself, Fang Day was startled out of surprise, as he didn't expect to see anyone else here. But for some reason, Yelan couldn't stay in the air like a normal ghost. He reacted so quickly due to the adrenaline rush that he hadn't really thought about whether he needed to show himself. For reasons unknown to him, his body was being pulled downward, and the guy was already mentally prepared for a collision. During the fall, he tried to grab onto something with his hands, but despite his attempts, his power didn't activate in any way. Just like that, he fell face down on the floor while the girl and Boss Biao looked at him in bewilderment, as this ghost was something they had not observed here before. The protagonist barely got on his knees, and being in a bad state, culturally asked Fang Day to give him the gold, claiming it belonged to him. But Fang Day mockingly asked if she had had enough of living since the ghost had gone through his entire labyrinth and now wanted to take his own thing. Ignoring his boss's words, the young man looked around the building from the inside, trying to understand why it was so difficult to fly in it, since it had never been a problem before. The protagonist held out his hand and again culturally asked for his underworld gold back. But such insolence made Fang Day even angrier. He didn't like the fact that some ghost had broken into his villa and was demanding the gold back. Suddenly, Boss Biao threw a yellow leaf towards the guy, which literally appeared from his hand. Thus he wanted to harm the guy. The paper flew with incredible speed straight at the target. The paper was flying at an incredible speed, straight at the target. Yelan saw her right in front of him. This throw was so amazing that it was not easy to look away from such a sight. Just a little more and a piece of paper would fit into his face. But then the protagonist grabbed the sheet with a sudden movement and clutched it tightly in his hand. Looking at the slightly burnt sheet, he said with a shocked look that only a kung fu master could throw an ordinary piece of paper so skillfully. Just like that, there was a big explosion at the place where Yelan was standing. It looked like this sheet was a trap, and turned out to be an explosion sheet. Thick smoke filled the whole place. Fang Dai threw a stern look at him and called him a stupid ghoul who didn't even think if there was danger in front of him and just did as he pleased. But there was no sign that the ghost had been destroyed, as it was suspiciously quiet. This was when Fang Dai realized that something was wrong. He eyed the thick smoke suspiciously, trying to see if the ghost was alive. Yet his suspicions turned out to be true. When everything finally dispersed, Yelan was standing there. He appreciated this interesting paper with an unusual effect and asked for a couple more. Boss Biao didn't expect to see a living ghost at all. It seemed to be the first time someone had survived this weapon, causing Fang Dai to wonder why this ghost remained intact. But the young man was not going to tell who he was, for he had come here to get his gold of the underworld, and he was not going to leave without it, for he had traveled too far. Boss Biao was scared of the ghost's attack. He shouted that she was just a lowly, pathetic ghoul that could do nothing against him. And to try and defeat her, he decided to unleash a stunning talisman on the ghost, which was powerful enough, and Boss Biao was sure that it should harm her. Many different paper talismans flew towards the young man. Their number was very large to inflict maximum injuries on the opponent. Suddenly there was a loud popping sound, as if the sheets were sticking to something. All the paper talismans covered Yelan's body completely, but even that didn't make him get swept off his feet. He just stood covered in sheets. But the protagonist only brushed them off with his hand, and mockingly said that he must have practiced launching them for a very long time since he was so good at it. But unfortunately, for Boss Biao, it was all for nothing. And then Fang Dai could no longer tolerate this upstart. He wanted to get rid of her as quickly and efficiently as possible. So he pulled out a golden sword from behind his back. He took one leaf of his talisman and stabbed it onto the blade of his sword to launch it at the ghost and create a stronger effect. After that, the guy aimed it at the ghost and with a strong hand guided the talisman sheet forward. Suddenly, Boss Biao ran towards the young man and started trying to thrust his sword into his body. Fortunately, in the initial stages, Yelan was able to evade a direct hit. But then Fang Dai started to attack him from behind. But even then, the young man managed to dodge the blow, even though it was quite difficult. Boss Biao began to wind circles around the ghost, swinging his sword at it and reciting incantations. But after a couple of minutes of futile attempts, Boss Biao gave up. He was too tired to keep running around his opponent, and besides, his efforts were in vain. Yelan looked at the boss with arrogance and offered to rest for a while since he was tired. Surprisingly, the young man turned out to be unsellable. Almost without strength, Boss Biao leaned on his sword from fatigue to try to overcome it. He shouted for the ghost to stand still and not move. And while the protagonist took small steps backwards and said that he was only dodging because he didn't want to be cut, at this time someone behind him pointed the same sword. And while the guy was unsuspectingly walking on the tip of the sharp blade and trying to evade Boss Biao's strike, the sword was getting closer and closer to his body. Suddenly he felt someone lightly prick him from behind in the buttocks. From surprise, the young man even jumped back from where he was standing. He looked back with an aggressive look, asking who did it. When the guy turned around and saw another Boss Biao there, he started looking both ways in bewilderment, trying to figure out if he was imagining things. This guy was like a worm that reproduces through mitosis. Otherwise, he had no way of understanding how it could be that both identical people were standing on two sides. He started yelling at one of the guys for piercing his buttocks and calling him a pervert because of it. This blow was much harder than the previous ones, so he didn't want to look away anymore, but decided to fight back honestly. Quickly running up to Boss Biao, he snatched the golden sword from him, and winding circles around him started trying to escape. Suddenly he stopped in place and pointed his sharp blade at Fang Dai. A desire to take revenge on him in the same way he had done to him could be seen in his eyes. Boss Biao stopped on the spot apprehensively, and with a worried look he slightly stepped back, hoping that the ghost wouldn't stick a sword into him. But suddenly he felt the same pain in his buttocks as Yelan. The young man decided to take revenge on him for pulling a clever trick on him. A loud scream sounded after the heavy blow, followed by a large wound on Boss Biao, from which black smoke billowed out. The man collapsed to the floor without signs of life while black smoke slowly rose upward, filling the entire room. The protagonist apologized with an awkward smile for everything happening so quickly, but he didn't know that his clone would turn out to be so weak after all. Just then, the voice of a girl who was lying on the floor without being able to get up because of Finday's influence was heard. She shouted that now he had to destroy Boss Biao himself. But the young man waved his head to the side, claiming that he was a law-abiding citizen and not someone who was destroying people left and right. As Fang Biao shouted, he reminded that he was an influential person, namely the Lord of Sea City, and this night, he would definitely take the life of the persistent ghost. Folding his fingers into the proper lock, he began to recite the spell in a quiet voice. He then spread his palms and folded them again in an incomprehensible key to let the energy flow through. Just like that, he held out 2 fingers on both hands straight, and with an aggressive look he spoke the last words of the required spell. Suddenly, the very guard who was guarding his villa appeared in front of him. The boy asked the soldier to deal with his ghost now. But when the soldier saw the face of the very same girl in front of him, he was immediately thrown into a shiver, as she had recently tricked him into entering the territory that way. But Yelan was also shocked to see the same guard in front of him, as he thought that they wouldn't meet again. But then he heard his boss's orders to destroy this ghost, and he immediately put all his fears aside and headed in her direction with a threatening look. The guard swung his bat at him and gave him a furious look, wishing her to finally disappear from this world. The protagonist already knew how to steer this guard in a different direction. He began to say again that the guard's duty was to make sure that no one entered the territory. But the ghost considered it part of his job, described in his contract, and guarding the mansion with the client was part of his duties. He truly felt it was his duty. Yelan appreciated his dedication and love for his work, but he was still just as curious about where his license was and if it even existed. But this time, it is much harder to fool him. The guard realized that in his previous life, he had worked in the same profession and was without a license, which means he didn't need one. Just as the protagonist remembered that last time he said that he was the god of doors, not guards, which means he still needs a license to legally do the job. Soon their argument turned into shouting. The young man argued that he needed a license because it wasn't clear whether he was a door god or not, while the ghost tried to convince him that he didn't need one. Suddenly, Fangde jumped into their conversation. He was annoyed that a subordinate was wasting time figuring out matters with this ghoul. He had ordered her to be destroyed, and having a license shouldn't be her concern. The guard listened to his master, he realized. The ghost really wouldn't do anything to him, and how and where he worked didn't concern her. He clutched his two bats tightly and headed towards Yelan with threats. The guy realized that he needed to defend himself somehow, so he unwound Xiaoming's rope and threw it towards the guard. He managed to sheathe his entire body at the first time, depriving him of the ability to resist him. Boss Biao, standing behind him, was shocked that an ordinary ghoul managed to restrain the guard's movement. Wrapping his arms around the guard, he hooked him on the ceiling, and while the man screamed at him to fight him one-on-one, the young man turned away with a calm look. He said lastly that this was not the arena of heroes. They could certainly fight one-on-one, but for a man like him, a lesson in fives should be taught. Boss Biao's voice rang out. He realized that this ghost had come just for him and decided that he needed to fight it boldly and finally deal with all of this. But the guy decided to let his self-esteem slip, since he had decided that going all the way to China was such a long way to a foreign ghost just to destroy it. Boss Biao offered to buy his gold since he only wants money. The protagonist was very surprised by his offer, and first decided to find out how much he was willing to pay for the gold of the underworld. The girl tried to talk the ghost out of selling him the gold, otherwise he might leave this world and escape to another, causing the special company to be unable to do anything about it. To create the ghost pill, he tortured and destroyed thousands of innocent people. If he still manages to escape, all those sacrifices will be in vain, because they can't let him get away. But Yelan thought it was silly that she was trying to evil ghoul to become fair anyway. She should rest and not interfere with their trade. Boss Biao asked how much he wanted for the underworld gold. The man was determined to give him any amount for such a precious thing, because it would help him escape. The young man calculated that each coin is worth $10 million. It turns out to be about 10,000 million yen. But the guy decided to increase the amount of money, so the guy only demanded 1 billion considering he gave him a so-called discount. Upon hearing the price, the man became very angry. According to him, if he had $1 billion, he would have become a businessman, not a mafioso. The young man decided to clarify how much money he had, to which the man replied the sum of 5 million yuan. Yelan called himself an evil ghoul and he didn't come all this way to do charity. He demanded the return of his gold immediately. Fangde became very angry as Yelan had overstepped his bounds. He threatened to take his life here and now. Opening his mouth wide and showing his fangs, black flashes of fire flashed around Boss Biao. He released a large blob of energy on the ghost, which was about to hit the main character directly. The girl shouted that he needed to be careful as this effect was called a ghost pill and it was a powerful weapon. But the young man, without hearing what exactly this pill was, he calmly put his hand forward to just catch the clot flying at him. Yet he managed to do so with ease. He clutched the black smoke in his hand, which formed into 2 small rings. But suddenly there was a large explosion right after the energy in question was in his hand. The explosion reverberated throughout the building, many windows shattering due to the powerful force wave. At that moment, the young man felt a strong jolt all over his body. He was thrown backward with great power. Yelan flew across the room to the other side, hitting the floor several times. Boss Biao threw an angry look at him and said with a sly smirk, they would now see if the ghost could survive such a blow. When there was an explosion in the building, just at that moment, employees of a large company were flying over it. The man and his co-worker looked at the suspicious place in surprise and decided to look in. Through all the windows and doors in the building came thick smoke mixed with dust and with fragments of the damaged house. The guys immediately realized exactly what was going on there, but their gaze was still as calm and confident. Wenro's partner pronounced with a confident voice for her to do what was required. While Yelan was unable to confront Boss Biao, he immediately ran to the girl who continued to lie on the floor and couldn't even move. He gave her head a stepping on it, and told her that she would leave this world following the ghoul. As the thick smoke began to clear, the voice of a ghost was heard coming from it and began to cough. In the smoke, a standing ghost could be seen standing there in very poor condition, as it was quite a powerful blow. Boss Biao asked, with a shocked look, how she even survived the ghost pill. The protagonist opened his palm and looked at the small ball in surprise, and asked if this was the thing Fang Day was talking about. Even though he remained alive, the pill still caused him some sort of damage in the form of a severe headache. Fang Day no longer knew how to get rid of the ghost, because even so powerful a remedy had almost no effect on it. The young man told him to stop making himself a pathetic person, and finally return the gold of the underworld that belongs to him. While the boys were standing a short distance apart and arguing, their conversation was suddenly interrupted. A very bright light began to shine on them, blinding their eyes and forcing them to cover themselves. At this time, an energy ball with a certain figure inside it formed in Wenru's hands and influenced external factors. She made a protective dome around the entire villa that the average person would not be able to see, so that everything going on would be kept secret. Because of this impact, Yelan felt a strange vibration in his entire body, and energy rings appeared around him. He was puzzled and asked what was going on. Suddenly, a strong stabbing started in his chest, and the guy started to lose his balance and become dizzy. After which his real body was thrown out of his ghost body for reasons unknown to him. Seeing him, Boss Biao asked with a dumbfounded look who he was and why he was in a ghost body. While the real ghost lost contact with this world, the guy looked at her and smiled awkwardly, not knowing what to say. Just then, a sharp, loud sound was heard from the street. Boss Biao looked over there with panic and immediately realized what it was about. He said with a panicked look and with a trembling voice that it seemed to be the gold-suppressing belt that had arrived. Boss Biao asked Yelan with a startled look if he was from a special company. The young man hesitated on the spot, looking back and forth to see if the question was addressed to him and not someone else. He shouted that he was not an employee of a special company, so he asked me not to talk down to him. But Fang Day didn't believe the guy. He accused him of lying because only people from a special company could use the golden suppressive belt. Looking out the window, the guy realized that the golden light was the golden belt that Boss Biao was talking about. It seemed to be the belt that prevented him from continuing his control. Just like that, he realized that there was someone else here, and most likely this unknown person came from a special company since they had activated the golden belt. Boss Biao fell to his knees with a devastated look. He had always known that everyone in special company was an evil that he had been preparing for an entire 30 years of hiding from punishment. His emotions of aggression and resentment were going over the top. Fang Di had known all his life that he didn't have much time. With every word, the guy seemed to be self-destructing. He was filled with feelings of desolation and that his whole life was in vain, and he kept repeating the question of why Yelan didn't give him a chance. Watching him, the protagonist realized that Boss Biao was afraid that his soul couldn't pass on since he had very little time, causing him to create ghost pills. Just like that, he realized that it was legitimate to buy a path to another world from a special company, which meant that in fact, the special company was after him and Qiao Xiaoming. Fang Di claimed with a crazed look that the special company thought they could do whatever they wanted, and he wasn't going to just give up. Therefore, he decided to take Yelan with him since he didn't give him a chance to move to another world and save his soul. After his owls, he screamed at the top of his voice in order to fulfill his plan with the guy. The shouting and overflowing emotions caused Boss Biao to be covered in black smoke. His eyes also turned black, and his appearance was as if there was about to be an explosion. The young man stepped back apprehensively. He realized that Fang Di was about to literally explode, and he couldn't master the ghoul right now to save himself, and his human body wouldn't be able to withstand the explosion. He decided that the only best option now was to get the hell out of this place. But then his attention was drawn to the girl's body, causing Yelan to stop. He didn't want to leave her here in danger, when she had no way to leave the building. She was unlikely to escape in the end, so the young man decided to do a good deed. Grabbing the girl by the leg, he began to run away as fast as he could, and calling with him the ghost of the goddess, who stood there not realizing whether to run or not. Fortunately, they managed to run out of the building before it exploded. Just seconds after they ran out, a huge explosion erupted behind them. Rocks, dust, and debris flew behind the boy's back. The ground began to split in some places. Suddenly, large rocks began to rise up and stick together. Just then, two red circles that were very similar to the monster's eyes flashed out of the thick smoke. After which, the large and sturdy body of the monster that was slowly heading forward was clearly visible. Taking a step forward, Yelan was thrown aside due to a large stone falling in its place, forming a huge hole in the floor. As he fell to the floor, the young man hit the floor hard as his strength was not enough to stay on his feet. Raising his head, the guy looked up in horror. He had already decided that he could run outside, but then stopped by an unknown powerful force. Fear was red in his eyes as he saw something in front of him that shocked the guy greatly. He saw before him a stone monster of incredible size that was formed from the entire building and the remnants of the stones. The young man didn't know where to run to, as it was extremely difficult to escape from such a monster with ordinary strength. Just like that, a huge stone fist headed towards him, from which Boss Biao's threatening words could be heard. The guy immediately grabbed the girl in his arms to be ready to escape, but at the moment it was impossible. He was already ready to meet a powerful blow. He saw that intense gaze of the monster about to deliver the final blow to him. But after the first blow, Yelan managed to roll on the floor. The monster started trying to strike again, but from the next attempts to strike, the guy managed to get away with the girl. Picking her up, he said she could do with going on a diet, as it was hard to carry her, but he couldn't leave her either because of pity. The protagonist grabbed the girl in his arms and started running away before the huge monster noticed them. And so, the guy was already heading towards the exit of the villa, but it was already a good thing that he managed to run outside the building. It wasn't long before the monster noticed the guy was missing. He began to look out for him from all directions, hoping they weren't far away yet. Once between the two houses, Yelan put the girl on the floor to catch her breath. His voice was tired and exhausted. Revisiting all the pictures of this monster in his head, he was once again convinced that each blow of this giant weighed a ton. A glance at the girl told him that she was complicating the whole situation and slowing down his movement, but he couldn't leave her behind. Hiding behind the wall of the building, the young man peeked out slightly to see what the monster was doing there, and to understand its condition. The giant at this time was smashing everything in sight and kept looking for the guy, shouting insults in his direction. The young man realized that he didn't have enough strength to deal with him in the form of this clump. Besides, someone from the special company is nearby, so it is urgent to run away. Luckily, the speed of the super flash was still with him. Without it, his chance of escape would have been 0. Just then, the ghost of a goddess who happened to have found his place for hide and seek began to fly in his direction. Upon seeing the ghost, the boy was covered in cold sweat due to the sudden rush of excitement and the realization of what could happen if the giant spotted her. He started waving his arms and asking her not to fly in his direction. Since she was a ghost, she could save herself, and she was safe from his powerful blows. But much to the monster's dismay, he heard the guy's voice and saw him actively waving his hands at his ghost. The monster's eyes immediately lit up with joy and the fact that he had finally found this guy he longed to take with him. The young man immediately realized that there was no point in trying to stop the ghoul, because the ghoul had noticed them anyway. This displeased him greatly, for he had a chance to escape, but because of the ghost's stupidity, things didn't go according to plan. Throwing the girl on his shoulder, he shouted loudly that it was time to run, and rushed off with all his might. Ahead, he could see a broken wall leading to the exit of the dome, and once he got out of here, no one would be able to catch him. The lad was very close to the exit, therefore he made the most of his strength to leave the territory of the villa as quickly as possible. But as soon as he reached the dome, the guy fit into it with a loud thud, and hopefully he would just pass through it, leaving the monster surrounded in the dome. From despair, he fell to the ground and put the girl's body next to him. This exit was the last hope for salvation, and in the end, it turned out to be all pointless. The guy poked at the dome with his finger, trying to figure out what it was and how it worked. After touching the dome, waves began to spread across it. Yelan looked up to see exactly where the wall was coming from. At the top was a small object that was in the middle of the dome. It was what held the entire wall together. And as long as this item surrounds the mansion, the guy couldn't go outside the dome. It just wouldn't let other people through. Now a huge monster is rushing after him, so the guy urgently needs to do something about it. He decided to try and break the dome, or at least make a hole. The young man swung his fist with all his might and was about to hit the wall. A loud explosion rang out after the heavy impact, which only further attracted the thug's attention. The boy threw a serious look forward, trying to see if he had succeeded in breaking through the dome or not. But then he felt a strong pain in his arm. This wall was so strong that he couldn't break it. At this time, a huge monster was approaching him, and kept repeating the same insulting words towards the guy. Yelan saw the monster approaching, which was already quite close. There was no point in staying in this place, since it wouldn't penetrate the wall anyway, but it needed to save itself. He took the girl in his arms, tried again to break through the wall, but everything was in vain. But despite this, the young man believed that there must be some way out of this situation. The monster was already near the gate behind which the protagonist was standing. Once again, the giant's voice rang out, still trying to figure out where this guy was hiding. The young man could not stay in the same place, so he decided to find a way out in another building. Running to it, the young man punched through the wall with his fist to make an entrance to the inside. Yelan entered the building and looked around with a sharp and intense gaze while holding the girl's body behind his back. And while the monster's rough voice came from the street, Yelan tried to find a way out in another building, hoping for a good result. But much to his dismay, he was once again frustrated by the situation even in another building. There was a wall inside it too, preventing him from passing beyond the danger zone. He couldn't manage to break the wall or go through it, which perplexed the guy. He didn't know how to find a way out. Suddenly, the ghost of the goddess approached him from the other side of the wall, where there was complete safety. The young man wondered how she had managed to get through that dome. As immediately the hero's gaze changed, he saw something that incredibly shocked him. The foreign ghost showed that she could pass through the wall both one way and the other without difficulty. That's when the guy realized he could try to slip the body of the girl he'd taken with him. He took her hand and began to try his plan, hoping that it would work out and could at least get her through. But after trying to slip her hand in, nothing worked. As her body, though unconscious, it was still alive. The young man realized with a tired look that none of them could overpower this wall. Laying the girl's body next to him on the floor, he thought for a while, then concluded that it was impossible to pass through the wall alive, which was not the case with ghosts. Suddenly he remembered about Xiaoming, who could help him leave this place. But to meet Xiaoming, he needs the rope that is now in the building to tie up the guard. Just then, Xiaoming came down in front of the guy, as if she heard his thoughts and the fact that he needed help. The guy was insanely happy to see her here and was sure she wouldn't refuse to help him in this situation. But Xiaoming turned away from him with a resentful look and grudgingly hummed. To her great surprise, she returned to her former state. But after all, she had long ago gotten rid of all her offenses, so the young man wondered why this had happened. After which, the girl became a beautiful ghost again when she said she was angry with the guy. The young man wondered what he had done to feel resentment towards him. That question made the girl lose her temper. She started screaming that he had done enough to offend her, for example. Even that incomprehensible stone puppet. Yelan said with an awkward smile that all of this happened because of the underworld gold he has to pay her way. The girl was sure that Yelan had clearly done something else, otherwise the evil mage wouldn't have used such a forbidden technique. The protagonist asked if turning into a giant golem was a forbidden technique. He asked Xiaoming to teach the same technique. But this request only made the girl angry. She explained that the forbidden technique burns the soul to gain energy and get a sharp increase in strength. But it wouldn't last more than 20 minutes. Based on everything said, the young man now understood why Boss Biao hadn't used this technique in the beginning. He thought that Fang Day was just trying to hide his true strength from him. Here the girl decided to stop talking and look for a way out. Last time, when there was a special company in front of them, they were just lucky. But the probability of the same result is very small. Yelan pointed at the golden suppressive dome and said that it was damn strong, and he couldn't break it at all, only injuring his arm. And if there is no choice, then you need to find a place where he will have the opportunity to hide. Because Xiaomi will definitely be able to pass through the wall. It does not pass only the living. But the girl was also worried about the guy, and she didn't really want to leave him by himself, since this giant would be able to destroy him with a single blow. But the guy's plan was to just wait a bit, if this monster turned for a while anyway. And once it fell, the guy would find the man who controls the golden overwhelming dome. Just then the boys noticed the silence. From the street no longer came the monster's rough voice and his heavy footsteps, which were accompanied by the crashing of everything in its path. For unknown reasons, that stone monster stopped in place. The guys walked over to the window to see what had caused the monster to calm down. Or was it the suspension of the technique slash? Through the window they saw the monster standing still, staring at one point. The monster stood in place in front of one of the buildings, on the roof of which could be seen the silhouette of a man who sat behind a desk. Golem was very surprised to see a stranger here, who was oblivious to the presence of a huge monster. The man was one of the employees of a large company. He was sitting at his desk and writing something in documents. Just then his voice came out. The man asked the monster to introduce himself to him. After asking the monster a question, the employee of the large company looked at him waiting for a clear answer. But the golem had no intention of obeying the stranger. He asked the man who he was and why he wanted his name. The man in turn asked the golem a counter question. He wondered who the monster needed then, if not him. Golem asked in a rough and aggressive voice, "Was he also one of the big company like that guy?" With those words, the giant clenched his fist with hatred towards such people. He then struck his fist with great force against the building on the roof of which the man was sitting, at which time he said that he hated everyone who came from the special company. At this time, the guys watched as the giant began crashing the building again after a brief conversation. Yelan said with a smirk that this HQ guy looked much weaker than Wenro, and perhaps he was worried for nothing when he faced him at school. Huge blocks of rock flew in the street, everything was obscured in dust and remnants of buildings. But the big company employee had the advantage of a video of the protective little dome that was just above him. But that only made the monster even angrier. He couldn't bear the thought of not being able to hurt someone who was part of a large company, which caused him to start acting differently. The monster released a huge fireball from his palm. The ball was flying at an incredible speed, and it was almost impossible to stop it, especially to a living person. It all depended on how much damage it did. From the so blindingly bright light that came from the energy ball, the guys had to cover their eyes to avoid hurting themselves. After a strong blow, a man who was covered in dust showed up. He was shocked by the golem's insolent act. He obviously did not expect anyone to dare to harm him. He slowly took off his glasses, questioning the monster. Did the people of the big company really deserve to die? With the words that no one would listen to the opinion of the stone thug, the man activated some kind of lightning in his hand, which he was about to launch at his opponent. His gaze gradually became crazier and crazier, and his appearance changed to that of a powerful man with immense strength. He asked the monster if the golem itself deserved to die. After the man's transformation, the guys looked at him without taking their eyes off of him from looking so shocked. A strong man stood in front of them. His gaze was as cold as possible, and his eyes glowed with red light. He pointed his fiery weapon upwards, adding that his word decides everything. Suddenly he whirled his weapon, followed by spirals of fire which he controlled and directed. But the monster was also not going to just give up. He was intent on a fair fight. Besides, this man had insulted his opinion. Swinging his weapon, the man jumped high up to get close to the monster and strike it. Just like that, there was a large explosion on the golem's body, after which the man simply flew further away to avoid being hit by the debris. And as it turned out, it made a huge hole in the middle of the monster's body. He looked at the wreck of his stone body in bewilderment. But thanks to this explosion, the guy managed to pull out Feng Day's real body, which was deeply hidden behind the monster's appearance. He grabbed him by the throat and looked into his eyes with a crazed look. After that, he threw the guy on the floor and looked away with a smirk. He felt power and victory over such a powerful monster. Seeing all of this, Yelan was shocked. Could this goon really not be able to withstand a single blow? The girl was not very happy that a man from a large company was able to defeat an evil mage. The young man asked Xiaoming if these people from the special company would leave after the evil magician was arrested, and if they would be able to escape when they were alone. Xiaoming noticed something wrong on the employee's face, as if they didn't really need the evil mage this time, as if he only grabbed him because of the attack. Just like that, Yelan felt a noticeable movement of the walls that were gradually narrowing. He panically started to ask why this was happening. Xiaoming looked at him with a worried look and uttered that these big company guys were too serious this time. And then Yelan heard something that caused him to be shocked and made him extremely worried. Such emotions were caused by Xiaoming's words that the staff wouldn't leave without a boyfriend. The young man could not believe that these men had really come to capture him. The thought kept him in suspense. He asked Xiaoming if she was sure that they were only up to this whole thing to catch him. But after all, Yelan was just an ordinary high school student. What could they possibly need from him? According to the girl, he was the only person they were currently afraid of. But even this the lad could not understand what frightened them so much about him if he posed no danger to them. Xiaoming said that one day he would know the answer to his question. But right now, his main goal was to try to survive before that day came. The protagonist did not understand the girl's message, so he asked her to explain everything in detail. But Xiaoming turned away from the guy with a sad look and just kept silent. The silence only added to the anxiety of the unknown. He took her by the shoulders and demanded an explanation, which he never got. But Xiaoming really didn't want to make the situation worse. She pulled herself together and put on a smile for support. The girl asked for a promise that he would always be strong. She assured the guy that whether it was her or someone else, a lot of people were hoping for him. Suddenly, the guy reached out his hand towards the girl to try and see if the girl was sick. The young man could not believe that many people hoped for him, so he asked if ghosts could be sick too, as her words seemed incredibly strange to him. Suddenly, Xiaoming kissed the young man's forehead and asked him to promise her one very important thing. She pulled away slightly and whispered softly in his ear that he would always live, no matter what the circumstances. After this gesture, Yelan didn't know what to reply as he was shocked by this cute girl's kiss. Suddenly, Xiaoming was lifted into the air, wind rose around her, and her body began to transform into something else. The guy tried to call out to her, but the girl paid no attention to his words as she had more important things to do right now. After a few seconds, her former divine appearance was gone. Now she looked like an ordinary ghoul with a lot of grudges against humans. Opening her eyes, her gaze became evil, powerful, and left an unkind opinion. But it was still that good Xiaoming. She had made a reincarnation to try and break down this wall erected by the golden suppressive dome. Suddenly, a small explosion erupted from the building where Cao Xiaoming along with Ye Lan were. The girl abruptly rushed out through the ceiling upwards to get close to the dome. An employee of a large company also noticed this and looked up in surprise, trying to make out what it was. A man could be seen taking off rapidly in the sky, accompanied by a violet bright light. The man immediately got off the ground to fly closer to the ghost. He kept saying that he had finally found the one he had been looking for so long. His expression showed that he had a plan in his head to destroy the ghost. At this time, his colleague Wenro stood at the top of the dome and guarded the object that made the dome. Just like that, her gaze changed. She noticed the ghost of the girl who was causing her aggression flying towards her. Even though Xiaoming knew about the big company's employee being there, she continued to fly upwards to smash that dome. The girl was trying to reach the dome before she even reached it. She didn't even think about the fact that destroying the dome could hurt her herself. At this time, Wenro was waiting for her on the backside of the dome and had already set up to deal damage to the ghost. But as soon as they collided, the girls flew in opposite directions. Because Xiaoming managed to break through, a hole was created in the dome. Because of this, the wall gradually weakened, and Yelan finally had a long-awaited chance to escape. At this time, a battle of the strongest was taking place in the sky. Xiaoming together with Wenru was channeling energy one-on-one. Suddenly, Wenru's partner had already flown up to them to grab the ghost. The young man remembered Xiaoming's words that he should run the second he got this opportunity and not turn around, as his main goal was to save his life. But there was one thing that was slowing him down. The guy was wondering if these big company employees would destroy Cao Xiaoming if he ran away from them. The young man made a decision that he would not let these people hurt Cao Xiaoming, and would protect her for what it was worth. Looking up, the guy saw an incredibly brutal battle of strong guys, because he didn't even know how he could help them. After not much thought, the young man finally had an idea on how exactly he could help the girl. Looking outside, he saw Boss Biao's lifeless body in front of him, from which his anxious spirit was bursting out. At the same time, a man from a large company was approaching the girl to Wenro's rescue, and when he was finally close enough to her, he immediately swung his fiery weapon, from which bright light poured forth in great quantities. Still, he managed to deal some damage to Xiaoming, causing her to briefly lose control of herself and fly down a bit away from them. But she quickly came to her senses. She was overwhelmed with emotions of anger at these workers who had been too cunning. Wenru started behind Xiaoming to strike her, and the girl couldn't reply as she would already be injured then. A blue light lit up in Wenru's hand. She activated a powerful energy, after which she directed that energy towards the girl. As soon as it touched Xiaoming's back, the girl's loud cry immediately sounded. Despite the girl's terrible pain, Wenru continued to channel energy into her with a ruthless gaze so that her body absorbed it well. Suddenly, there was a violent explosion after the girl channeled maximum energy into Xiaoming. The girl from a great height fell to the floor with such force that huge cracks formed under her. It was very hard for her to get up, so she decided to lie down for a few seconds to recover at least a little. As the employees of a large company flew over to her, they looked at the girl with a neutral look. Xiaoming didn't want to submit to these people or appear too weak, so that they could easily finish her off. Her gaze was filled with hatred for them and a desire for revenge. Suddenly she flew past Wenro, heading upwards to try and escape them. And when Wenro was about to throw herself after the girl, she was stopped by her partner, who had a better plan to capture her than just chasing her. He threw a thread on the ghost and wrapped it up. It is very hard to break out of this trap as it is too strong and restrains all movement. The girl started screaming, but the man asked her to calm down and asked her who she was and why she attacked them. But Xiaoming clenched her teeth with rage and tried to explain that divine monsters like them shouldn't live. Therefore, he was asking two stupid questions. Guy was surprised that she called them divine monsters, for they are officers from a special company, not what she thought they were. Since these people were using divine monster magic weapons, their words about being from a large company raised doubts about it. Wenro showed the girl the fireball, wondering if this was the magic weapon the ghost was talking about. But as it turned out, they had confiscated this weapon 10 years ago. Xiaoming flew up to the man claiming that she was an agent from the heavenly world and had orders to destroy the divine monsters. Every agent from the celestial world must get authorizations from a special company in order to enter the human world, and her mission is registered with the company. She also demonstrated the mission code. The man looked at the screen, where there was indeed the name and picture of this ghost. He scrutinized all the information about this mission. But there was a catch. This mission was already 20 years old, which made her words suspicious and untrue. Here the young man burned her mission document with the words that it was cancelled, and from now on, Xiaoming should join the investigation conducted by a special company. The girl immediately provided them with evidence indicating that Fang Kai Biao is collaborating with divine monsters. So she's here to destroy this moment. But the guy didn't believe in her words and the fact that she could actually show up here because of a coincidence, since she had thwarted their mission at the most crucial moment. So he demanded to tell them now why she was here, and then he would make her demise quick. In order for the girl to tell him as much as possible, he squeezed her body tighter with the ropes, followed by Xiaoming's loud scream. The girl was bound with a strong rope and had no way of getting out, while the boys of the special company tried to find out who she was. Suddenly, Wenro noticed a large object in their direction, causing her to worry and make quick decisions. A large clump of rocks flew towards them. She immediately grabbed her partner's arm to draw his attention to the danger approaching them. The guy looked back with a keen eye and noticed a huge rock there, but it didn't scare him at all. He knew what to do in this situation. He instantly extended the hand in which he held his weapon and sliced a large rock in half with a single swing. Afterward, the guys were surrounded by a large amount of dust, which made it hard to breathe. The stone broke into 2 pieces, and those pieces flew in different directions. Suddenly, the silhouette of a man who was able to lift 2 huge blocks of stone with his inner strength began to appear. Just then, he revealed his true appearance. It was a monster with fire coming from it, its gaze aggressive and filled with a desire for revenge for what had been done to him. The workers from the special company took a close look at the monster. Now they have another fight to deal with the unknown monster. Suddenly, the monster's voice rang out, turning to the guy that dressed like an insurance agent and ordering him to let Xiaoming go. The girl immediately realized that Yelan had become possessed by a ghost to help her get out of the hands of those evil people. The guy took a couple of steps forward with a smirk, then said, "Very surprised to realize that the main star of tonight is this useless trash." From these words, Yelan became very angry, throwing stones at the guy. He repeated several times that the trash today was only him. But the man made a safety net for himself thanks to his weapon, so that heavy rocks couldn't hit the guy. The monster began to pelt him with more, and there were already so many rocks that there was a wall of dust that made it impossible to see the men of their company. Yelan decided to stop and began to look into the distance to see if those guys were still alive and still standing. The protagonist inside the soul of this monster felt terribly bad. He fell to his knees trying to catch his breath as being inside this ghost is incredibly painful. While the young man was trying to regain consciousness, he didn't notice the guy rushing towards him, pointing his weapon at him to try and strip him. Yelan cast an aggressive glance at the guy. This sly move infuriated the guy as that employee was a conniving man. The guy flew straight at Yelan, swinging his weapon with all his might. Already he was about to give him the strongest blow. Just like that, he struck the floor with tremendous force as the monster managed to escape from the place in a matter of seconds. The guy was overwhelmed with emotions of rage. He was very unhappy that the monster had managed to escape, and he had simply wasted so much power on this blow. Suddenly he felt a presence behind him. He immediately realized that there was a monster behind him. He froze in place, not daring to turn around. Just then he felt a sharp blow to his face. Yelan used his maximum strength to teach him a lesson. The blow was so hard that the guy was thrown far back. He fell to the ground from a great height, a sharp stream of pain running through his body due to the violent fall. The monster in turn began to smash everything around him, driving his fists into the floor where the guy lay. After that, he sat on the guy so that it would be more convenient to strike him, and started hitting him one by one all over his body without controlling his force. After a few seconds, he left the guy lying on the floor with his face swollen due to large bruises. He also added that it was for him for hurting Xiaoming. The protagonist, although it was painful and hard to be in this body, but his speed and strength are excellent. But it was unpleasant to realize that Fang Kai's soul was almost gone. Otherwise, he might have learned how to use all these powerful techniques. Suddenly, a man's laughter was heard from behind Yelan. Glancing back, he saw a guy walking towards him, looking like he had just destroyed his clone. It seems like every mage has a cloning technique. Otherwise, how else can you explain the fact that everyone is using it? The guy stopped not far from Yelan and asked the monster if he had already had fun destroying his clone with such fury. The guy said that once the soul is gone, the image of the monster will leave the guy's body, and he won't be as powerful as he was all along. Afterward, with a sly smile, he asked the guy to meet him, calling him a divine ghost. Yelan was greatly surprised when he was once again called a divine ghost, while he had no clear explanation for it. The protagonist explained that he only came here to save his friend, and he has no idea what he's telling him. To this, the guy said with a sly smile that the divine ghost was the highest predator among all living things in the universe. He is capable of traveling to any world he chooses. It is a predator that destroys everything in its path, and the world it enters will soon be plagued by disaster. But everything the guy said had nothing to do with Yelan, as he was not a sadist and this world suited him perfectly, and he had no intention of destroying it. Guy assured the young man that no man in the world could possess the body of this ghost because it was against the rules of nature. But there are exceptions, which are that only a divine ghost, which is neither a spirit nor a living being, will be able to take possession of the spirit body. He pointed his finger at Yelan and asked if he had decided to possess the ghoul's body just to cover his tracks. The young man remembered the snake's words about him being a divine ghost, but Yelan immediately dismissed those thoughts as he couldn't believe that it could be true. The protagonist yelled at the guy with words to not talk to him as if he was justice itself. Even if he does turn out to be a so-called divine ghost, he still won't hurt anyone. Yelan reminded the guy that he had taken the lives of hundreds of innocent ghosts, and was even now bullying Xiao Xiaoming, and this was something he would never forgive him for. But the guy did so because he considers everyone else to be small bugs that don't compare to the special company. As a special agent of the company, he has the right to destroy anything he sees fit. Because of his insolence and without any sense of compassion, Yelan was burning with rage towards this man whom he hated so much because of his horrible deeds. He shouted loudly that it was a waste of time to explain to a horrible ghost like him, as he would surely continue to soullessly destroy everyone. After saying those words, Yelan swung at him with all his might, hoping that this blow would at least be very vulnerable to the guy. But the guy managed to put up a defense in front of him. The protagonist was very surprised that the guy didn't even blink an eye when he took a swing at him. He immediately started pounding his fists harder and harder in an attempt to break through the protective wall. But it was all for nothing. He was only exhausting himself. Here, the guy noticed that Yelan still failed against the wall of the living, which meant that he had not yet realized the full power of the divine ghost. Which meant that he could destroy this young man. He immediately waved his magic weapon around him, and then everything around him glowed with a bright firelight. The guy's gaze remained still as confident and determined to take the life of his main rival at the moment. Activating his energy, the guy pointed at Yelan to influence him with his energy. The protagonist immediately flew off some distance due to the strong flow of energies directed at him. Yelan immediately felt that this body wouldn't last long, and it wouldn't be long before it was completely destroyed by this guy. Just then, his condition began to deteriorate even more from the energy beams that gradually destroyed his body. Suddenly it collapsed to the ground, after which its movement was immediately stopped by some kind of rays that stuck into the ground around the monster. And while he was trying to get up, which was very hard for him because of the severe exhaustion of his body, the guy flew high above him to give him a decisive blow with great force. But the protagonist still managed to stand up using his last bit of strength in his body. But when he saw the guy flying in his direction, the young man was immediately gripped by panic and dread that the unexpected might happen now. And now the guy was very close to him. From his weapon blazed bright fire, which he will now destroy the young man with a single blow. At this time, Wenro was watching everything that was happening. Xiao Xiaoming quietly said the young man's name, carefully observing what had happened, hoping that she could withstand this blow. Just then, Wen Rao heard the guy's name and repeated it with surprise, as if it changed something in her perception of this young man. Suddenly, there was a tremendous explosion at the place where the hero was standing. A huge stream of wind mixed with energy went up high into the sky, illuminating everything around him. Then the guy with a happy grin and confident gait headed towards his partner, while behind his back the fire was blazing and splinters were flying apart. Xiaoming tearfully shouted the young man's name loudly, trying to slip out of the rope that was restraining her. But no one paid attention to her worries for Yelan. Xiaoming tried to get out of the rope to immediately go check on the young man's condition, but Wenru asked her to hold still so as not to attract her partner's attention. Although Xiaoming listened to the girl, she didn't even take her gaze away from where Yelan was standing. She hoped to the last minute that the guy was still alive. Dust continued to rise at the site of the explosion. Huge blocks of stone were flying in different directions, and the guy stood and looked at what was happening. When he realized that he had surely defeated that boy, he headed forward with the thought that one problem was solved. But for unknown reasons, a large block of golden stone formed at the site of the explosion, which began to crack and was about to split apart. A strange cracking sound caught the lad's attention. He scrutinized the stone with wonder to see what would happen next. Suddenly, strange spikes began to appear from the rest of the broken stones, and the stones themselves merged into one place, as if magnetically attracted to each other. And so in just a few seconds, a stone monster of incredible size had formed. It looked very powerful, and was obviously eager to kill this guy. When the monster rose to his feet, he turned out to be incredibly tall, because of which the guy immediately began to panic, because he did not expect that he would only provoke the creation of such a monster. Although he realized that the monster would be very strong, but he was not going to give up. He was ready to make every effort to get out of this fight as a winner. The girls at this time watched as this giant appeared out of nowhere, and couldn't understand why this happened. Xiao Ming asked Wenru in bewilderment how this could have happened, but the girl didn't answer anything, and continued to stare intently, trying to put together a picture of the whole situation. At this time, the guy activated his weapon and jumped up high with the words that finally Mr. Divine Ghost appeared and revealed his true self. He struck the monster with his most powerful blade, but the monster put up a hand to defend himself so he wouldn't hurt his body too much. After such a violent collision, the ground began to shake, the rocks shattered into separate pieces, and the road broke. The powerful explosion affected both sides. Each of the boys felt in different ways the pain and destruction. The giant took the lad's huge weapon blade with one hand, which was given to him with ease, after which he swung and hit the guy's body with all his might, causing him to even lose concentration over himself, which happened for the first time in this fight, but he still managed to land calmly and without severe injury. He stopped on his feet in front of his suitcase, from which bright rays were emanating. He decided to go to extreme measures and use a weapon that should do some damage to the monster. The guy slipped his hand into his suitcase, after which he pulled out a large, unusual assault rifle that would be many times stronger than his own weapon. Suddenly, sharp shots were heard, one after another, not stopping. The guy was ready to fire all the bullets that are designed to destroy souls, despite the many bullets that hit different points on the golem's body. It though heavy, but it continued forward despite any obstacles. Soon, a wall of dust and smoke rose in front of the guy, because of which he could no longer develop the golem, but continued to fire bullets blindly, knowing that the monster was out there somewhere. And so he lowered his weapon as he realized that even soul-resolving bullets couldn't handle this golem. The boy turned around, giving the monster a worried look. He turned around, giving the monster a worried look, and then he thought of another way to get rid of the monster. He moved up to be closer to the monster and pointed one hand at it, from which he was about to release energy. Suddenly, a blinding light and an incredible amount began to emanate from his hand. He continued to destroy the monster with a sly smile, with the certainty that it must torture him. Ahead of him, the guy made a sort of wall, which he thought should prevent the golem from getting close to him. It should slow down his movements. But suddenly his hope was dashed. The golem managed to put a fist through his wall, which sent the guy into shock. The guy couldn't believe that a monster could pass through the wall of the living. He couldn't think of any reasonable explanation for it. Suddenly, there was a violent explosion due to the monster hitting the guy with great force, which abruptly stopped the flow of energy. Falling to the floor where everything was destroyed, the guy immediately looked at the golem with horror. The monster took a high jump to get close to the guy. And now the golem was quite close, and it seems like it was about to step on a guy who was fragile compared to him. Suddenly, the guy looked bloody, as if something had pressed down hard on his body. And while the monster landed one blow after another on the guy, the girls watched in silence. Soon the monster calmed down and everything became quiet. There was a lot of dust and devastation around. Xiaoming was worried about Yelan, whether something had happened to him while he was in the body of that crazy golem. Suddenly there was a loud cry from the monster, in which apparently the emotion of rage flared up again, despite the fact that he had managed to deal with the guy. After which, feeling all the might in his body, he made a high jump to move to another place. Suddenly he pointed his fist towards the girls to destroy them as well, following the guy. Xiaoming couldn't do anything about the impending danger. She could only hope for luck or take the hit. Just then there was a massive explosion at the place where the girls were. It already seemed that the monster had really destroyed them. But Xiaoming felt a cold wind in her face to her surprise, with which the dust particles mixed with the rest of the debris crashed into her. She was sure something irresistible was about to happen, but something went wrong. She opened her eyes abruptly to rush to see what had actually happened. Just then, she saw Wenro using her energy to keep the monster at some distance so that it couldn't get close to them. She commanded the golem with a dominating gaze to stop destroying everyone. And just because it managed to defeat a special company agent doesn't make it invincible at all. It was as if the monster didn't hear the girl. He was still standing with his fist pointed at her, but he was prevented from striking by the powerful wall the girl had activated. Wenro looked him straight in the eyes and tried to convince him of her words, to revive his real feelings rather than the stone mightiness beyond which he felt nothing. She seemed to have succeeded in getting through to the golem. After her words, he suddenly stepped back a bit. But Wenrao didn't remove the protective wall for her own safety. The monster slammed his fist into the floor with incredible power, instead of striking at the boys. It was a way to release the emotions that were overwhelming him and preventing him from thinking clearly. Xiaoming was delighted by Wenru's power. After all, she had never used her strength to its maximum when there was a battle between them earlier. Suddenly, there was a loud roar from the monster that created a sense of unease. It was as if something was bothering the golem that it couldn't deal with. This greatly frightened Xiaoming. But Wenrao unraveled the rope on the girl with a heavy sigh, as if she was trying to endure all the pressure from the monster. She knew that Xiaoming had a bunch of questions for her, but this guy had lost control and was now very dangerous. She promised to discuss everything as soon as she could bring him to his senses. Wenru lowered her two hands at waist level and began her transformation. Her appearance changed beyond recognition. but her gaze was still confident and cold-blooded. After that, the energy spirals around her body began to spin around her body, which she controlled. Through the strong airflow, Xiaoming managed to notice this phenomenon called the Ring of Bloodlust, which said that the girl was a divine monster. But Wenrou's reaction to the question was not cheerful. She said that whether it was a divine monster or a divine ghost, they were all just stupid. Even though Wenrou is hiding in the Celestial Company, she still can't get rid of the agents of the Celestial world. She swung a sharp punch right at the monster's face. Her strength was ample, and even more than her partner, who was ranked above her anyway. From her blow, the golem lost its balance and was thrown a great distance and with tremendous force. She said with certainty that this goofy divine ghost wasn't really that invincible. He, like all the guys, turned out to be a bully who had too much power dropped on him. With each strike on the monster, its damage became less and less, and after the last powerful blow of the girl, its damage decreased by as much as 20%. Golem took all the power in his fist and with a strong swing directed it at the girl. But she was confident in her strength so much that even so she did not move. She slowed down the guy's punch by making a protective wall in front of her, then kicked him in the stomach and thus reduced the damage by another 15%. His body was thrown back so much that he bounced off the ground a few more times and eventually his strength decreased even more. Soon his power was equal to less than half, but despite such a small power he continued to do battle. Wenrou decided to fight him as hard as possible to quickly withdraw the guy from the giant's body. She headed towards the monster with a confident gaze, and when it was quite close, the girl again gave him the strongest blow with her foot. When the giant's body was a great distance away, she began to sink to the ground as she continued to unleash her power on the monster. And now, finally his damage was only 1%, about to be destroyed. He felt pain all over his body and could no longer fight. Wenrou walked over to him and stepped one foot on the powerless body of the monster. She had a look of confidence and superiority in her eyes. When things finally subsided, Xiaoming mustered up the courage to get closer to the monster, hoping that Yelan was all right. Wenrou reassured the girl that the guy can't just die like this. He was now using the same forbidden technique as Feng Biao to continue the battle. Right now, Xiaoming was wondering why Wenrou was helping them if she came from a special company. The girl asked her a counter question. Is Xiaoming not from the heavenly world? But even so, she is also helping him. Wenrou looked away with sadness in her eyes, and after briefly thinking about it, she said that they probably reasoned the same way about the situation, but it was too early to think about it. At this time, her partner from the special company was lying on the floor, who hadn't given any signs of life in quite some time. Wenrou decided to approach him to check on his condition after such an ending. She crouched down next to him and started releasing warm energy into the guy's body to see if he was alive. Xiaoming watched the actions of the girl as well. She was very sorry that things happened like this, and the fact that there might even be doom. But Wenrou came to her with good news about them both still being alive. But it's going to be a challenge to sort out all this mess. The girl inquired how she was going to conceal it from the special company. For under the circumstances, it might cause difficulty, if anything could be done at all. According to Wenrou's words, hiding it from the special company won't be as hard as it seems. But that's only if her partner doesn't say anything when she returns to headquarters. The only problem left was to somehow keep him quiet. But she didn't even know how to do that. Xiaoming wondered if they couldn't just make it disappear forever, which might just get rid of the problem in the human world. But if he disappears, the company will send a new agent to investigate, because they can't hide everything for too long. It's all going to happen sooner or later. But the girl continued to argue that one could easily cover up what happened after he passed out. She offered to tell the large company that the divine ghost had become uncontrollable, and she had no chance to handle the enemy to escape with him. This story can help disguise Wenrou, and then no one will reveal her true colors. Wenrou held out her hand with the words that she was right about that, but there was one nuance to it. The girl came close to Xiaoming and threw a cold gaze at her, while Xiaoming looked rather alarmed by the girl's gaze. After which Wenrou swung her sword at the ghost. She did so when she could make Xiaoming believe her and decided to act stealthily. Xiaoming started coughing up blood from the strong kick to her stomach, causing a sharp pain to shoot through her entire body. Xiaoming did not expect such a treacherous act from this girl. Xiaoming fell to her knees, clutching her injured stomach. She couldn't even think that this woman would be so devious before, as she had already started to trust her. Wenrou considered her the one nuance that might not make it work out, and all because a special company wouldn't waste time looking for a divine ghost. The girl asked Wenrou with aggression. Did she really think that the girl would be able to harm the divine world? After all, such a thought occurred to her because Xiaoming was in the human world. But despite Xiaoming's words, Wenrou stuck to her opinion. She gave the girl 30 minutes, and once the time was up, her soul would disappear forever. Wenru was sure that the girl would do it for her own good, to save her soul, or to snake that crazy ghost. Xiao Ming looked after the girl who was leaving. She was depressed and felt devastated. The monster that Yelan had possessed was lying next to her. The giant was completely defeated and no longer had that power. Inside his body was Yelan himself, who had been lying unconscious for a long time. And now, the young man had finally left the monster's body and finally found his true appearance. The girl put the guy in her lap to have one last moment with him, before they would most likely never meet again. Suddenly, the young man began to regain consciousness. His eyes opened slightly, but he still couldn't see where he was, as everything around him looked cloudy. The young man was very weak and unable to stand up. He was beginning to realize his body little by little. The girl was very happy to see him alive. That was the most important thing to her at the moment. The guy looked up and saw a smiling Xiao Ming in front of him. But due to his poor condition, he saw her vaguely and didn't fully realize what was happening to him. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck to reassure him and show concern for the young man. As Yelan immediately realized that he was lying on Xiao Ming's lap, he also recalled the last moments from his life, which made him panic. The guy jumped to his feet and started looking around in a panic, trying to find the people from the special company he needed to hide from. The girl asked in surprise if he remembered what had happened. Her voice still sounded gentle and caring. The last thing the guy remembered was the fight with that man from the big company. He still looked like an insurance agent, but during the fight, it was like his consciousness had blacked out. Seeing the devastation around him, the guy asked what happened here and why those people left. But the girl only cared about one thing. She looked down at the floor with a devastated look, saying that she couldn't be near him anymore. The young man asked with a shocked look, wondering if she was leaving because of those two guys from the special company. But Xiao Ming couldn't really explain anything to him as time was coming to an end. Her body was becoming more transparent, indicating that her soul was gradually disappearing. The girl realized that these were the last moments she was spending next to this guy, who in such a short time had become very dear to her, and was the closest person to her. She was incredibly sad to leave him, but the girl had no other choice. She decided that since these were the last minutes, she should do what she had been hiding for so long. The girl flew closer to the boy and gently circled him by the neck. The young man stared at her dumbfounded, waiting for the next gestures. Suddenly he felt the gentle touch of her lips on his lips. His heart started beating like crazy because of excitement and surprise. The guys stood under the bright lights that added romance to their kiss. The young man's gaze was very surprised. He clearly didn't expect Xiao Ming to act like this, but the young man had the same feelings for her. When she pulled away, their gazes met, and Xiao Ming said quietly, and with a note of sadness, that it was time for her to return home. She asked him to protect himself by any means necessary, and about the special company, he could worry no more as they would not capture him. Her soul began to slowly ascend to the heavens. Yelan reached out to her in an attempt to touch her for even a second. This gesture meant that he didn't want to let the girl go. He managed to touch the girl's hand, which was the last touch he had had in a while. When the girl's soul was already too far away from the guy, he screamed her name, but there was nothing more he could do. He inquired when she could come back to him. The young man hoped it would happen at all. But Xiao Ming only smiled gently back at him. She knew that it wouldn't happen again, but she didn't want to upset the young man. All the guy had to do was watch his first love slowly fade away, and there was no guarantee of their meeting. Yelan shouted one last time for her to be sure to wait for him, and never forget him. He promised to be sure to find her when he learned how to travel to the celestial world. But in the sky, it only flashed its brightest star, which took Xiao Ming with her to the other world. The young man with incredible sadness said her name for the last time. For all this time, he had become strongly attached to her, and losing the girl was morally very hard. He realized that Xiao Ming would obviously not return like back then, which brought on a great sadness. Even though Xiao Ming didn't tell him this, but the young man was sure that she was forced to return home to save his life. This was when he felt hatred towards the people from the special company. It wasn't easy for him to pick up such a beautiful girl, and now they had taken Xiao Ming away from him. Suddenly he heard strange loud noises that caused splinters to appear. The young man wondered what this was going on now. Perhaps someone was in danger there and they needed help. He headed straight for the building from which loud banging noises were coming. Running inside, he saw the same stupid guard strangling a foreign ghost while a brave girl was still lying unconscious nearby. What he saw shocked the guy. He hadn't even thought of these guys before, but it seemed that he had yet to deal with them. That's when he was spotted by a furious guard who hates Yelan for deceiving him and for daring to engage in a fight with him. He immediately headed towards the guy, swinging the bat at him while yelling that he had finally managed to find him. But before he could react, Yelan slammed his fist into his face with a sharp movement. His punch was strong, causing the guard to lose his balance for a while. The protagonist started yelling at him and asking why he was trying so hard to fight back against others when his boss had long since been destroyed. Here the guard started sobbing, explaining that this was his first job since he joined the company, and now his boss appeared to have been destroyed, and the company would likely fire him. Yelan sincerely did not understand his position. The guard was a ghost, and they shouldn't have to work, or even worry about whether they would have a job or not. Suddenly the young man felt a vibration in the floor, after which the walls immediately began to shake, as if a strong earthquake had begun. According to the guard, it wouldn't be long before the array and everything inside that array would be destroyed. All because that guy's soul had disappeared, and everything was held precisely by his energy. Yelan looked at him again with pity and asked if he was still worried that he might die since it had already happened, and now he was just a ghost. The ghost began to say that after the array was destroyed, no one could survive. Even the ghost would turn to dust, causing him to be gripped by intense panic. The protagonist looked around and saw an exit to the outside at the end of a large room. He then said that it was for nothing that the ghost was saying that no one could survive, as their exit was quite close and they just needed to speed up. The young man began to act as he had done before. He started reincarnating as a ghost to have more power and skill. Already after a couple of seconds, he was in the body of a foreign ghost, which opened more opportunities and advantages for him. The first thing he did was tie the girl and the guard together so they wouldn't go anywhere, and it would be easier for him to take them with him that way. He took hold of the other end of the rope and began to enter the mirror that would move them to safety, which was a long distance away. Pulling the guard along with the girl, they all ended up in a place that was between two sides of the world. Plopping the guys down beside him, he started to think about where it would be best to get them, but a glance at the girl made him realize that she needed help the most right now, as she was poisoned. Yelan decided to take them to the nearest hospital where she would be treated. Looking out of the looking glass slightly into the hospital restroom, he found that there was no one in the room, which meant it was safe to move the others in here. He immediately dragged the bound guard and girl behind him, throwing them to the other side of town. Yelan sent a guard to the company to tell them about the death of his boss, and here he will handle saving the girl's life by himself. And to make the ghost react faster and not slow down, he kicked it with all his might. After the impact, the ghost flew into the wall, flying through it and into the street. His soul was thrown straight into the sky, where there was a special company, where he had to go. The last words of the guy was that he promised to someday return to him and take revenge. Now that the young man was in a safe place for himself, he no longer needed to be in that scary ghost body, but he couldn't let her run around and scare everyone. To think it over well, he decided to leave the ghost's body first for more convenience. He began to ponder where he should put the Bloody Mary, who stood nearby and watched the guy without any emotion. Just then he remembered the existence of the ghost pill that was still with him. He figured that if a lot of ghosts were consumed by this pill, it wouldn't take up much room in it either. Tilting the ghost, he began to fold her body into this pill, but it took effort. Soon her body was almost inside this little ball, which she would be in for a very long time. At last, the young man managed to place it in a transparent tablet, after which he slipped it into his pocket. He approached the girl, who was in quite a bad state. She urgently needed medical attention. The poisoning even made her fever rise. Yelan picked her up in his arms to carry her to the doctors. Suddenly there was a low moan from the girl's exhaustion. A smirk immediately appeared on the guy's face, after which he said that he hadn't noticed it before while he was fleeing, but now he had seen everything, which was very interesting to him. He left the restroom with the idea that he'd better not look at it unless he wanted himself a nosebleed, which could come from constantly tilting his head down. Suddenly he noticed a nurse walking by and was ready to call out to her, but something stopped him from doing so. Just then, the young man realized that the doctors would not be able to help him, as he would have to tell the cause of the poisoning. But they would take him for a madman, even if he told the truth. Suddenly he saw that the girl had opened her eyes and asked when she had woken up since he had missed that moment, to which the girl said she had just regained consciousness. The girl's first questions of interest were who the guy in front of her was, where she was, and how he had brought her here. The guy was ready to hear such phrases, which seem to be the most famous philosophical questions, as they are hit upon by anyone who comes to his senses after a long blackout. Yelan decided to play a joke on her, because he said he was just an ordinary kind passerby, who saw her lying unconscious in the street, and decided to take her to the hospital. Then the girl remembered that she had been poisoned by a ghoul, and the doctors who worked here wouldn't be able to help her. She asked the boy to help her make a phone call, but the guy left his phone for his own safety, so no strangers would know his number. The girl's phone was in the back pocket of her jeans, but she couldn't move her hand, so she asked Yelan for help. The girl's condition was quite bad. At moments she could fall because of a sudden loss of consciousness. Once again she couldn't stand it this time, so she piled on top of the guy with her whole body. Thankfully he managed to grab her in time, wrapping his arms around the girl's waist to make it more comfortable to support her. Taking his phone out of his pocket, the young man tried to look for it as long as possible to touch the girl's buttocks for longer. She immediately realized exactly what he wanted and sarcastically asked if he was done groping her. then demanded he finally pull out her phone. The young man immediately remembered that you can't risk your life just to touch a beautiful girl. Besides, when that girl could rip anyone's head off. Taking her phone in his hands, he examined it admiringly as it was the most popular and expensive firm, more specifically, more expensive than 10,000 yuan. The moment he picked up the phone, there was a call coming in, so the young man answered it and immediately heard a worried voice on the other side asking Xiao Yi if she was all right. When he heard some guy calling the girl's name, he handed her the phone saying that her nephew was calling her. The girl immediately told him that she'd been poisoned by a ghoul and was now in Seihi's hospital and asked him to come quickly. She sat down on the bench with a sad face. The guy decided to support her, so he slightly embraced the girl so that she did not feel lonely. The girl explained that her name was Yang Xinyi and she was talking to her mentor, whom she called Shi Xiong. Ye Lan humorously appreciated her name, saying that she automatically became more respected than those who addressed her, as her name in China translated as auntie. The protagonist decided that since she had already called someone and they would be coming to help her soon, he could go ahead and deal with his pile of cases. But just as he stood up and was about to walk, Xin Yi's voice immediately sounded, asking him to stop. The girl asked to stay with her a little longer, as her condition was very weak now, so she did not want some rascal to come and take advantage of her. But the idea of staying near this girl and disturbing her seemed very silly to the guy, because not long ago she wanted to cut off a man's head. Yelan reminded the girl that she didn't look older than him at all, and she wanted to be watched by a high school student. It was quite strange. But when the guy called her Dajie, which meant referring to her older sister, Xin Yi became very angry, as considering her for a grown woman seemed offensive and unacceptable. But she immediately smiled so as not to scare the young man off even more, and explained that she had only recently graduated from the institute, and was only 3 years fearful of Yelan, because she asked not to be called that. Yelan didn't want to address her by her name. It sounded like he was her nephew. So without deviating from his stance, he called her Daji again, and asked her to sit in the hospital. Xin Yi didn't want to let go of the guy's hand. The girl kept trying to convince the guy to stay with her, pointing out that she was very scared to be here alone. Yelan still managed to snatch his hand away with the words that he really had business to attend to and couldn't waste time. This girl seemed too cruel to the young man. As the boy was about to leave, he suddenly heard loud and quick footsteps coming from behind him at the other end of the hallway. As soon as that cocky stranger was nearby, Yelan immediately stood in front of the girl, protecting her from the stranger as he looked flustered and might be out of place. But the guy swung at Yelan's face and shouted, chasing the young man away so that he wouldn't interfere with his hurried business. Yelan was not going to tolerate being treated like this, with this being an extreme stranger who was already spreading his hands. So the protagonist swung at him, making a half circle around him so that the blow would be stronger, and followed that up by hitting the guy as hard as he could. His blow was incredibly powerful, and the guy was thrown far to the back of the hallway. But the stranger was familiar with magic, so in order not to fall and injure himself, the guy quickly reacted and activated his power. Standing in front of Yelan, the guy stared at him with a murderous gaze. He appreciated Yelan's work, after which he said that it wasn't surprising at all that he managed to offend his Shimei, which meant his favorite person. The protagonist could not allow himself to be called someone who had hurt someone. The young man assured the guy that he was just a conscientious passerby. Liu Zheng clarified with a surprised look. Wasn't he the one who poisoned the girl, and he had attacked him for nothing? He immediately ran up to Xiao Yi without noticing that he had snagged Yelan. He began to question about what happened and who dared to harm her. Watching these tendernesses, the young man decided that it seemed that this crazy couple needed to be alone and discuss everything, so he better leave, which he was glad. While the guys were hugging each other and the guy was offering his condolences, Yelan started to quietly leave, trying not to attract their attention. He soon managed to escape from the boys and returned to the men's room where he had unfinished business. He took out a ghost ball from his pocket and began to unseal the foreign ghost from it so he could use her ghostly body again. Suddenly, a thick white mist erupted in the room from which the body of a ghost appeared. Without wasting any time, the young man immediately began to become all over her, which the ghost clearly didn't expect by the surprised expression on her face. He started to walk into the mirror to get away from these guys. This way he hoped not to be seen by anyone who could catch him. But as soon as he was in the looking glass, which was the place between the two places in the world, he heard a knock on the mirror. It was the girl's mentor asking him to come out for a while. The young man looked in their direction with slight surprise. He didn't like the fact that these people were interfering with his business. This made the guy very angry, because he didn't think at all that Xiao Yi knew about his ability. He was sure that she had woken up and peeked while he was saving himself. Suddenly, Liu Zheng started to electrocute the mirror he could control. A girl with a worried voice asked what he was doing, but it was like the guy didn't hear her. He continued to stand his ground, as if he wanted to hurt the guy he thought was responsible for his girlfriend's injuries. Suddenly, large cracks went down the mirror, Some shards fell with a loud clatter and shattered on the floor. At this time, Yelan was in the looking glass. Seeing this, he was immediately gripped by panic from not knowing what was going on. Small shards began to fly towards him as well. He reached out in an attempt to catch one and examine it more closely. This same early morning at Numero Daos High School, there was business going on that no one should find out about. In the restroom, the body of a foreign ghost abruptly flew out of one of the mirrors, causing the mirror to shatter into small shards. Following the ghost, Yelan flew out as well. The guys collapsed on the floor, hitting their bodies and couldn't realize what had just happened. But the worst was over. The young man had almost died at the very last moment, but luckily he knew about the existence of the mirror in the bedroom. Based on this situation, the guy concluded that in the future he needed to be extremely careful traveling through mirrors, as this time was very dangerous. He looked at the surprised look on the ghost's face, who was staring at one point, and wondered if she was okay. This Bloody Mary looked too smart. Earlier, she had said a couple phrases in a foreign language when he caught her, but now she couldn't say a word. When the guy decided to move away, the ghost immediately followed him, but Yelan ordered her to stand there and not move. The girl obediently sat on the closed toilet bowl waiting for the guy's next order. She did not resist his words at all, but listened to him attentively. Yelan headed towards the door with a very sad face as he realized a lot of things after things had more or less calmed down. Despite the fact that so little time has passed in these couple days, but so much has happened. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden cold wind that blew through the open window, rippling the curtain heavily. Immediately afterward, a flashlight flashed over the guy's head, which was clearly an unusual sign. Yelan immediately decided that it was Qiao Xiaoming who would go to give him definite signs that she was by his side. He immediately started looking around, calling out to Qiao Xiaoming. His hope was down to the last one, that it would indeed turn out to be the girl's arrival. But no one appeared in the room. The young man continued to stand all alone in the midst of the spacious room, watching through the window. The young man walked closer to the window, looking out into the dark streets, and in his eyes was sadness and longing for Qiao Xiaoming. Every strange sound seemed like a sign from the girl to him. As here his bad inner state was noticed by the foreign ghost, the girl also felt sorry for the guy because of everything that happened. The guy immediately dismissed the thoughts of Xiaoming, as she had left, and there was obviously no reason for her to return. Yelan was angry at himself for thinking about her all the time. Still, he realized they were just excuses to keep his hopes up for their next meeting, which he wished he could do someday. Suddenly, his sad thoughts about Qiao Xiaoming were interrupted by a phone vibration that came from his pocket. On his phone, he saw an outgoing call from his mom, which was very strange. The young man realized that a call at 5 in the morning would not keep him waiting for good tidings, which caused a slight anxiety to arise in his body from not knowing what he might hear. But no sooner had he answered than his mother started yelling into the phone for still being in Xinxiang while he should be home because of the vacation, and now he was going to get screwed by his father. Yelan tried to get away with the fact that all his friends stayed in Xinxiang, so he too decided to keep them company for a couple of days, and would come home tomorrow. The woman's voice immediately softened. A smile could be heard on her face, accompanied by the words that it was just a joke due to worrying about her son. She called the guy to come home tomorrow and promised to cook something delicious, and not to say anything to his formidable father. Yelan grudgingly listened to her and said he would come. After the conversation, the guy exhaled a sigh of relief, as going home would help him avoid meeting those guys from the special company. But before he left, he needed to settle some matters so as not to leave a trail behind him that might negatively affect his future events. On the same day, Yelan came to the store of the old man who had gone to negotiate for the sale of the gold coin, and so, after a few days, he finally returned. On the signboard, he saw a talking snake, which he disliked because of its cowardice and treachery. The snake approached him in anticipation of telling him how he had managed to get out of that dangerous place, but the boy turned away from her with the words that he didn't want to talk to her. Suddenly, the snake asked to be taken back because Old Man Liu has returned and called all his friends and is all over showing off his treasure. Soon he is going to cause trouble himself. Suddenly, the door from the old man's house opened and Old Man Liu himself appeared out of it. But to his great surprise, he was being led by the hand by some huge, unfamiliar man in a business suit. The boy immediately recognized Mr. Liu, who was the richest man in the city, but he looked much more energetic when he was donating money to their school, and now it was like he was obsessed. Seeing Yelan in front of him, Mr. Liu was surprised to ask why he had come to see him. When Mr. Liu saw the guy, his gaze immediately became anxious. He said that he remembered him as a student from high school, and he even remembered his name. Yelan was puzzled by what he said. He couldn't understand why the richest man in the city knew him personally, since he was just a nobody to him. Old Man Liu said with surprise that he had thought all along that the young man was just joking when he said he was from Xinxian. Yelan didn't tell the old man much about himself, but thanks to Mr. Louis, the information about him was revealed. The young man decided that he should scare the old man. The protagonist asked Mr. Louis how he knew him, to which the man replied with a short pause that he just saw him in high school. But the guy knew he was lying. Old man Liu interjected to Mr. Louis, "Does he really know this guy, and if so, he doesn't need to ask the old man for a favor since this guy can solve his problems." The protagonist was uncomfortable listening to this, as the old man made him look like some powerful do-gooder. He at once took the old man back to the house without Mr. Louis to have a serious talk with him. Left waiting outside, Mr. Louis only saw the doors slammed loudly in front of him so that no one would disturb them. And while the man was quietly waiting outside the door, at this time, there was a furious shout from a guy in the house who was yelling at the old man because he had started looking for a job for him, something Yelan didn't need at all. But the old man blamed it on the boy's strength, which he thought meant he could handle anything. And the easiest way to get famous was to help the rich. Old man Liu explained that Mr. Liu has both money and connections. If the young man hasn't sold the underworld gold yet, the old man can provide this man to him. Yelan thumped the table loudly, asking the old man, did he really look like a person who wanted to become popular? After all, he hadn't even mentioned it in the conversation. But as soon as his hand touched the table, energy waves started coming out of his palm, which got the guy interested. Suddenly, objects in the room began to rise, and the guy's blue energy swirled around, much to the old man's amazement. A small round pebble appeared in the protagonist's hand and was held in the air by his inner strength. Seeing the transparent pill in front of him, old man Liu looked away in horror, wondering if the guy had destroyed Fangkai Biao. Yelan knew that he needed to scare the old man. Therefore, with a cold look, he told the old man that he appeared to be well informed. The old man immediately asked the guy to hide the transparent pill since he wasn't strong enough to resist him. Without answering him anything, Yelan took a step forward and sat down in front of the old man. Afterward, he asked the man with a sly smile, asking if he was Fangkai Biao's accomplice if he already knew about it the morning after the man's death. The old man at once, with a frightened look, began to assure the lad that he had never had any serious dealings with this man. Fangkai Biao is the underground ruler of Sea City. He's also one of the strongest magicians. Even if old man Liu wanted to be friends with him, Boss Biao didn't even pay attention. He showed the young man on his phone the news about Fangkai's passing, as the information had already gone viral and made a lot of hype on the internet. Yelan read a few comments and realized that Fangkai Biao clearly didn't have a good reputation if everyone was celebrating his departure and saying that he deserved it. Fangkai terrorized everyone in the City of Seas, but none of the mages dared to resist him. Yelan was the first to go against him. Yelan confessed that he had offered to sell one part of the underworld gold to Fangkai Biao. When the old man heard about the other half of the gold, he was incredibly shocked. The main character didn't want so much gratitude from others for what he had done, as he isn't someone who takes a life. But he isn't a saint either. The guy approached the old man and told him that last night he came to Boss Biao's mansion to get his gold back. But the whole mansion started to collapse. He tried to convince Yelan that he was a trustworthy and dependable person. He promised that now no one would dare to steal the gold unless they wanted to end up like Boss Biao. The guy asked not to mention anything about what had happened. He also said that he needed to sell the underworld gold quickly, so the old man shouldn't be delayed. The man with a frightened look kept saying that he understood him and would not tell a word about the incident to anyone. Yelan headed towards the exit with a stern look, but in his mind he was even laughing at the way he was making himself a dangerous person and telling a mysterious backstory. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a vibration from the phone. Old man Liu had a new message. There was information about a live broadcast that said that Fangkai Biao's headquarters had been destroyed, which people were very happy about. After reading this, the old man realized that the young man had managed to find the Kong Kong sect so they could help him hide all of this since Kong Kong was the most famous sect. The guy pretended that he was really doing everything as the old man had described. He asked what the site was about, as he wanted to look at the news too. Liu Daozi showed him the app that the magic community used to read the latest news. He offered to add the guy to the chat room to communicate and share all the groups with him. Yelan agreed to his proposal and immediately asked what else was interesting. He asked to be told everything in detail. Liu Daozi continued to show him all the groups and applications, explaining to the guy in detail. He also mentioned a few other apps that weren't approved by the magic community, unlike all the others he mentioned. After showing a few pictures from these apps, Yelan immediately realized that they were adult apps, hence not approved by the community. But the young man was using the content himself, so he said he just wanted to take a look, even though he was embarrassed to say it. The old man flipped him all the data. They looked at each other with lustful glances. Soon the downloading of the app forwarding ended, and Yelan was now able to enjoy all the content too. They sat down with Liu Daozi at the table, and the old man began to explain to him how to use all the apps. The guys started watching the live broadcast of the girl who was talking about what happened to Fangkai Biao. The old man called this app the one where justice would always be present. The girl who was broadcasting said with a confident voice that they would never let evil go unpunished, and all mages would definitely be brought to justice. Even the chairman of the Magicians Association in the City of Seas praises her. It looks as if their main goal is to raise this girl's status in the magic community. Liu Daozi also suggested that it was likely that this Yang Xin Yu would soon become the #1 girl mage in China. Yelan wondered what exactly he was talking about. Did these people really want to capitalize on her popularity? But the hero immediately dismissed these thoughts, because now the most important thing for him is that the old man helped him sell the gold of the underworld, and he will also get his percentage. The old man kept saying that he absolutely didn't care where Yelan came from or who he was, but he would definitely do his best to sell the underworld gold. The guy listened to him and without any resistance agreed on the condition of not contacting him again. He also reminded him about his snake ghost and asked him to sell it. As Liu Daozi immediately started to say that the young man could take this snake and he wouldn't take a dime for it, his reaction was so sharp as if he wanted to get rid of this snake. But Yelan didn't want to take anything for free because of his Shifu's advice. According to him, nothing in this world comes for nothing, and if he took it for nothing, it wouldn't be nice. Because of this, Old Man Liu said that he could give what he saw fit. The young man thought about the fact that when he was younger, he caught a snake at his house and sold it for $200. And this horned snake could talk, so it would be worth more. He was overwhelmed with the emotion of anger, as he had hoped the guy would offer him a much higher price, not just add another 100. The protagonist, in a slight bewilderment, realized that the old man hints that the price is small, so he offered to throw another 100, because of which the old man was pissed off. But he didn't show his emotions, as he didn't want to quarrel with the guy. He assured him that the snake wasn't that expensive, since it was useless anyway. Yelan put $100 on the table and asked to be contacted in case there was any new news. He then headed for the exit, the old man following him to see his guest off. When they opened the door, they saw that Mr. Louis had been waiting for them outside all this time. Yelan immediately turned to the snake with the words that he had made up his mind, and she belonged to him now. Liu Daozi tapped on the sign to kick the snake out of there and put it in the hands of the customer. But the snake didn't crawl out right away, which caused the old man to start scolding it that it was already useless, and the fact that the guy was interested in it should be an honor. This snake seemed very hypocritical to the guy, as it pretends that it doesn't want to part with its previous owner, while it asked to be taken away itself. Suddenly he heard the voice of Mr. Lewis bowing to the old man asking him to save him. Liu Daozi immediately started shouting for him to stop doing this nonsense, as no one there would be able to help him in any way. As here, Yelan thought about helping him after all. But still, the fact that he recognized the guy was very strange, but this would be a great chance to find out more information from him. He asked the man with a serious look that tormented his house, suggesting that it was haunted. The old man explained that there were no ghosts in the man's house, but some place was terrorizing the place where his ancestors were buried. In the future, it will affect his fate. But after listening to him, the guy turned around saying that he couldn't help as he didn't have time for it, and today he had to go home for a while. Suddenly, Liu Liefei said that the burial place of his ancestors was also located, in Hongqi village, which meant that he and the guy came from the same village. But the young man didn't want to mess with ghosts. Besides, it didn't mean they came from the same village at all. Yelan said that he didn't need his help, as he just needed to find the person behind all this, and talk to him. But the man called himself a law-abiding citizen, so he didn't want to do anything illegal. Liu Daozi wasn't strong enough to help him. A mage who could do everything should definitely be stronger than him. Liu Li began to convince Yelan that he was a professional who didn't worry about fame or fortune. If he helped him solve the problem, the man promised to make a new road to the village. Thinking back to the trip to his village, bad associations immediately came to Yelan's mind. He thought the offer was well worth it, as every time he came home on that murdered road, his body ached terribly, and this way it would be a comfortable ride. The guy decided to think about his offer and asked him to explain where the ancestral burial site was so he could go there and see for himself. The man could not allow his foreman to get into any trouble, so he wanted to escort him personally and offered to drive his car. He decided to walk away from the proposal, arguing that it would be night by the time she arrived, so he suggested meeting at the development near the village hall in the morning. Right after talking to the guy headed on his way to his house while the sun was still shining brightly outside. But he didn't take the bus. Instead, he decided to get to the village using his superpower and fast running. The protagonist made his way home both by road and by scraping through dense forests. And so, after reaching the middle of the forest, the guy looked around carefully to see if anyone was around, and pulled out a snake that turned into a small man. She started accusing him of being a monster that lives in the woods, as she figured they had already come to the right place. The young man couldn't stand the snake's constant tantrums that were weighing heavily on his psyche. He shouted loudly that she was the monster, not him. After which the young man calmed down, and asked the serpent what the divine ghost was, about which everyone is so actively preparing, but no one explains the meaning. Upon hearing this question, the snake was greatly frightened, as if the meaning of this word was something dangerous and creepy. Snake didn't even believe the guy that he hadn't even learned what a divine ghost was in so long yet. The young man tried to convince her that there was no point in lying to him. He is an ordinary man, but for some reason she calls him a divine ghost, which the boy could not understand. Snake began to say with aggression that the divine ghost was the best. He was the only one who could travel through the thousands of worlds they lived in. Yalan asked to stop telling him this story since he had already heard it. The young man suggested to talk about traveling to other worlds, and if he was really a divine ghost, would he be able to go to heaven now? But according to the snake, it's not that easy to do. Heaven is the world of the highest level, where the gods unite and live, so she immediately dismissed the idea as unreasonable. Ghosts are the enemies of all worlds. Going to heaven is literally a pact to his doom for Yalan. The young man wondered if he had no options at all to get there. The girl thought for a while, after which she said that if he was as strong as the monkey god, he might try to wreak havoc in the heavens. By defeating all the gods that live there, he will be able to take over the heavens, and if that's what happens, then the guy will be able to do whatever he wants. The young man was really pissed off by her suggestion, as it's not a reasonable plan at all, as he can't become more powerful than the gods and lead the heavens. This isn't a presidential election after all. Stopping, the girl tried to bring her perception back to normal and asked why he didn't like the plan to take over the heavens. The young man didn't like the snake's silly suggestions, so he threatened to take her back to Liu if she kept talking nonsense. The girl, out of fear of going back to Liu, immediately said there was another option. The guy just needs to get permission to travel from a special company. The main character clarified with a frown. Does the snake mean to say that the special company is more powerful than the gods in heaven? Here the snake asked the guy if he was definitely a divine ghost if he didn't know that either. The special company is the most powerful organization in all the thousands of worlds. Suddenly after the girl's words, a bright lightning flashed in the sky, which was accompanied by loud thunder. The young man looked up at the sky, wondering where the thunder had abruptly appeared from on such a sunny and warm day. The snake tried to divert the guy's attention by asking why he decided to go to heaven, but Yelan didn't trust this snake as it talked too much. The guy said with a disgruntled look that he was just going there on vacation and the snake shouldn't be concerned. After his words, he said that he had one more important thing and threw a transparent pill to the side. Suddenly, there was a small explosion, after which a foreign ghost appeared out of the thick smoke. Upon seeing her, the snake with a dazed look asked why she was still here. The main character didn't want her here either, which is why he needs the snake's help to get rid of her. There are many ways to do this. The snake offered to boil it, to sell it, for evil spirits like her. There are many uses. When she started talking about her Shifu's ghost manipulation, Yelan immediately asked her to stop talking nonsense and talk about how to apply all those methods. But the girl couldn't apply all of this on her own, since only mages do such things, and she had just seen how old Shifu Liu handled all the ghouls. The guy wondered how many lives she had accompanied Old Man Liu, but the snake tried to convince that she was just an ordinary snake. The young man realized that she was lying and shouted for her to tell the truth. Otherwise she would go back to Old Man Liu again. She knew it would be useless to lie, so she confessed that she had been serving him for about 10 lives. She had been tamed by Old Man Liu's great-great-great-grandfather back in the day. The guy was very surprised at the realization that she was now about 100 years old. He also recalled that Madam Whitesnake also lived 100 years and was able to control the weather. His words maddened the girl. She claimed she was still small for such a thing, but when she grew up, she too could control the weather and travel worlds. The guy waved his hand with the words that as long as she grew, even the earth would be destroyed, considering she was already 100 years old and still small. Finished talking about nothing, the young man ordered to come up with an option for them to get rid of the Bloody Mary, and if the snake didn't have any ideas, they'd better stick it in some container already. The girl promised to teach Yelan how to draw talismans, and then he could draw them on the containers where he would store the evil ghouls. The snake took a stick and began to draw hieroglyphics on the ground that were called Evil Aura Blocking Talisman. Watching the girl draw the talisman, the young man found it quite an easy task. Suddenly, the boys saw suspiciously 2 silhouettes not far away, their shadows displayed on the trees. The guys were immediately very frightened as they could not even guess who it could be. The protagonist immediately asked who was hiding in the bushes and was ready to fight. But suddenly he saw a guy and a girl who were in the bushes with no clothes on. The young man crouched down on the ground and saw the girl's underwear scattered in front of him. He said with a wry smile that he had never imagined that such perverts lived here. Apparently, the two had been hiding in the bushes for quite some time. Yelan asked the snake if they could hear their conversation. The girl reassured that many people couldn't see her or the Bloody Mary, But hearing the snake call him abnormal, his mood immediately disappeared. The snake continued her talk and explanation about drawing a talisman. She said that it was a very serious matter and to treat it with great responsibility. In order to draw a talisman, you need to do it with special ink for talismans and make a sacrifice to the god. Cleanse your body, hands, mouth. The talisman should be ready in one stroke, after which it should be sprinkled with holy water, prayed and thanked to the god. The girl once again repeated briefly all the points, namely cast a spell, purification, prayer, more purification, and more prayer. Snake grinned and asked if he had written everything down, as it would likely take him 3-4 years to get it right. The boy had managed to draw a talisman on the metal object while she spoke, then examined the drawing carefully with the idea that it should work. After which he approached the Bloody Mary, who stood quietly as always and just watched. Suddenly he tilted the ghost toward the thing that had the talisman on it and plunged it inside. And at the end he pinned the object with his hand so the ghost couldn't get out of it. The young man asked how he would know if the talisman was working. But the snake dismissed the idea that it would work at all, since he hadn't made a single point. The snake noticed that apparently the talisman had begun to work, since the Bloody Mary had disappeared and did not appear. She grabbed the item and scrutinized the drawn talisman, wondering how it was even possible that it actually worked with an ordinary pen. Yelan asked the snake why it thought it wouldn't work, since if the pattern was correct it should be fine. But he didn't even understand how the girl determined that the talisman was working, to which the snake replied that the evil ghost had disappeared. The young man said that by sensation he felt no evil aura as the snake described it, but it suddenly felt cooler, as if the Bloody Mary was like a cooling air conditioner. Snake couldn't believe that the guy didn't feel any evil aura, and claimed that he was just lying to her. But the hero didn't even have time to lie, since they'd already been idle for so long, and now he had to hurry home, or his mom would worry. The girl was sure to the end that this sloppy talisman wouldn't work, but when she saw how the ghost pill held ghosts, she was shocked. She started asking the guy how he managed to do that without doing anything extra, and claimed that he must have played the whole act out for her. Yelan reminded her that she was just a snake, so he had no point in pretending in front of her. As the boys headed out, the snake reminded them about the thongs they had found and asked them to go get them. The guy said in bewilderment that she was just a snake after all, and if she wanted to do something unusual, she shouldn't do it with people. The girl immediately said that he was talking some nonsense. She was not a person to take their underwear. In that case, Yelan wondered what they were for then. The girl explained that an evil aura surrounds these undergarments, and the person who wears them will either become a ghoul, or his mind will be consumed by an evil ghoul. Plus, they found them near the guy's house. After listening to her, the protagonist was amazed that everything was so connected, but he couldn't have a ghoul climbing around with his house, where his parents and little sister live. The young man went back and picked up the women's underwear with the words that he should definitely get rid of them. Yelan presented the stranger's underwear closer to the snake and asked if she could sense the evil aura emanating. The girl, though it was unpleasant to be around them, but still she could clearly feel the evil aura, and even said that this ghoul had left the world about 5 days ago. The snake asked to keep those underpants carefully, as they might use them to track the wearer in the night. But unlike her, the guy didn't feel anything at all. And now, after so much time, the young man finally wanted to know the snake's name, but the snake was embarrassed, as if it was hiding something, and asked why he wanted to know its name. Yelan asked if there would be any problems if he knew her name. The snake confessed that it didn't have a name. Since Yelan was her master now, he decided to come up with a name for her. The first choice was Ahwa, so that everyone would know that she was a female snake. But the name seemed too old-fashioned for the snake, so she asked if she had a vote to participate in the name choice too. According to the youngster, no one asks their pet for an opinion on whether they like the name their owner gave them, and she's just a snake who doesn't understand animal names. Yelan had purposely given her such a name as punishment for always pretending to be smarter than him. Soon the young man reached his house. When he opened the door to the courtyard, he was already greeted by his little sister. Seeing her brother, the girl ran towards the guy with incredible joy in her eyes. The young man immediately took his sister in his arms and happily spun the girl around. She immediately started hugging her brother and kissing his cheeks. The girl loved her brother very much and missed him while he was away from home. Just then she spotted the snake and delightedly reached out to play with it, much to the lad's surprise as he didn't think his sister could see a ghost. The guy with a stern look ordered Ahwa to play with his sister now, as she is the most important one in their family. Just then, a woman's voice sounded. Yelan's mom heard her daughter talking to someone in the yard and went out to see if she was okay. The boy immediately turned around at the voice behind him while Kian was playing with a snake that was trying with all its might to get out of the children's tenacious hands. The main character complimented his mom on her appearance and asked if she was going out looking like that. But the woman was very angry with the guy for not coming home on time. She said with a furious look that she was going to the village square for her husband's wages. As it turned out, the head of the village called last night and said he had a great job for the guy's father, but it was urgent. so the man left early in the morning. After the woman left, the young man took his sister, and they headed into the house where the girl kept playing with the snake and throwing it on the floor. Ahwa already barely tolerated being treated like this, but the young man wasn't going to take her away from her sister. Leaving the girl to play, he himself went to his room and sat down to his lessons, so that no one would disturb him for the first time in days. But as it turned out, it was also turbulent at home because of the pets in the yard that were screaming and making it hard to concentrate. Upon seeing what was going on in the yard, the guy nearly exploded with rage at the fact that these brazen ferrets were trying to steal a chicken in someone else's yard in broad daylight. Jumping out into the street, the guy immediately ran to save his household from aggressive animals who want to eat his chicken. Fortunately, the young man managed to catch the ferret without any problems. He took it by the body and started to carry it out of the yard. But suddenly he happened to see the ferret's gaze. His eyes looked possessed and were not naturally red in color. Yelan was instantly frightened. His mind seemed to be affected by that terrifying animal gaze. Then the guy started seeing everything blurry, as if in a fog, which continued by fainting, unable to stop it. Yelan froze in place and couldn't understand why he felt so dizzy so abruptly. As he stood there trying to recover, the ferret jumped out of his grasp and headed for the house. But the young man couldn't let him in for daring to hurt his sister. The animal ran into the room in an attempt to hide out of its master's sight, the young man meanwhile running after the ferret to finally catch it. Suddenly the ferret reached the room where little Kian was sitting and playing with a snake. The ferret growled loudly, hoping that the girl would be scared of him and couldn't run anywhere. But fortunately there was a skillful Ahwa beside the girl, who also couldn't let this animal harm the little girl. She immediately swung her tail and hit the ferret's head with it with all her might. The animal flew off to the side and hit the wall, much to Kian's amusement, and she started clapping her hands together, laughing loudly. The girl took the snake back in her arms, who was yelling at Yelan and asking her to immediately get rid of this ferret that had turned into a demon and wanted to take Kian's soul. The boy took the ferret in his hands, this time more securely so it wouldn't slip out like last time. The young man looked at it carefully and noticed again that the animal wanted to influence him with its aggressive gaze, which was affecting the psyche of the man. But the protagonist immediately started beating him up with shouts that if he kept this up, he would soon make a stew off him for dinner. The young man saw how well Ahwa had done as a nanny, so he could safely leave his sister in her care. The snake advised him to find the reason for the ferret's arrival. But Yelan could only speak Chinese and English, and it was unlikely that he would be able to talk to the ghost if they couldn't understand each other. Apparently, this ferret hadn't fully transformed into a demon yet. He could probably understand the guy. Suddenly, little Kian burst into tears, and the snake immediately turned his attention to her in contemplation of how to comfort her. The girl started clapping her hands to distract the girl from the negativity and shift her attention. And so Kian was already laughing happily when Ahwa started to throw off some parts of the snake tail to amuse Kian. Looking at how well Ahwa was doing with her little sister, the guy was very happy to have such an assistant who was great with children. The guy then went outside with aggression and threw the ferret under the house. The animal started to pretend as if it was not breathing, but the guy knew it was a bluff. So Yelan asked him to nod his head if he understood what he was telling him, and if not, to shake it. The ferret got to his feet and waved his head vigorously in different directions, implying that he didn't understand the boy. But this only gave away the fact that he understood the young man well. And to cut the animal's lie, Yelan said that in that case he would need to cook it for dinner since it was an ordinary ferret. After these words, the ferret got very excited and started nodding his head in response to the fact that he understood the guy. After which, the protagonist shouted all over the yard. He gave the ferret 3 minutes to explain why he had sneaked into his house. Otherwise, he would boil a stew out of him. After listening to the boy's cries, the animal went in the opposite direction to try to explain the situation to the young man. Going into a small chicken coop, the ferret took a large nail in it, which he uses as an explanation. After which brought him Yelan so that he could guess the ferret's thought that he was trying to convey to him. Yelan carefully picked up the nail that was covered in chicken droppings, making the guy squeamish about picking it up at all. The young man asked the ferret if it was his thing, to which he waved his head with an innocent face. But there was no way the hero could understand what the ferret was trying to tell him. He warned that he was a man of his word, and if he didn't understand what the ferret was up to, he would just boil him for dinner. Suddenly, the ferret saw a bright blue light shining in front of him that came out of nowhere, after which Yelan too felt someone's presence and strange sounds behind him, which made him feel suspicious and slightly panicked. The young man turned around and saw an unfamiliar bearded man behind him, who seemed to have moved from one place to this one. Upon seeing him, the ferret immediately ran towards the man, indicating that it was his master. The man looked serious and at the same time kept calm. He wanted to talk calmly with Yelan, so he asked to listen and then introduced himself as Fang Yi. When the man called the young man a buddy, it really surprised him, as he was clearly not from this village, and calling him a buddy was ridiculous. But then Fang Yi laughed loudly, calling the guy his buddy again, and said that there was no need to play out this act. Based on what was said, Yalan realized that this ferret belonged to a man, and began to tell him that his naughty ferret had broken into his house and tried to steal a chicken. Fang Yi was shocked by such a statement. He claimed that they now had an issue that concerned people's lives, and the young man was now worrying about some chickens. Yalan was sure that this man was just trying to trick him, and once again demanded to compensate for all the losses right now. Otherwise, this ferret would belong to him. At this time, the ferret hid behind his owner, who tried to calm the guy down and asked him if he knew what the black nail was that the animal had brought him. Yalan examined, after which he said that it was just an ordinary big nail, and he didn't see anything special about it. Then the man explained to him that this is no ordinary nail. These nails are designed for coffins. They are also known as coffin nails, which can hold spirits and ghouls. When the young man listened to him, he let the nail out of his hands with shouts that he now needed to sanitize his hands before touching his little sister. Fang Yi warned the guy to be careful, as these nails lie on the resting place of an ancient winged dragon, and the guy's house is located on the dragon's tail. And then the realization came to the guy that his father had actually made a small fortune, but told the man that his family was actually poor. All because someone planted that coffin nail in a young man's house, and that person is trying to nail the winged dragon. If the dragon can't get up into the sky, it will destroy the soul of the village. After Fang Yi explained everything in detail to the guy and warned him of the danger, taking the ferret, he headed towards the exit. Yalan, on the other hand, acted uncultured and continued to think the man was a strange liar, and his words were hardly taken seriously. When the ferret turned around at the guy and saw his furious face, he immediately ran after his master, frightened. After he left, a snake flew out to the protagonist, which confirmed his thoughts that this old man was lying to him. The young man began to speculate about what had happened, but he could not find an exact explanation. After listening to the guy and his reasonable opinion on the situation, Ahua said with a mocking smile that she didn't even think the guy had a brain that turned out to work. According to Yalan, he doesn't notice a lot of things about other people, but he is definitely smarter than the snake. Just like that, he realized that the snake was beside him, which meant that there was no one near his sister right now. But Ahua reassured the boy that Kian was already asleep. The snake called the girl a holy person, and her life is not in any danger, so she is perfectly safe now. Yalan said with a slight smirk that before this, he couldn't even imagine that Ahua could predict fate. Besides, Old Man Liu belongs to an ancient lineage of feng shui masters and soothsayers, and although this art had disappeared over time, Ahua still remembered some points. The protagonist wondered why she didn't teach him this, considering the old man's business is not going well. But according to the snake, the old man is not ready for it. Which means if the snake knows about feng shui, then that old man was telling the truth, and she just tricked him. The girl confirmed Fang Yi's words. In fact, she had felt it as soon as she walked into his house. This place was indeed blessed by the winged dragon. But the man's story about the coffin nail the snake thought was utter nonsense. She assumed that the old man was trying to use the eightfold soul-catching technique. Yalan asked in bewilderment, "What kind of evil technique is this? Does the old man really want to harm his family?" Ahua asked the guy not to panic prematurely. If one placed 8 pieces of coffin nails in 8 places, they would seal the channels of the wasteland in this area, and it was most likely related to an evil ghoul. Yalan clarified with panic. Did this mean that something terrible was about to happen in the village soon? Ahua had confirmed his frightening speculation, and it would happen regardless of what he was looking for. She had so predicted the beginning of the whole situation for tonight. It was already nearing evening when Yalan and his sister sat down to eat a dinner of rice and other appetizers. The young man ate so fast that even his mother noticed it and asked him to take his time as no one would steal his food. Chewing his food, the boy with a full mouth asked his mom to prepare more food next time, since he wasn't full now. It was very vulnerable for the woman to look at her hungry son. She felt that he was not being fed at all well at school, and was suffering greatly away from home. Yalan decided to find out the information through his mother, so he asked about the village's affairs and important news, such as whether anyone had passed away. The woman replied that most likely not, but according to rumors, the old man Liu Shi wants to build a new house, but the villagers won't let him start building. Because of this, he has a war with the head of the village. Soon it was quite deep night outside and all the villagers must be asleep. Including Yalan, he was sleeping sweetly in bed and loudly slumbering, but then Ahua flew over to him. She started tapping the guy's face to get him to wake up urgently, and thankfully she managed to wake him up very quickly. Snake pointed out the open window and gave a disgruntled look of warning that something was going on outside. The young man went to the window and looked out carefully, asking the snake what could have happened there. But then they saw a strange girl trying to look into their yard, and her behavior was extremely suspicious. Ah Hua said it was a ghost and asked the guy if he knew her, but after taking a closer look, the protagonist realized she wasn't from here. Unexpectedly, he took out the very underwear from the forest and gave the snake a sniff to see if the aura of those underwear was similar to the ghost, but Ah Hua refused to do so. So the snake's first suggestion was to grab her and compare her aura and her aura. And most importantly, Yelan should not let her allow her to enter his house, as bad luck might befall his family if an evil ghoul enters the house. After these words, the guy immediately started to leave the house and stopped the strange girl who was already heading towards him. He instantly ran outside and started looking for the ghost with an aggressive look. Upon approaching her, the guy immediately punched her in the face, preventing her from entering the house and hurting his sister. With that, he grabbed her leg and began to quickly pull her outside of his yard, making sure she wasn't even close to being here. He ran with her to the beginning of the forest and threw the ghost into the bushes, and then he could already exhale with relief, as his family was now safe. When Ah Hua saw the guy capture ghosts without any weapons, she was shocked. The young man himself thought using weapons was a complete waste. Yelan began to contemplate how to compare the auras, and with a lustful smile, he offered to put this underwear on the ghost and see if it fit. But Ah Hua immediately stood up for the girl and said that there was no way they were doing that, then said that she would leave the whole matter to herself. The girl scrutinized the ghost's body and compared her sensations with her underwear, and immediately found out that they belonged to this stranger. She said this with complete certainty. The protagonist immediately grabbed the girl by her shirt and lifted her up to the level of his face. He started shaking her and yelling for her to finally wake up and treating her with fierce roughness. Suddenly the girl woke up covering her wound and asked the master not to hit her and was saying that she was admitting her guilt and was sorry for what happened. Yelan ordered her to stand up straight and not to cover her face, as she was still a ghost and her face wouldn't swell no matter how hard he hit her. After that, he started the interrogation. The first thing he was interested in was the girl's age, name, and the reason for her death. According to the girl, her name is Hu He, and she died because the tomb collapsed on her. Hearing what she said, the guy was puzzled when he realized that she had been a tomb raider in her lifetime. Hu He confessed that she and her team were looting the tomb under this village under the pretext of building a house for old man Liu Shi. The young man remembered his mother's words and immediately ordered the girl to tell him who was in charge, to which Hu He replied that the person in charge was called Li Fang Yi. The boy immediately realized who he was talking about. It was the same old man who had sent the ferret to Yelan's house this morning. Suddenly, an enraged Ah Hua jumped into the conversation, asking the girl if this meant that Li Fang Yi was also a tomb raider. As here, the snake had a completely different question. If this girl was no longer alive, then why didn't she turn into an evil ghoul with grudges? After the girl's answer, things became clearer. According to her, she always knew that she would leave her life in a horrible way once she became a tomb raider. That's why she didn't feel any resentment. The guy warned the girl that she needed to be careful with Li Fangyi even after his death, as he wouldn't leave her alone even here. And as it turns out, Li Fangyi wants her to possess the body of old man Liu's wife and seduce all the bachelors in the village. First, he needs to check the tomb he's going to rob, so he sends Ah Hua home to take care of his baby sister. But Ah Hua was furious that he wants his entire house guarded by an ordinary snake. Li Fangyi is an evil magician, and if anything, she is no match for him at all. The young man decided to placate the snake with nice words about how she seemed capable when she caught that ferret. Plus, she could call him from his mother's phone. The snake instantly jumped off the boy's shoulder and raced home as fast as it could, leaving behind the young man's joyful gaze. Yelan threw one last glance at the snake that was already in the courtyard and about to enter the house. He then turned to the girl with a suspicious smirk, who asked with a worried voice what he was up to. To the girl's question, the guy replied that she would see everything now, whereupon he began to possess the ghost's body. Already a few seconds later, the guy opened his eyes in the girl's new body, something he had even gotten used to during this time. From the feeling, everything was fine, but now he needed to hurry up and inspect old man Liu Yi's house. In this deep night, the young man reached the old man's house, which looked unfinished in some places and with a crumbling fence. Yelan flew to the very entrance of the house to sneak inside and inspect everything thoroughly. He decided to get into the house in a ghostly way so that no one would notice him in any case, so the guy got through the wall. Looking halfway inside, the guy saw one of Liu Yi's subordinates sitting by a deeply dug hole and watching funny videos on his phone. Yelan decided to scare this guy first, hence he gently blew on him from behind to feel the unknown wind. The guy immediately jumped up and looked towards the girl with a frightened look with the realization that she was in the row. But apparently he didn't see Hu He, which meant he wasn't a mage. Yelan asked where their boss was now, but the guy tried to talk the ghost into telling her not to touch him since he hadn't done anything bad to her in his lifetime. The protagonist decided to squeeze out the guy's confession and said that he himself knows what he did back then. The guy started threatening that he had a talisman that his boss had given him, and if she came any closer, the guy threatened to use it. Suddenly, the young man snatched the talisman out of the guy's hands with the words that he wasn't afraid of all sorts of protective things, causing the guy to be completely terrified. How here he fell to his knees and asked that Hu take revenge on the one who was really responsible for her death, according to the guy. He had nothing to do with it. After hearing his words, the young man immediately realized that he, Hu, had not ended her life by accident, and the whole thing was actually a setup. The boy was in tears and begged for forgiveness. Suddenly, a cold and strong wind blew in from the window, which meant a not-so-good end to their conversation. After hearing the whole truth, Hu-Hee started to turn into an evil ghoul due to the fact that she developed grudges against these people, in a way that if it wasn't for them, the girl would be able to live now. Her appearance had changed drastically in a bad way. Her hair was disheveled, and her gaze was filled with rage and a desire for revenge for all the bad things she had done.